Hello everyone. We hope you're doing well. We're doing great, and we truly appreciate your ongoing support. We'd like to briefly address some comments regarding our audiobook series. Rest assured, progress is ongoing. That said, your feedback is vital. If there's a novel you particularly enjoy and want to hear more of, please let us know in the comments. Each chapter requires a financial investment, so we can only continue series that receive strong audience interest. Although we retain core names and plot lines, we make significant editorial changes to enhance clarity, pacing, and immersion. These are not simple recitations. We work hard to deliver a polished, thoughtful listening experience. Without sufficient feedback or engagement, we may need to discontinue a series. So if you're enjoying something, don't stay silent. Your input truly matters. Note, our default audio speed is 3x. If that's too fast, let us know. We're happy to adjust it. Interested in early access to unreleased audiobooks? Visit our Patreon. You'll get to experience new content before it reaches YouTube. Just to clarify, I'm a fan like you. I've purchased these novels and adapted them with care, while respecting all rights and guidelines. For updates, follow us on Facebook and Twitter, X. YouTube update: recently, YouTube flagged some of our content for including mature themes, realistic violence, and darker story elements. As a result, we've decided to stop uploading anything that violates YouTube's guidelines. If you'd like access to the full, uncut versions including the more intense or mature content, you can find them on our Patreon page, where we upload everything first. Available now on Patreon: Shattered Innocence transmigrated into a novel as an extra. Transmigrating over 10,000 years late, I was forced to become a mighty presence. I, the celestial dragon, rule the heavens through the double gate, reigning supreme in countless worlds with peace taming, Tower of God sequence strength, cultivation when you take things to the extreme. Naruto is an Uchiha with cyst. WTF, the centuries-old ancestor in our family take concubine again. Plus 18, Ichi, reincarnated in Bleach as a wizard. Thanks for listening and happy listening. Chapter 1, The Inspection Arrives. The year is 1492 in the sea circle calendar. The waters of the north blue. The sun shone brightly, and a cool sea breeze sent ripples across the water's surface. A warship, its mast towering high, sailed steadily across the sea. A massive sail, emblazoned with the word justice in bold black letters, billowed beneath the snow-white seagull flag. Giant. My giant, I love you. Please accept my feelings. On the deck of the warship, a scruffy-looking Marine lieutenant commander slid in with an exaggerated flourish, dropping to one knee. He held out a bouquet of vibrant roses with both hands, his eyes brimming with sincerity as he gazed at the beauty before him. Standing in front of him was a tall girl with long, wavy black hair. Draped over her shoulders was the justice cloak of a lieutenant commander. She wore a pink tank top with short sleeves, and her lower half was clad only in hot pants, leaving her long, fair legs fully exposed. Lieutenant Commander Tokacake is so brave. Go for it, Lieutenant Commander Tokacake. The moment Tokacake made his public confession, the deck erupted in cheers. Confetti flew, trumpets blared, salutes fired into the air. Someone even raised a banner that read, Lieutenant Commander Tokacake's 38th confession. Fueled by the raucous encouragement of his subordinates, Tokacake was suddenly filled with an overwhelming sense of confidence. He dramatically shook his head, sending a greasy lock of hair flicking through the air, and flashed what he believed to be an irresistibly handsome smile. Giant. Accept my love. There is no man in this world better than me. Giant. Her lips twitched as she let out a quiet sigh. Tokacake, you're a good person, but we're not meant to be. The deck fell into an abrupt silence. The trumpets, cheers, and celebratory salutes all came to an immediate halt. Every Marine turned to look at Tokacake, still kneeling with the bouquet in hand, their gazes filled with pity. For the first time, they noticed just how forlorn and defeated his figure looked from behind. Thinking this, they couldn't help but feel a little emotional. Lieutenant Commander Tokacake has it rough. He's confessed so many times already. Sigh. A few of them instinctively stepped forward, ready to offer some words of comfort. But before they could say anything, Tokacake, who had been perfectly still, suddenly turned his head. Tears streamed down his scruffy face. Did you hear that? Tokacake bit his lower lip, his eyes glistening with emotion. Lieutenant Commander Tokacake, we all heard it. Really, there's no need to be discouraged. That's right, as a man, the Marine scrambled to console him. Giant actually said I'm a good person. Tokacake suddenly leapt to his feet, eyes shining with excitement despite the tears. His face flushed red as he practically vibrated with joy. She finally acknowledged me. Do you know what that means? It means that if I keep trying, next time she might actually agree to go out with me. The Marines. Wait. Was that a compliment? You're a good person, is that really something to be happy about? They exchanged stiff, awkward glances. After a few silent signals, they all nodded and grinned in forced agreement. Yeah. That's right. Absolutely. I knew it. Tokakake pumped his fists in the air, his excitement uncontainable. She's testing my patience. Giant, I finally understand your good intentions. He turned to her with a wide grin. You don't have to test me, you know. We've known each other for so long, haven't I already proven how much I love you? Come on, just give me a little kiss. As he spoke, he puckered his lips and leaned toward her. Bang. A second later, Tokakake was sent flying like a cannonball, crashing into the mast before sliding down like a sack of potatoes. Two bright red streams of blood trickled from his nose, his body occasionally twitching. The surrounding Marines, clearly used to this routine, calmly put away their celebratory props and went back to their duties as if nothing had happened. With the commotion over, Giant sighed and rubbed her temples. She flipped open the military file in her hands once more. Inside was a Marine's personnel record. Name, Rogers Darren. Age, 19. Origin, North Blue. Orphan position, base leader of North Blue Branch. 312 rank, Captain, Marine Headquarters. Abilities, suspected devil fruit ability related to metal manipulation. Specifics unknown. Assessment, highly ambitious, acts decisively and ruthlessly, straightforward personality, holds significant influence in the North Blue, possesses remarkable potential, a suitable candidate for the officer training camp. Selection note, serious issues with personal conduct. At the bottom of the file, rows of densely packed records detailed his achievements in eradicating pirates. Attached to the report was a photograph provided by the Marine Photography Department. Giant casually glanced at the picture, her onyx-like eyes flashing slightly. The man in the photo had black hair and black eyes, with sharp, well-defined features. His gaze was as deep as the night sky, carrying an untamed and unruly aura. This guy is pretty handsome. Almost enough to rival me. Just then, Tokakake, his face still swollen and bruised, leaned in to take a look. Clicking his tongue in admiration, he remarked, "So this Darren guy is the subject of our review?" Giant shot him a glance, noting the 2 watts of tissue still stuffed into his nostrils. She barely managed to suppress the urge to beat him senseless again before responding in a neutral tone, "According to Tsurune, this Darren guy is dangerous and highly capable." She then frowned at the shameless man in front of her. "Besides, this is my mission. Why are you even here?" Tokakake grinned, completely unfazed. "Where you go, I go." He waggled his eyebrows playfully before muttering, "But come on, he's just a captain from headquarters. Why is Chief Staff Officer Tsuru paying so much attention to him?" The Tsuru Giant referred to wasn't just anyone, she was a senior staff officer of Marine Headquarters, a key figure in the forces of justice across the world. Shouldn't the people Tsuru personally took note of be legendary pirates like Whitebeard, Golden Lion, or Roger? Yet this guy was merely a headquarters captain stationed in the 4 seas, though technically 2 ranks above him. But that was only because he had grown up in Manafort and hadn't yet had the time to accumulate enough battle achievements for promotion. If he started taking on real missions, it wouldn't take long for him to surpass this guy with ease. Giant, however, shook her head and said, "No, Tsurune must have her reasons for saying that." Tokakake rolled his eyes. "So if we do find something wrong during the investigation, are we taking action?" As he spoke, he couldn't help but crack his knuckles, looking eager to get started. For some reason, just looking at the photo in the file gave him the urge to punch the guy in the face. He couldn't explain why. But it definitely wasn't because the guy was better looking than him. "No, we just need to report back to headquarters," Giant said as she slowly closed the file and turned her gaze toward the distant sea. The cool sea breeze swept across the vast waters, making her long black hair dance in the wind. She thought of Tsuru's words before their departure. And the rumors she had heard back at headquarters about this Darren. North Blue, the most chaotic of the 4 seas. As her thoughts wandered, the silhouette of a heavily fortified military base slowly emerged from the mist on the horizon. "We're almost there," Giant said calmly. From the warship's observation deck, the sound of a bugle rang out. The loud call carried across the water, and soon, a responding bugle echoed from the 321st Marine Branch in the distance. A signal of recognition. "Prepare to dock," Giant instructed the gathered Marines. The warship gradually approached the port of the 321st Marine Branch. Rows of heavily armed Marines stood stationed on land, forming a disciplined military formation with an imposing presence. This North Blue Marine force seems different, Tokakake muttered as he rubbed his chin, surveying the Marines stationed at the 321st Branch. Though this was the largest and most powerful branch in the North Blue, the 4 Seas Marines were notorious for their low overall quality. Compared to headquarters, the gap was well known and undeniable. Yet something here felt off. Tokakake noted that these Marines carried themselves with a sharp and hardened demeanor. Their eyes were resolute, their movements disciplined, and their equipment, pistols and sabers alike, was all of the highest quality. Judging by their bearing alone, they were no less competent than headquarters elite troops. Something's not right. That guy, Darren, had somehow trained the North Blue Marines to this level? Giant and Tokakake exchanged glances, both sensing the same doubt in each other's eyes. Salute. A young Marine major, likely in his 20s, stepped forward from the formation, his military cap sitting neatly on his head. At his command, the entire unit at the port saluted in unison. Giant and Tokakake returned the gesture before stepping off the warship. Lieutenant Commander Momonga, nice to meet you, Giant said, extending her hand while taking a closer look at the man before her. He had dark purple hair, a stern and sharp expression, and a strong, unshakable presence. As she observed him, relevant details from her intelligence reports surfaced in her mind. Momonga. A lieutenant commander and deputy base commander of the 321st Marine Branch. More importantly, the right-hand man of Rogers Darren. Momonga firmly shook Giant's hand and spoke in a deep voice, "Welcome to our base, Lieutenant Commander Giant, Lieutenant Commander Tokakake." Though they held the same rank, Giant and Tokakake came from Marine headquarters, representing its authority. Naturally, a certain level of respect was required. "We're all colleagues, no need to be so formal," Giant said with a polite smile, though her sharp eyes scanned the area. "Where is Captain Darren?" For a brief moment, Momonga's expression stiffened. He hesitated, almost stumbling over his words. "Captain Darren is still busy." "Busy?" Giant frowned, then suddenly noticed an ornately decorated official ship docked at the far end of the port. Bright, colorful ribbons adorned its hull, and the flag of a kingdom fluttered from its mast. "This is an official vessel from the Iga's kingdom?" Recognizing the emblem on the ship, Giant's expression turned ice cold. She recalled the rumors she had heard about Darren back at headquarters. Her jaw clenched slightly. The ship's lavish design had a distinctly feminine touch, meaning its owner was likely a woman. Could it be? A foreboding sense of irritation welled up inside her. Without another word, she strode forward, brushing past Momonga with gritted teeth, heading straight toward the base commander's residence. Her mind was filled with every single rumor she had heard about Rogers Darren's corrupt, depraved, and womanizing lifestyle. Chapter 2, She is the governor's wife. Darren slowly opened his eyes. A sharp nose, deep-set eyes, sword-like brows, and short, slightly tousled black hair gave him an unmistakable air of presence. He sat up from the bed, his bare upper body covered in rugged scars. His muscular frame, defined yet unrefined, carried a wild and untamed aura. In short, he was very handsome. He glanced at the woman still asleep beside him and chuckled. A noblewoman of the Yada's kingdom, huh? TSK, TSK. Quite the fine experience. Shaking his head, Darren casually reached for the freshly printed newspaper and began flipping through it out of habit. World destroyer burned. World sinks a world government official vessel. The celestial dragons are furious, 200 million Bailey's bounty issued. The world pirates may become the government's greatest threat. The great pirate Roger has set sail again. Last sighted in the weakest of the four seas, the East Blue. The great pirate Shiki the Golden Lion is rallying forces in the New World, attempting to form the world's largest pirate fleet. A battle erupts between Kaido and Charlotte Linlin in the New World, an entire small island wiped off the map. Darren's eyes narrowed slightly as he skimmed through the string of shocking headlines. What a lively era this is. He slowly folded the newspaper, took a sip of whiskey, and lit an expensive cigar, its golden embossed wrapping glinting in the light. The rich tobacco burned in his throat, sending a sharp, invigorating sensation through his body, sharpening his thoughts. Yes, Darren was a transmigrator. But unlike most others, he had no chosen one system, no overpowered cheat abilities. His only advantage was a heightened sense of awareness and control over his own body, something that came from the fusion of his soul with this new existence. It had been 5 years since he arrived in this pirate-infested world, and he had clawed his way up to his current position. The North Blue, though outside the Grand Line, was the most chaotic, most ruthless, and most corrupt of the four seas. It lacked the peace of the so-called weakest sea, the East Blue. It lacked the economic prosperity of the trade-heavy West Blue. It lacked the relative stability of the sparsely populated South Blue. Instead, it was filled with constant turf wars between mafia groups, brutal conflicts among underground factions, never-ending clashes between kingdoms, and rampant pirate activity. All of this made the North Blue a nightmare for the Marines to govern. And in this harsh, unforgiving world, Darren had adopted an equally unrestrained attitude toward life. After all, the year was 1492 of the Sea Circle calendar. This was an era where the world was still reeling from the aftermath of the God Valley incident, a time when the global order teetered on the edge of chaos. Roger had yet to complete his grand voyage and claim the title of Pirate King. The Golden Lion had yet to challenge Manafort and throw away his dignity. Whitebeard was still roaming the seas, gathering his sons, his golden crown-like hair still thick and untamed. Kaido had yet to become the fearsome Kaido of the beasts and was still stubbornly picking fights with the Marines, seemingly intent on getting himself killed. Charlotte Linlin had not yet grown into the monstrous Big Mom, resembling a walking fortress of flesh. She was still in her prime, sailing the seas in search of strong men to bear her children. Shanks was still a mere apprentice. Buggy had yet to rise to prominence. And Monkey D. Luffy, the future Pirate King, hadn't even been born yet. This was a world without the balance of the 4 emperors. A world without the 7 warlords of the sea. A world where only chaos and bloodshed reigned. In this lawless, pirate-infested age, where even joining the Marines was no guarantee of survival, being a Marine was still a profession where one's head was never firmly attached to one's shoulders. Darren himself had no illusions. He could die at any moment in battle. So why wouldn't he live life to the fullest? He had been given a second chance, he wasn't about to waste it. Even as a Marine, he refused to live a miserable life. He would drink the finest liquor, smoke the strongest cigars, and sleep with the most beautiful women. That was his philosophy. Corruption? Degeneracy? Who cared? He wasn't a pirate. He had no need for a good reputation. And besides, in the North Blue Marines, promotions had never been based on morality. Look no further than his former superiors, Borsellino and Sakazuki. Both of them had hailed from the North Blue. Neither of them had particularly good reputations. Yet where were they now? They had climbed their way into Marine headquarters. Graduated from the officer training camp. And now? They were rising through the ranks, widely regarded as the inevitable future admirals of the Navy. Of course, all of this didn't mean Darren slacked off when it came to strength. If anything, he held himself to the same high standards he had when choosing women, strict and uncompromising. With that thought, he adjusted his breathing, focusing his mind as he sank into a deep state of awareness. The fusion of his soul had granted him a strange, innate ability, an almost supernatural level of control over his own body, far beyond the limits of an ordinary human. Over the past few years, he had gradually refined this ability. To quantify it, he had devised a personal attribute system, measuring his progress using a numerical scale based on comparisons with the strongest figures he had encountered. It was an absurd concept. But then again, so was transmigration. And if he could accept that, this wasn't so hard to believe. Stamina, 58.103 strength, 53.831 speed, 57.539 fruit, 71.345 stamina represents the body's defense, vitality, and endurance. Strength refers to pure arm strength, overall physical power, and explosive force. Speed measures movement speed and short-distance sprinting bursts. As for fruit, it reflects his mastery over his devil fruit ability. These numbers are based on specific reference points, with the full value set at 100. For example, in terms of stamina, the benchmark is naturally the strongest creature on land, sea, and air, Kaido of the beasts. With Kaido's monstrous durability, where even advanced haki is needed to harm him, Darren estimated his stamina to be around 90. My stamina really did increase by 0.03. Darren carefully sensed his body, a smirk forming at the corner of his lips. His little experiment had finally been confirmed. After last night's 2-hour campaign, he woke up feeling completely refreshed, and sure enough, his stamina had improved. It made sense. Based on the physiological knowledge he had before transmigrating, moderate exercise boosts testosterone levels, releases large amounts of dopamine, and promotes muscle growth. A 0.03 increase might seem insignificant, but small gains add up over time. Even the tiniest advantage was still an advantage. Yes, this was what Darren had spent years figuring out, the most effective way to utilize his gift. With his precise awareness of his own body, which worked almost like a real-time data feedback system, he could determine the most efficient training methods to push his limits and continuously grow stronger. Just then, swish. A sharp flash of sword light tore through the door. A tall, striking figure with long black hair strode in, her expression icy cold, her entire being radiating fury. Captain Darren, you are a Marine officer, yet you dare to do something so disgraceful within a Marine base. This is utterly outrageous. Jian, gripping a golden-hilted sword, cast a glance at the woman on the bed, who was trembling under the covers in sheer terror. Her eyes burned with rage as she uttered something that left Tokakake completely dumbfounded. That woman is the wife of the governor of the Yeda's kingdom. Chapter 3, I'm just looking out for the people, that's all of this is the wife of the governor of the Yeda's kingdom. As soon as the words left her mouth, Jian's face flushed with a mix of anger and shame. That bastard Darren actually did something so indecent at a naval base. For someone like Jian, who grew up at headquarters and was raised under Staff Officer Tsuru's doctrine of cleansing justice, this was absolutely unacceptable. Especially since her trip from headquarters wasn't just a courtesy call, she was here for inspection and supervision. If news of this got out, it would severely damage the Marine's reputation. Not to mention the political scandal it could spark. Darren, that bastard. He's a disgrace to justice. A total scumbag. But to her surprise, Darren, the very man behind all this, looked completely unfazed. With a charismatic smile on his face, he slowly stood up. Oh, so it's Lieutenant Commander Giant and Lieutenant Commander Tokacake. You've come a long way from Maniford. That must have been tiring. He casually bit down on a cigar and extended his hand. Welcome to North Blue Branch 321. Giant stared at him coldly, making no move to shake his hand. Darren didn't seem to mind. He simply shrugged, pulled out another cigar, and handed it to the curious Tokacake beside him. Lieutenant Commander Tokacake, I've heard much about you. Tokacake's eyes lit up when he saw the cigar. Its intricate pattern clearly marked it as a high-end brand, the kind reserved for nobles. He instinctively reached out to take it, only to freeze when he caught the blazing look in Giant's eyes. Awkwardly, he pulled his hand back. Hey, Darren. Is this woman really the governor's wife from the Yeda's kingdom? Tokacake lowered his voice, whispering the question. Darren just smiled and said nothing. Tokacake sucked in a breath. Bastard. He cursed silently. He'd seen Lady Marjorie's face, mature, alluring, still full of charm, and this guy got to enjoy all of that? Damn it. He was clearly better looking, why didn't he get this kind of luck? And most of all, she was the governor's wife. That status alone. Just thinking about it was thrilling. Ahem. Grinding his teeth, Tokacake muttered, Captain Darren, this isn't really appropriate, is it? His tone clearly carried a trace of jealousy. Giant shot him a glare before turning and bowing deeply to the woman still hiding under the covers. My sincerest apologies, Lady Marjorie. This is a failure on the Marine's part. I'm Giant, an inspector from Marine headquarters. Please rest assured, we will thoroughly investigate Captain Darren's misconduct and deal with it severely. As she spoke, Giant silently vowed to report everything to headquarters. There was no place in the Marines for someone like Darren. Just then, Lady Marjorie peeked shyly out from under the covers. Her eyes, full of charm, flicked toward Darren, who was calmly smoking his cigar, and a hint of bashfulness sparkled in her gaze. In a soft, almost whisper-like voice, she said, Lieutenant Commander Giant, actually, I was willing. I really like Captain Darren. Giant froze. Tokacake was dumbfounded. They'd thought Darren had used his rank or power to coerce Lady Marjorie into this. But now, it turned out she was a willing participant? Wait a minute. Their minds jumped to the official ship docked at the port. This was delivered takeout. Well then, officers from headquarters, let's not disturb this lovely lady's rest any longer, Darren said with a grin. He slipped on a fresh military uniform, draped a broad cloak over his shoulders, and nodded toward the door. Let's head to the office to discuss official matters. This way, please. Branch 321, Base Commander's Office. A massive plaque hung on the gray walls, with the characters for justice emblazoned in bold, sweeping strokes. Darren sat comfortably in the commander's chair, lighting a cigar as he spoke. Lieutenant Commander Giant, Lieutenant Commander Tokacake, give me some good news, has my commission arrived? As he spoke, he casually sized up the two standing before him. This was the first time he'd seen these two future admiral candidates since arriving in this world. Giant was tall, with long, slender legs free of any excess fat. Her black hair was tied into a high ponytail, and she wore the Marine's wide cloak with an air of confidence. Her dark, glossy eyes sparkled with sharpness, and the beauty mark near her lips added a subtle charm. She looked different from her anime counterpart. At this stage, Giant was only around 18 or 19, still youthful and a little green, but already radiating a budding allure. As for Tokacake, well, he looked rough. Standing there with a cigarette in his mouth, hands in his pockets, his eyes kept darting toward the cigars on the desk. He was barely in his 20s, yet he gave off the world weariness of someone in his 40s, a man who aged in a hurry. Both were classic examples of young officers born into elite military families. Darren couldn't help but feel a twinge of emotion. Tokacake's background was relatively humble. But Giant? She was the real deal. Her talent was impressive enough on its own, but her lineage was even more outrageous. Vice Admiral Tsuru, the chief staff officer of Marine headquarters, treated her like a little sister, and even Admiral Sengoku looked after her personally. She was practically raised by the top brass, blessed by birth, skill, and backing. Even the so-called strongest Marine, the legendary hero Garp, was referred to by her as Garp-chan. People say comparison breeds resentment, and Darren could see why. He'd clawed his way up to the rank of captain, while Giant had started her very first mission as a lieutenant commander. And it was obvious, this so-called assignment for Giant and Tokacake was really just a resume booster. Once their term ended in a few months, they'd return to headquarters with glittering credentials and head straight into Zephyr's elite officer training program. From there, it would be a clear path into the Marines' Corps leadership. Envy was natural. Still, it was clear they were young, full of that unique combination of pride and naivety that came with youth. All perfectly normal. Hearing Darren's question, Giant, still visibly annoyed, snorted and pulled out an official document. Congratulations, Captain Darren. As of this moment, you are the highest-ranking officer overseeing all Marine operations in the North Blue. Darren took the appointment letter and scanned it. Appointment letter, effective immediately. Captain Rogers Darren of North Blue Branch 321 is hereby appointed Supreme Commander of the North Blue Marine Forces. A satisfied smile spread across his face. This document didn't exactly change anything. He already had control over the North Blue's Marine Forces, but still, who would say no to a higher title, especially one that made everything easier? Besides, other than Garp, who would turn their nose up at rank? Appreciate the trouble, he said, grinning as he looked up. How long will you two be staying in the North Blue? Giant replied coolly, 3 to 6 months, depending on how long the audit takes. Captain Darren, for the sake of confidentiality, the identities of Lieutenant Commander Tokacake and myself, as well as our inspection team, will remain classified during this assignment. Officially, we're your adjutants. Darren nodded with a smile. No problem, Giant. I'll be counting on you. In this era, the Marine Academy didn't yet have the scale it would one day reach. Instead, elite candidates were selected from the Grand Line and 4 Seas and placed into a training camp model, not recruited straight from the bottom. As a result, the officer selection process was strict, and the audit system was essential. Passing the audit would qualify him to enter the officer training camp at headquarters, where he'd train under former Admiral Blackarm Zephyr, learning the Marine 6 styles of the Marines, and possibly even hockey, to become a true powerhouse. With that kind of background, he could build the political capital needed to skyrocket through the ranks of the Marines. Darren then turned to Tokacake and offered him a cigar. Well then, Tokacake, I look forward to working with you too. Tokacake glanced at the gold-embossed special cigar. Even back at headquarters, he'd never had the chance to smoke something this high-end. Suddenly, the cigarette in his mouth felt like tasteless garbage. Giant. He gave her a hopeful look. Giant rolled her eyes and sighed. Fine, go ahead. Nice. Tokacake lit the cigar without hesitation, happily puffing away with a satisfied grin. Just then, Giant's voice cut through the air, cold and sharp. So, Captain Darren, you still owe us an explanation for what happened earlier. Even if Lady Marjorie was willing, your actions reflect poorly on the reputation and discipline of the Marines. Not to mention, as the governor's wife of the Yeda's kingdom, her status makes this a potential diplomatic crisis. Tokacake's ears perked up. He leaned forward, clearly enjoying the show, his eyes locked on Darren. Hey. Let's see how you get out of this one. He'd known Giant for years and knew exactly what she was like. With Staff Officer Tsuru's cleansing justice doctrine drilled into her, Giant didn't tolerate a single speck of dirt. You cocky bastard. Thinking you're all that. Smoking the finest cigars. Well, to be fair, this cigar was really damn good. Darren gave her a look of innocent surprise. Giant, do I really need to explain? Isn't it obvious? This is public service. Military-civilian cooperation. Cough, cough. Tokacake nearly choked mid-puff, his face turning red. He looked up, stunned. Public service? Military-civilian cooperation? This actually sounded kind of reasonable. Why didn't I think of an excuse, reason, that perfect before? Chapter 4, Even If I'm a Scoundrel Darren. Giant's voice trembled with fury as she glared at the new North Blue Admiral sitting casually with his legs crossed and a flippant look in his eyes. Her clenched teeth nearly cracked from anger, and her chest rose and fell sharply. Before coming to the North Blue, she'd already heard plenty of unsavory rumors about this man. She had mentally prepared herself for the worst. But not even in her wildest imagination could she have guessed that a so-called righteous Marine officer could sink this low. That vulgar, indecent, downright filthy behavior, and he had the audacity to call it caring for the people and military-civilian cooperation. Giant now found herself unable to look at those once uplifting words the same way again. What you've done doesn't just tarnish your own image, it brings shame to the entire Marine organization. You disgrace. To reinforce her point, she turned sharply to Tokacake. Am I wrong, Tokacake? I never imagined caring for the people could be taken this far. Truly. Genius. Ah, right, Giant, you're absolutely right. Tokacake, who had been muttering to himself in a daze, suddenly snapped to attention. His drifting gaze sharpened with feigned righteousness as he slammed the table and glared at Darren. "That's right. Darren, you're a disgrace to the Marines." Darren looked at him with a faint smirk. "So, you're saying you wouldn't want to, Lieutenant Commander Tokakake?" "Of course I would. Wait, no. I mean, of course I care about the people." Tokakake stiffened his neck, his face flushing bright red. Darren chuckled and blew out a stream of smoke that coiled like a dragon, his eyes drifting back to Giant's furious, yet strikingly lovely face. "This was mutual," he said slowly. "Lady Marjorie was happy, I was happy, it's a win-win." "Win-win, my ass." Giant couldn't stomach this kind of twisted logic. Grinding her teeth, she shot back, "But there's no way the governor of the Yeda's kingdom would be happy. If he finds out, do you realize the kind of political fallout this could cause?" "Who says Governor Tyrell wouldn't be happy?" Darren suddenly said with a grin. Giant froze, and then, as if realizing something, just stood there in stunned silence. Tokakake's mouth opened slightly, his face blank. An impossible thought surfaced in both their minds at the same time. No way. Could it be? Darren calmly flicked the ash from his cigar and continued. "Besides, this kind of thing really isn't a big deal. I'm not hiding it. If you two know, then obviously headquarters knows as well. But have you ever wondered, why has no one at headquarters ever tried to impeach me?" He slowly stood up, one large hand pressing down on the conference table as he leaned forward slightly, his posture radiating dominance. A cold, oppressive aura began to seep from him, quiet, commanding, and chilling. As Darren's smile faded, both Giant and Tokakake, for reasons they couldn't explain, suddenly felt a trace of fear creeping into their hearts. Darren looked down at the two Marine second gens from headquarters and said calmly, "Because I get results. And besides, are the reputations of the other Marine officers really all that clean?" The moment he said that, Giant and Tokakake fell silent. They thought of Vice Admiral Garp, sleeping in, digging his nose without a care. Of Admiral Sengoku rambling while talking to goats. And of the two monsters of the younger generation, Sakazuki and Borsellino. One took down pirates with brutal, merciless methods, never hesitating to sacrifice civilians if it meant completing a mission. The other? Well, everything he saw was just so scary, said in that creepy, sarcastic tone. Thinking back, they couldn't deny it, maybe the Marine's image wasn't exactly spotless after all. No. That's not right. Giant suddenly caught herself. She couldn't let this guy twist things around like this. But just as she opened her mouth to speak, Darren waved his hand and cut her off. "All right then, you two. It's time for my training. If you're interested, feel free to follow me, I'll be waiting on the drill field. And if you've got any complaints about how I do things, I'd be more than happy to spar with the elites from headquarters." He stubbed out his cigar, tossed a fresh box of cigars to Tokakake, and strode out of the base commander's office. The door slowly closed behind him. Giant and Tokakake sat in stunned silence for a long moment before Giant snapped out of it. "That bastard. I'm not buying a single word of that twisted logic." She gritted her teeth, pulled out a military dendenmushi, and dialed headquarters. "Giant, what are you?" Tokakake asked, trying to discreetly stash the box of cigars. "I'm reporting Darren's behavior to headquarters." Giant's eyes locked onto the dendenmushi as it rang out with its familiar buru-buru sound. Soon, the line connected. "Buru. Ha ha ha. Giant-chan, you've arrived in the North Blue? How's the environment over there?" A hearty laugh came through, and the dendenmushi mimicked the face of Admiral Sengoku from Marine Headquarters, seagull cap, round black-framed glasses and all. "Reporting in, Admiral Sengoku." "I've arrived at Branch 321, Giant said sternly and methodically. "However, during the inspection, I discovered a serious issue with Captain Darren's personal conduct, one that could damage the reputation of the Marines and even spark a political incident." There was barely restrained fury in her voice. "Oh?" Sengoku's puzzled voice came through the receiver. "What issue?" "As far as I remember, that kid Darren's pretty capable." "Pretty capable?" Maybe it was Darren's earlier line about caring for the people still lingering in her mind, but Giant couldn't help feeling something off about those words. She opened her mouth, cheeks flushing red as she stammered, he. The situation was just too shameful, she couldn't bring herself to say it out loud. Tokakake reached over and snatched the dendenmushi, blurting out angrily, "He slept with the wife of the governor of the Yeda's kingdom." Sengoku. At Marine Headquarters, Maniford. Admiral's office. Sengoku stared at the dendenmushi, watching Tokakake rant with righteous indignation. "Admiral Sengoku, I strongly suggest we strip Darren of his rank and investigate him. That's the governor's wife, for crying out loud. Still full of charm, and stunning." Sengoku's face twitched. "Okay, Sure, talk about dismissing him, we can discuss that. But why do you keep bringing up how beautiful Lady Marjorie is? So that's what this is about, Sengoku muttered. Giant and Tokacake both froze. That's it? Admiral Sengoku. Your attitude. Giant said with clear dissatisfaction. Sengoku scratched his head. Giant, there are things you don't know. That brat Darren does have a lot of issues. Both your sister Tsuru and I are well aware. As for the issue you're bringing up, it's not the first time. Over on Tsuru's side, the Marine Administration and Inspection Department, they've got piles of complaints and reports on Darren. Stacked to the ceiling. Tokacake went stiff, visibly trembling. So that bastard Darren had cared for many more noble ladies like Marjorie? How many times had he engaged in military-civilian cooperation? Beast. He took a few deep drags from his smoke. Giant was equally stunned. Then why was he promoted to the top post in the North Blue? If we let him run wild, the whole sea's going to be a disaster. Sengoku sighed to himself. Giant was still too young, too idealistic. He gave a helpless smile and said plainly, his presence is justified. If Darren can stabilize that chaotic region, there's a reason for it. Giant frowned, unconvinced. But Admiral Sengoku. What about our headquarters prodigies, Rear Admirals Borsellino and Sakazuki? Didn't they both serve in the North Blue? Are you saying Darren's governance was better than theirs? She could hardly believe it. Borsellino and Sakazuki were monsters of Marine headquarters, already recognized as future admirals. Sengoku's mouth twitched. His expression soured as he sighed again. Giant. You still don't understand those two well enough. During Borsellino's time in the North Blue, unless HQ gave direct orders, he barely lifted a finger. Piracy got so bad that HQ couldn't stand it anymore and finally had him transferred. What about Rear Admiral Sakazuki? Giant asked, startled but still skeptical. Sengoku let out another sigh. Sakazuki. Why do you think he was pulled from the North Blue? That guy ignored political sensitivities between kingdoms, disregarded civilian casualties, and used extreme force on every pirate he encountered. He left entire towns and countries in ruin. In the end, over 10 allied nations complained and applied joint pressure on HQ. That's why we had no choice but to transfer him out. Giant. Tokacake. Sengoku pinched the bridge of his nose and said, in short, regarding this promotion, both Sakazuki and Borsellino voiced their support. Darren has earned their recognition. That alone proves his skill and capability. Then, in a tone full of meaning, he added, study him carefully. Chapter 5. Let's spar a little. The Dendenmashi call cut off. In the spacious Space Commander's office, the young and inexperienced Giant and Tokacake sat in stunned silence, staring at each other for a long moment without speaking. Having grown up at Marine headquarters, showered with attention and raised on the most orthodox ideals of justice, they simply couldn't comprehend how someone as corrupt and depraved as Darren could receive such high praise from Admiral Sengoku, the man they revered. Even harder to believe was that the two prodigious and prideful monsters, Sakazuki and Borsellino, had both, without prompting, expressed approval of Darren's strength and methods. And those two? Their personalities, principles, and ways of doing things couldn't be more different, completely opposed, even. This. How is that possible? Giant sat in a daze, murmuring to herself, her eyes unfocused. Everything that had happened since arriving in the North Blue had delivered a massive blow to her pure and innocent worldview. Click. The sharp sound of a lighter snapping open broke her thoughts. Tokacake. What are you doing? You're smoking his cigars? Giant turned her head and saw Tokacake lighting up a cigar. Her fury boiled over. Tokacake flinched. Seeing Giant's icy glare, he stammered, Didn't Admiral Sengoku tell us to learn from Darren? Giant. He told you to learn from him, not to pick up his nasty habits, smoking, drinking, and womanizing. Giant snapped, gritting her teeth in rage. Tokacake quickly stuffed the cigar away, muttering under his breath, I don't know. I think those things aren't so bad. Smoking, drinking, and picking up girls doesn't mean you can't be a good Marine. What did you just say? I said you're absolutely right, Giant. No. I can't accept this. Giant suddenly stood up, a fiery determination lighting up her clear eyes. She clenched her fists tightly. Justice must remain pure. It cannot be tainted by filth. I have to stay and reform that bastard Darren. Help him walk the right path. I can't allow his kind of corrupt and twisted justice to stain the North Blue Marines. Tokacake, watching her burning with resolve, could only cover his face in silence. Though, in his heart, his thoughts were drifting far away. Military-civilian cooperation. Caring for the people. He wasn't even sure what he'd just imagined, but a lewd grin crept across his face. Stop grinning like that. Get to the training grounds. Giant shot him a glare and barked coldly. Tokacake blinked. Training grounds? What for? Training? We just got here, and the whole journey was bumpy as hell. Isn't that too much? Jian reached for the golden blade at her waist, eyes gleaming with sharp determination. That bastard Darren said he wanted to spar with us, didn't he? Her face lit up with competitive fire. Let's see if this so-called North Blue Admiral really lives up to the title. As the headquarters golden child, spoiled, celebrated, and trusted, she had her own pride and convictions to uphold. 321st Branch. Training ground. The sky was clear, and the sea breeze sharp. Dust swirled across the open field. Along the edges stood rows of weapon racks, displaying all kinds of weapons, spiked maces, oversized cleavers, halberds, and more. Nearby were dozens of humanoid stone targets, with a line of practice cannons set up even farther out. On the opposite side sat an old, abandoned warship. Many Marines from the 321st Branch were already in the midst of their routine training, but their eyes kept drifting toward the lone figure at the center of the grounds. Darren was shirtless, wearing only black military pants, doing one-finger push-ups in the middle of the field. 1997, 1998, 1999, 2000. After finishing 2001 finger push-ups with his right hand, he switched to his left. 1, 2, 3, 4. His rhythm was steady, each rep executed with perfect form, a sense of rhythm in every motion. His sharply defined, explosive muscles, paired with his wild and unrestrained aura, made him look like a feral cheetah poised to strike. That was the sight Jian and Tokacake saw as soon as they arrived. I didn't expect this guy to be so serious about training. Jian had stormed into the field, still fuming inside, but she had to admit, typically, Marines stationed in the Four Seas were more lax in discipline due to being far from the headquarters, and their training often involved cutting corners. Aside from the occasional surprise inspection from the top brass, most Four Seas Marines slacked off in their daily routines. She didn't expect Darren, this degenerate and debauched bastard, to be so strict with himself. TCH, it's not that impressive. Tokacake stuffed his hands in his pockets, face full of disdain, though his tone carried a hint of envy. Truthfully, he was a bit shaken too. After a few more minutes of observation, Darren completed another 2001 finger push-ups. You're here. Want to join the training? He clapped the dust from his hands and smiled at the two of them. Under the sunlight, sweat streamed down his chiseled jaw and along the grooves of his muscular body. Paired with his striking face, it created a stunning and impactful visual. Not far off, a few female Marines watching from the sidelines were already starry-eyed and blushing. Even Jian had to blink, no wonder Lady Margaret was so obsessed with him. Not that she was the type to be seduced by a pretty face. But Darren's kind was rare among Marines. She thought of Sakazuki and Borsalino, then glanced at Tokacake beside her, standing there like a two-bit street punk with his hands stuffed in his pockets. In comparison, that shameless scoundrel Darren suddenly seemed a lot more tolerable. Still, she hadn't forgotten why she was here. This arrogant bastard needed a lesson, to remind him not to get too full of himself. No need, Captain Darren. We're here to test your strength. Right, Tokacake? Jian's tone was solemn as she turned to him. Huh? I don't want to. That sounds exhausting. Tokacake blurted out, but the murderous glint in Jian's eyes made him straighten up and immediately change his tune. That's right, Captain Darren. Let's see what you, the so-called North Blue Admiral, are really made of. Oh? Are you sure? A faint smirk curled at Darren's lips. You two are elite from the headquarters, after all. If it's a real spar, I'll need you to go easy on me. His eyes sparkled with interest. Though Jian and Tokacake were still young and far from the Admiral candidate level they'd eventually reach, they were undeniably gifted, prodigies raised under the eyes of Marine HQ's top brass. As someone from the North Blue, Darren was genuinely curious about their strength. More importantly, he'd been waiting for a chance to give these two proctors from HQ a proper beating. In the Marines, strength was everything. Only by overpowering them could he shut them up. If they kept nitpicking and stirring up trouble, it'd make everything that much harder to deal with. Don't worry, Captain Darren. Since you gave me that cigar, I'll go easy on you. Tokacake grinned, his eyes gleaming with mischief. He suddenly realized, this might be the perfect chance to beat this guy to a pulp. Jian slowly drew them to a sword from her waist, her expression cold and furious. Since reason wouldn't work, she'd let her blade do the talking. This lecherous, depraved bastard was about to be taught a lesson. The three of them, each with their own motives, wore matching sinister smiles. Chapter 6, And Not the Face. Dust swirled across the training ground. Darren, Jian, and Tokacake stood facing off from a distance, the pressure around them steadily rising. Yellow sand billowed through the air, and the large cloaks behind Jian and Tokacake flapped wildly in the cold sea breeze. Marines from the 321st branch had all rushed to the scene, surrounding the schoolyard so tightly that not even a drop of water could slip through. Their eyes were wide, eagerly waiting for what would happen next. Vice Base Commander Momonga, do you think Base Commander Darren will lose? A young Marine asked, glancing toward Momonga, who stood with his arms crossed. Wearing his military cap, Momonga simply smiled and said nothing. Losing? That word wasn't in that guy's dictionary. More accurately, the real question was, just how badly were those two so-called golden kids from the headquarters about to get wrecked? So, Captain Darren, who would you like to spar with first? Tokakake asked eagerly, flicking his not-so-full head of hair in an exaggerated, showy gesture. He felt increasingly smug as he noticed many of the female Marines from Base 321 casting admiring glances in their direction. After all, he had been trained by numerous masters back at headquarters. Admiral Sengoku himself had praised his talent. Among his peers, there was no one who could match him. Except Giant. He could already picture it clearly, Darren knocked flat in one clean hit, and the female Marines looking at him with admiration and adoration. The thought made Tokakake chuckle to himself like an idiot. Darren looked at him and shook his head. No. Let's save time. Both of you come at me. Tokakake and Giant both froze. Then, a wave of anger surged in their hearts. This guy. What an arrogant tone. Then don't blame me for being rude. I'll go easy on you. Tokakake growled through clenched teeth. He was determined to show this pumpkin from the North Blue just how strong the Marines of headquarters really were. He bent his knee slightly, and the muscles all over his body visibly tensed. Bang. The ground beneath his feet burst open as a massive force launched Tokakake forward. His figure shot off like a cannonball, streaking toward Darren at an astonishing speed. This was an instant transmission from the Navy's Marine 6 styles. Tokakake and Giant hadn't yet entered the officer training camp and hadn't learned the superhuman techniques of the Marine 6 styles. This was pure speed and explosive power. The Marines from the 321st watching nearby gasped in unison. It felt like a blur had flashed before their eyes, and just like that, Lieutenant Commander Tokakake had vanished. In less than a second, he crossed more than 10 meters, arriving in front of Captain Darren. Muscle surging, he drove a punch straight toward Darren's abdomen like a battering ram. No tricks. No feints. Just raw power pushed to the limit. Seeing Darren still standing there, motionless, as if unaware of the incoming blow, Tokakake burst into laughter. Serves you right. Showing off those muscles. Hooking up with Lady Marjorie. Acting all high and mighty like you care about the people. Get tracked. Bang. His punch finally landed, right on Darren's solid, defined ABS. It struck dead center, rippling with a blast of white compressed air. But Tokakake's smug grin froze on his face. Something was wrong. It felt like he had punched solid steel. Darren didn't budge. Not even a little. Not far off, Giant, who had been ready to draw her sword at a moment's notice, was also stunned. Tokakake looked up in shock, and met Darren's calm, slightly helpless young face. That. Lieutenant Commander Tokakake, I appreciate you holding back, but please take this sparring match seriously. Darren smiled playfully. Tokakake's mouth twitched. Tokakake, what are you doing? Stop fooling around. Giant's face showed a flash of confusion, and he couldn't help but shout. Tokakake. He gritted his teeth, took a deep breath, and tensed the muscles in his arm before throwing another heavy punch at Darren. Boom. A wave of air erupted again, and the violent gusts kicked up a swirl of dust. Yet Darren, the base commander of the 321st branch, remained completely motionless. Tokakake was stunned again. Is that iron body? He hadn't learned the Marine 6 styles yet, but he knew what it looked like. A technique that makes your body as tough as steel. This had to be Iron Body, one of the Marine 6 styles. The principle behind Iron Body was to speed up blood flow and increase muscle activation. But what was strange was that Darren didn't show the usual signs of tensing up like someone using Iron Body. I'm telling you, Lieutenant Commander Tokakake, you don't have to hold back. I really want to see what you're capable of, Darren said again, his voice slow and calm. Tokakake, what the hell are you doing? I told you to go all out. Giant snapped angrily. Tokake's expression turned almost tearful, muttering inwardly, I'm not holding back. He clenched his teeth and furiously unleashed punch after punch at Darren. Bang. 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 His fists rained down like a storm, multiplying into countless afterimages as they slammed into the Navy captain. Blows strong enough to smash through stone walls landed on Darren's chest, stomach, legs, even his head. But none of them made him budge an inch. They had absolutely no effect. The Navy captain stood there like a rock in a storm, completely unmoved. It's not working. How is that even possible? Tokakake stared blankly at Darren's calm expression, the faint smile hidden in his eyes sending a chill down his spine. Could it be? Then, Darren suddenly grinned at him. Had enough? If you're done, it's my turn now. Tokakake froze. A piercing chill surged from the soles of his feet, racing up his spine into his skull. A rough, giant hand lunged at him at lightning speed, growing larger in his vision. It was so fast, he had no chance to dodge. Tokakake's face changed drastically. That creeping suspicion in his heart instantly solidified into certainty as Darren made his move. This guy is way stronger than me. Not the face, please. Tokakake let out a strange cry, but the next moment, the large hand smacked straight onto his face. Under Giant's stunned gaze. Under the dumbfounded stares of the 321st Branch Marines. Under Momonga's helpless look. And under Tokakake's own high-pitched, pig-like wail. Darren, gripping Tokakake's face with one hand, grinned wickedly and took a step forward, then slammed Tokakake's head straight into the ground. Boom. The earth trembled violently within a 20-meter radius. A massive crater exploded into view, cracks spiderwebbing out in all directions. Tokakake's head was buried in the pit, his legs, still in clogs, sticking up into the air, twitching occasionally. Dust billowed like a rising dragon. At that moment, everyone watching winced and grimaced. Just looking at it was enough to make your face hurt. Chapter 7, The North Blue breeds monsters, damn it. Giant's face changed drastically at the sight. She finally realized, Darren wasn't just strong. He was toying with them. Tokakake specialized in close quarters combat and had immense physical strength. Yet his attacks hadn't done a thing to Darren. Looking at Darren's bare upper body, those muscles covered in jagged scars, a thought suddenly struck Giant. His physical defense might have reached an inhuman level. Even under normal circumstances, his toughness could rival Iron Body. As the thought flashed through her mind, Giant didn't hesitate. She launched forward like a pink blur. Fierce battle spirit flared in her eyes, and the golden blade in her hand gleamed with piercing light. Things had escalated to the point where retreat was no longer an option. She and Tokakake were here representing the Marine headquarters, and with so many Marines watching, they had to save face no matter what. Watch yourself, Captain Darren. The moment her voice rang out, Giant was already in front of him. Her golden sword tore through the air, unleashing a sharp, explosive whistle. Bado, peach smoke. A single slash. Shook. The golden blade came crashing down, and blood sprayed in all directions. A gruesome gash opened across Darren's chest, blood gushing out like a fountain. But Giant's pupil shrank in shock. He didn't dodge. She stared at the Marine captain in disbelief, momentarily stunned. The blade of her sword was stuck deep in the muscle of Darren's chest, but couldn't go any further. Then she saw it. A smile. Cruel, pleased, and with a hint of madness, it slowly curled across Darren's lips into an unrestrained grin. To feel the breath of all things. The realm of cutting steel, huh? Darren licked the salty blood from the corner of his mouth, his gaze toward Giant filled with appreciation. You really are headquarters genius. Just one step away from becoming a true swordswoman. As soon as he finished speaking, a violent gust slammed into Giant, tearing at her cheeks with raw force. The air exploded with a deafening blast. So fast. Her face paled, and she instinctively raised her blade to block. Clang. A black military boot crashed down onto the blade with tremendous force. Giant felt an overwhelming power slam into her, as if a speeding sea train had hit her head-on, and she was launched like a cannonball. Waves of pressure rippled through the air. Boom. 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 Her body smashed through several heavy stone targets before finally crashing to the ground in a roll. Shattered debris rained down all around her. Blood ran from the corner of her mouth. Her hand trembled violently as she gripped her sword. The skin between her thumb and index finger split open, blood flowing as a burning pain flared. She stared at Darren in disbelief, heart pounding like a tidal wave. This man. Not only was his defense monstrous, his strength was nearly that of a full-grown giant. Damn it. Darren, you bastard. You actually hit me in the face. A furious roar suddenly echoed through the field. I make a living with his face. Tokakake, his face swollen like a pig's head, struggled to pull himself out of the crater. He was panting heavily, his eyes now bloodshot with rage. His aura changed in an instant, like a ferocious beast awakening from deep slumber. To think you pushed me to use this kind of strength. You should feel honored. Hunched over, Tokakake staggered as he rose to his feet. Suddenly, his military uniform puffed up, and the withered muscles beneath began to bulge and swell like volcanic rock. His expression turned savage. Crackle. Pop. As power erupted from his body, the ground beneath him cracked under the crushing pressure of the energy he unleashed. The terrifying sight made the watching Marines' expressions shift. What insane physical strength. He had this kind of power hidden inside him? Is this the genius of headquarters? They stared in shock as Lieutenant Commander Tokakake from headquarters charged at Darren with thunderous momentum. His speed surged, faster, fiercer, nearly double what it had been before. Like a meteor, he hurtled toward Base Commander Darren. Then, boom. He was sent flying back even faster than he'd charged. A stream of scarlet blood spewed from his mouth. His uniform was torn to shreds by the sheer force. He rolled across the ground over a dozen times before collapsing in a heap, curled up like a boiled shrimp. Tokakake opened his mouth wide, gasping like a fish out of water. His eyes, bloodshot from pain, bulged grotesquely from their sockets. Ugh! A puddle of sour-smelling bile burst from his mouth, instantly fouling the air with its stench. Silence. The entire training ground fell into a deathly quiet. Under the stunned gazes of everyone present, the newly appointed Admiral of the North Blue began walking slowly toward Giant and Tokakake. His towering figure cast a long shadow under the blazing sun, engulfing the two of them. Looking down at the two inspectors headquarters had sent to watch over him, Darren wore a warm, sunny smile. You two really are top-notch talents from headquarters. He gave them a wink. I'll be counting on you from now on. Damn it. Darren, you bastard. How the hell are you this strong? Still panting, Tokakake lifted his head. His bloodshot eyes locked fiercely onto Darren. Hearing that, Darren suddenly smiled, as if recalling something amusing. Compared to the real monsters out there, I'm honestly not that strong. He chuckled, then glanced down at the gash across his chest. The bleeding had stopped, almost scabbed over. Well, that sparring match was pretty fun. He turned and began walking toward the far side of the training field. Warm-up's over. Time for actual training. Tokakake and Giant. They were completely dumbfounded. That exchange just now was just a warm-up to you? You got cut. You were bleeding. Oh. It's almost scabbed over. Guess that makes it fine. The two of them exchanged a glance, their shock written all over their faces. Rumble. Just as Tokakake and Giant were still reeling, a deep, trembling rumble suddenly echoed from beneath their feet. Dust and gravel jumped on the ground around them. Sensing something, they looked up, and their minds went blank at the sight. 100 meters away, the man who had just overpowered both of them with sheer brute force was now gripping a massive black iron chain. The rusted black chain stretched about 10 meters long, extending all the way to an abandoned warship at the far edge of the training ground. With his muscles swelling like jagged volcanic stone, Darren gripped the huge chain with both hands, and was dragging the 6-meter-tall medium-sized warship forward. Step by step. Each time he stepped, his boots left shallow craters in the ground. And with every stride, the massive warship scraped across the ground, carving out a deep trench and shaking the earth with its weight. From where Giant and Tokakake stood, they could only stare. That seemingly small marine captain, dragging a hulking warship under the blazing sun, created a sight so overwhelming it burned itself into their minds. Giant and Tokakake gawked, mouths open, utterly speechless. You two just arrived in the North Blue. There's a lot you don't know. At that moment, Momonga walked up beside them. He looked toward the distant figure of the marine captain dragging the warship, his gaze filled with undisguised reverence. Before Rear Admiral Sakazuki was reassigned to headquarters, Captain Darren served as his aide. The countless scars on Captain Darren's body. Most of them came from sparring with Rear Admiral Sakazuki. Giant and Tokakake gasped sharply in unison. Those horrifying scars came from sparring? That wasn't sparring. That was a savage, beast-like clash. A man who could survive matches against Sakazuki, that monster. Recalling their earlier sparring, both Giant and Tokakake felt their faces flush with shame. They'd gone all out, but in Darren's eyes, it must have looked like child's play. Another monster. Tokakake swallowed hard and muttered dryly. The saying the North Blue breeds monsters had already spread throughout Marine headquarters, Maniford, in the past year or two. From the most chaotic of the four seas had emerged two terrifying prodigies with wildly different personalities, Sakazuki and Borsellino. They'd graduated from the officer training camp in less than half a year, their monstrous talent and unstoppable rise earning them the title of monsters from Admiral Zephyr himself. But now, it wouldn't be long before another monster rose from these turbulent waters. His name was Rogers Darren. Chapter 8, The Road to Becoming a Monster. Momonga couldn't help but smile at Tokakake's words. Monster? Maybe. I joined the 321st branch at the same time as Captain Darren. I remember it clearly, his first day of training was 5 years ago. A rare flicker of nostalgia passed through Momonga's usually cold and resolute gaze. Back then, he was frail. Just running 10 laps around the training ground would completely drain him. He needed half an hour to catch his breath and stand up again. Among all the recruits that year, he was the weakest physically. But he never gave up. He trained every single day, constantly pushing himself to his physical limits. It started with dragging a cannon barrel, then a small one-man boat. It took him 3 full years before he could barely drag an abandoned warship a single meter. Compared to someone like Rear Admiral Sakazuki, who's a monster by birth, Captain Darren is a monster on a whole different level. Hearing this, both Giant and Tokacake fell silent. Clang. Darren let the heavy iron chain fall to the ground. Standing under the scorching sun, he panted heavily, his throat and lungs burning like they were being torn apart by a bellows. Every muscle in his body felt like it was on fire, radiating searing pain. But this kind of pain was already second nature to him. He looked back at the deep groove etched into the ground by the warship he'd dragged, and roughly estimated the distance. 101 meters. Yeah, he'd finally broken his own record. He checked his physical stats again. Physique, 58.106, plus 0.03, strength, 53.837, plus 0.06, speed, 57.539 fruit, 71.345 a 0.03 increase in physique and 0.06 in strength. Attribute growth is slowing down. Guess it's time to switch to a bigger warship. Darren muttered as he stared at his data panel. This was the best way he'd found to use his perception talent, analyzing the feedback from each stat to judge whether his current training methods were still effective. The human body is highly adaptive. The same load, same pressure, the same routines, these might yield results at first, but as the body adjusts, the effect dwindles, eventually stalling. That's the science behind it. Before crossing into this world, Darren had learned that professional athletes also constantly revise their training plans to maintain progress. Progressive overload, a fundamental principle in exercise science. It means gradually increasing the training load within the body's tolerable range to achieve better performance. And with his precise perception, Darren could monitor the effectiveness of every exercise through data feedback. So even if others saw his training as hellish torture, a monster's regimen, he embraced it willingly. Because the feedback was instant. Each push-up, each weighted squat, he could see his stats rise in real time. Just like leveling up in a game. Of course, this world wasn't a game, it was all too real. And he understood better than anyone how dangerous the world of pirates truly was. That's why he trained harder than anyone. Only then could he stand shoulder to shoulder with the real monsters of the sea. With his gifted talent and inhuman effort, he firmly believed that one day, he'd be able to do what Whitebeard could, possess overwhelming strength and stop a speeding warship with his bare hands. Well then, time to start physical training. As his breathing steadied, Darren looked up and waved to Momonga. He could feel his body had hit its limit for the day. Forcing more strength training now wouldn't help, worse, it could cause hidden injuries, muscle tears, or overtax his potential. Captain Darren's calling me. On the other side of the training ground, Momonga said this to Tokacake and Giant, then began walking over. But he suddenly stopped, as if remembering something. Turning back with a smile, he added, "Oh right, things are about to get really interesting. Don't blink." Tokacake and Giant were momentarily stunned. Momonga didn't explain further, just gave a mysterious smile. Though he wasn't the type to enjoy messing with others, for some reason, watching these two Marine headquarters elites, so-called chosen ones, look so wide-eyed and overwhelmed, filled him with an odd sense of amusement. "Assemble." Momonga barked coldly. In less than 20 seconds, dozens of Marines swiftly gathered at the center of the training ground. As if fully prepared in advance, they split into two neat formations. Clang. With a sharp metallic ring, the front row of Marines drew their sabers in unison. SHFF. At the same moment, the Marines in the back row raised their muskets in sync. All of them held their breath, eyes locked on one target. Darren, standing alone at the center of the field. Wait. This has to be a joke. Tokacake's face twisted in disbelief, lips twitching uncontrollably as the realization hit him. Giant gulped audibly and said with a dry voice, "This kind of training. Someone could actually die from it." Before they had time to recover from their shock, Momonga had already issued a stern command. "Attack." The moment his voice fell, the front row Marines charged at their base commander with fierce momentum, sabers gleaming. The cold, razor-sharp blade slashed down mercilessly across Darren's entire body. Head, face, neck, chest, back, arms, thighs, throat. No part was spared. Clang. 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 But it was like striking steel. Sparks burst from the impacts, and the blades chipped and shattered. After just one round of slashes, their sabers were ruined. The front row Marines quickly pulled back. Immediately, the back row Marines pulled the triggers of their muskets. Bang. 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 A dense volley of bullets rained down on Darren, ricocheting and bouncing, pockmarking the ground with deep craters. As soon as the volley ended, The rear Marines drew the sabers at their waists and charged forward. Meanwhile, the front row troops repositioned and began reloading the muskets. And so the rotation continued. Blades, gunfire, and even, now and then, Momonga himself dragged out a heavy cannon from the nearby armory, firing a round at Darren during the switching interval between teams. Swords shattered, guns roared, cannon blasts erupted, thick smoke and flames rose over the training ground, stirring up clouds of dust and sand. From afar, it looked like a full-blown battlefield. Tokugaken giants stood at the edge of the field, utterly dumbfounded by the terrifying display of what looked like deliberate self-destruction. They were frozen in place. No iron body, no dodging, no blocking. That madman was enduring this brutal assault with nothing but the sheer toughness of his body. Is this really something a human can do? Staring at the man who remained standing in the middle of the storm of bullets and blades, Tokugaken giant muttered in a whisper. Chapter 9, Germa Rising? That evening, at the residence of the 321st Branch Base Commander. After completing his training, Darren gave his body a quick rinse and stepped out of the steamy shower. He paused for a moment, staring at his reflection in the mirror. His body was covered in scars, lean and powerful like a coiled predator ready to strike. Stamina, 58.418 strength, 53.890 speed, 57.548 fruit, 71.345. The last round of endurance training had left him with a number of fresh wounds, but most had already begun to scab over. He figured a good night's rest would be enough to heal them completely. The latest readings from his perception confirmed it. His stamina had risen by 0.312, now reaching 58.418. One step closer to the key milestone of 60. Progress really is slowing down. Looks like I'll need to bring over a few heavy cannons from the warships to the training grounds soon. Darren frowned as he looked over the densely packed, jagged scars covering his body. With his body's durability growing stronger, standard blades and gunfire barely left a mark anymore. Saber strikes and flintlock bullets could only raise faint red lines on his skin. In today's training, most of the injuries he sustained had come from Momonga's cannon blasts. If he wanted to keep pushing his resilience and impact resistance, Darren knew he had to increase the intensity of his training. That was the beauty of his perception talent. With real-time feedback from his stats, he could precisely manage the intensity, enough to push his limits without risking irreparable injury or death. He kept the training within a scientifically calculated threshold. Compared to the beginning, his physical stats were progressing much more slowly, but the important part was, they were still progressing. Even though Darren had already been promoted to Admiral of the North Blue, commanding all naval forces in the region. Power and authority were one thing. But Darren understood better than anyone, in this sea, personal strength was the foundation for survival. His current objective was to solidify control over the North Blue before heading off to the officer training camp at Marine headquarters. He wanted the entire North Blue Marine Force to become his true territory. More power meant better access to resources for training. And with those resources, he could further sharpen his own strength. Until he mastered hockey, increasing strength, speed, and stamina remained the most reliable way to grow stronger. Darren didn't consider himself a prodigy or monster like Sakazuki. That was exactly why he trained harder than anyone. From his analysis, the average strength of an adult giant was around 60 points. Once his stamina reached that threshold, even in a normal state, his body would match the durability of a Marine 6 style's iron body. And now, that goal was within reach. Yes, Darren was walking the path of a monster. No weaknesses. Strength in all aspects. A level of power so overwhelming, it left others in despair. With the help of his perception talent, he firmly believed he would one day attain the terrifying, inhuman endurance of someone like Kaido. Knock, knock. A knock came at the door. Darren casually threw on a robe and went to open it. Base Commander Darren. Standing outside was Momonga. The ice you requested has arrived. Darren nodded with a smile. Thanks. Momonga gestured to the two Marines behind him. Moments later, they carried several crates of ice into the residence. Clatter. The cold ice was dumped into the bathtub in one go. The two Marines gave Darren a look full of admiration before respectfully taking their leave. What's the situation with those two? Without hesitation, Darren pulled off his robe and stepped into the ice-filled bathtub, submerging himself completely in the freezing water as he asked casually. Ice baths were part of his routine. After intense training, they helped boost circulation, reduce inflammation, speed up recovery, and relieve soreness. Momonga looked at the tub full of ice water and couldn't help getting goosebumps just from watching. Hearing the question, a strange smile crept across his face. They're probably feeling challenged. They're training on the grounds right now. Darren blinked in surprise, then chuckled. Seems the geniuses from headquarters still have their pride. But then again, their reaction was understandable. There was definitely a hierarchy of disdain within the Navy. The elite at the headquarters looked down on the Grand Line branches, and the Grand Line branches looked down on the bases stationed in the 4 seas. And it wasn't without reason, whether it was strength, discipline, or equipment, headquarters Marines had a crushing advantage. Meanwhile, the 4 seas bases, given their independence and distance from Central Command, were often poorly managed, with loose discipline. Tokage and Giant had grown up in headquarters, born from prestigious backgrounds and showered with favor. Gifted beyond most, they would have never imagined that in a place like the North Blue, they'd be so easily and thoroughly overwhelmed by Darren. No surprise it lit a fire under them. But Darren, are you sure their arrival won't cause any problems? When no one else was around, Momonga, as Darren's right hand, spoke to him plainly. Darren narrowed his eyes slightly. My actions here aren't exactly hidden from headquarters. This so-called inspection is just a formality. The 3rd officer training camp is about to begin. Even though their spots are already set, they still need to go through the motions, polish their resumes, stack up a few merits. If the headquarters truly wanted to come after me, it wouldn't be those 2 greenhorns. I'd be facing Vice Admiral Tsuru's baptism by now. Momonga fell silent for a moment. I just feel like your position is too risky. Sooner or later, the headquarters might dig something up. Darren shook his head with a faint smile. The North Blue's too small. The headquarters barely bothers to look this way. And even if they do uncover something, so what? He paused, then changed the subject. I heard that Vinsmoke Judge has been stirring up trouble lately? Momonga nodded. Yeah. He's been flaunting his power, rapidly expanding his forces, leading military campaigns all over, and publicly declaring his intention to behead the kings of 4 nations, including the kingdom of Yades, to reclaim dominance over the North Blue. Darren sneered. Sounds like he's gotten his hands on some advanced weaponry. Must be feeling untouchable. Vinsmoke Judge had once collaborated with the man hailed as the genius scientist 500 years ahead of his time, Vegapunk. In the original storyline, after Vegapunk was taken by the world government, Judge fled back to the North Blue with a portion of his technology. Once back in the Germa Kingdom, he used that tech to revive Germa 66 and later led the infamous beheading of the 4 nations incident, slaughtering the monarchs of the North Blue's 4 kingdoms and immortalizing the event in a massive mural. Send someone with a message, let him know that Germa 66 doesn't get to run wild in the North Blue. The headquarters may be just going through the motions with this review, but I won't allow Judge to plunge the region into chaos under my watch. He tapped the edge of the bathtub with a finger. The ruler of the North Blue. Isn't Germa 66? Momonga nodded, but hesitated, clearly holding something back. Something else? Darren gave him a sidelong glance. After a moment of thought, Momonga spoke slowly. A new group has emerged in the North Blue, powerful, and exceptionally brutal. They've already crushed several well-known mafia families, like the Gallen family, and taken over their operations. I sent people to look into their background. Something doesn't add up. He took a deep breath, his expression darkening. The leader of this group is a kid. Not even 10 years old. His name is... Momonga exhaled slowly. Don Quixote da Flamingo. Chapter 10, The Graceful Magnet Fruit Model, Magnetism Human Devil Fruit Don Quixote da Flamingo. At the mention of the name, Darren froze for a moment, then a strange expression crept across his face. As a transmigrator, he was anything but unfamiliar with that name. In fact, it rang like thunder in his ears. A future member of the 7 warlords of the sea, the infamous Duffy. The biggest underworld broker, controlling over half of the world's illegal trade routes, Joker. Publicly, the king of Dressrosa, secretly, an ally of Kaido of the Beasts and a key player in shaking the world's power balance. However, at this point in time, the 7 warlords of the seas system hadn't even been established yet. Kaido of the Beasts hadn't become one of the 4 emperors dominating the New World. And Doflamingo was nothing more than a cocky brat who had just arrived in the North Blue with a few followers, trying to build his power. Yes, this brat's background. Momonga spoke vaguely, with a trace of apprehension in his tone. Darren chuckled and bluntly laid it out, he's just a celestial dragon who got stripped of his privileges. Now he's running around the North Blue like a stray dog, biting at everything in sight. Momonga gave Darren a look. After working with him for so many years, he knew Darren was a reckless man who thrived on chaos. But even so, his blatant contempt for the world nobles, the celestial dragons, still left Momonga feeling a bit helpless. You're awfully calm about this, he sighed. Even though Doflamingo has lost the right to live and marry Joey's, the fact remains, he still has celestial dragon blood running through his veins. Now that he's flying the flag of the Don Quixote pirates, it's clear he intends to expand his influence here in the North Blue. He might even take root in the region. That could undo everything we've spent the last few years building. He looked visibly troubled. Darren, should we report this to Marine headquarters? Technically, Doflamingo had raised a pirate flag, and as Marines stationed in the North Blue, they were duty-bound to suppress him. But his identity as a celestial dragon made things far more complicated. Darren fell silent for a moment. Doflamingo was definitely a problem. In the original timeline, this lunatic had even dared to rob the heavenly tribute. Backed by his celestial dragon heritage, he forced the world government to compromise and grant him the title of 7 Warlords of the Seas. The Marines were wary of him too. They didn't dare act rashly because of his background. Sure, Vice Admiral Tsuru had attempted to take him down multiple times and caused him a lot of trouble. Later, Doflamingo would even flee at the sight of her warship. But that just goes to show, Doflamingo was still out there, free. With Tsuru's strength as a veteran Marine, even if she wasn't quite on the level of Garp or Sengoku, she could have easily crushed and captured a not yet fully grown Doflamingo. And yet, she let him slip away time and time again. Simply put, it all came down to one thing, his celestial dragon lineage. No, that brat, leave him to me. You don't need to worry about it for now. As for the headquarters, I imagine that old man Sengoku won't be able to sit still for long. Momonga nodded and turned to leave the estate. Darren lay still in the freezing, bone-chilling water, lost in thought. At some point, he raised his hand. A faint arc of electricity flickered between his fingers, and in the next moment, an invisible, eerie magnetic field suddenly spread out around him. Then, an unbelievable scene unfolded. A coin floated out of the pocket of the military trousers hanging nearby and hovered steadily above Darren's palm, as if guided by some strange, unseen force. Anyone witnessing this would have been shocked. With a simple flick of his fingers, the metal coin spun and danced gracefully around his palm like a nimble butterfly. Permsha type, magnet fruit model, magnetism human devil fruit. In the original storyline, this was the devil fruit ability of Supernova Starsea, a member of the worst generation. It generates magnetic fields, magnetizes metal, and allows the user to manipulate magnetism and electrically control all metal objects like iron. This was a trophy Darren claimed during a mafia purge. Once he confirmed it was the magnet fruit model, magnetism human devil fruit that belonged to Starsea, he ate it without hesitation. The magnet fruit model, magnetism human devil fruit was a fruit with immense developmental potential and virtually limitless power, but Kid, that idiot, turned it into a joke. He could have become a suave, commanding figure like Magneto, but instead he played around with metal junk like Lego and Gundams. A god-tier fruit, completely wasted. At least in Darren's eyes, if developed properly, the magnet fruit model, magnetism human devil fruit's power was easily on par with any top-tier Logia. Naturally, this had become Darren's greatest trump card. With that in mind, he slowly closed his eyes. He lay in the frigid water, the invisible magnetic field spreading in all directions. The metal coin floated and twirled around him, occasionally sparking with faint purple arcs of electricity. Under the effects of the biomagnetic field, the wounds on his body were rapidly healing. His muscles rhythmically pulsed and contracted across his entire body. This was a new ability he had recently developed from the magnet fruit model, magnetism human devil fruit. By immersing the body in a high-intensity biomagnetic field, it could accelerate recovery and steadily enhance physical attributes. Of course, even with his powerful physique, he could only endure about 3 hours of this field. The longer it lasted, the more intense the pressure and pain. If it exceeded his body's limit, his internal organs would suffer irreversible damage. Time ticked by. Within the magnetic field's effect, Darren could feel his physical stats rising every 10 minutes. Physique plus 0.01, strength plus 0.01, speed plus 0.01. The next day, Darren put on a crisp new military uniform and draped a wide cloak over his shoulders. Just as he stepped into the base commander's office, he saw Tokakake slouched on the couch, sporting deep dark circles under his eyes and yawning endlessly. Clearly, he'd been up all night training and was completely drained. Darren chuckled to himself, seems he really got under the guy's skin. Good morning, Lieutenant Commander Tokakake. Morning. Tokakake mumbled sleepily. Then, as if the voice finally registered, he jolted upright from the couch with a shiver. Not the face. He threw up a defensive pose, arms crossed tightly in front of his face. Trying to protect his moneymaker, huh? Darren couldn't help but laugh and shook his head. Relax. I know you rely on your looks. Tokakake gave him a wary look before slowly lowering his arms. Feeling a little embarrassed, he stiffened his neck and gave a cold snort. Glad you know your place. He paused, then added, about yesterday's spar, you know I wasn't going all out. I mean, you're the top dog in the North Blue. If I beat you down in front of all your subordinates, it wouldn't look too good. Darren smiled knowingly. Of course. Lieutenant Commander Tokakake is a genius of the headquarters. How could I possibly be your match? He pulled out a box of cigars and handed one to Tokacake. Damn right. Tokacake beamed, clearly pleased with the compliment. One hand on his hip, he proudly accepted the cigar with the other. But hey, Darren, where'd you get this cigar? This is high-quality stuff. Even HQ doesn't see much of it. As he spoke, Tokacake lit the cigar and took a satisfied puff. Darren sat down next to him, crossed one leg over the other, and lit one for himself as well. I've got plenty. If you like it, Lieutenant Commander, I'll have someone send a box over. A box? Tokacake's hand trembled, his eyes popping like he'd been burned. He wasn't some clueless pumpkin. These were luxury cigars made exclusively for nobles, grown in the tobacco plantations of the Bollywood Islands in the West Blue. Each one cost over 50,000 Baileys. A box held 10. A full carton, 20 boxes. That meant one carton was worth over 10 million Baileys. And as a lieutenant commander, his annual salary wasn't even 2 million. Where the hell did Darren get that kind of money? Chapter 11, The Reason for Mobilization. At that moment, Giant walked into the office. Seeing Darren and Tokacake sitting together like old buddies, casually puffing on cigars, she frowned slightly, but ultimately said nothing. Base Commander Darren. She gave Darren a formal salute. Darren smiled and waved it off. No need to be so formal, Lieutenant Commander Giant. He casually glanced at both Giant and Tokacake. It was clear from the way they looked at him that yesterday's sparring session had left an impression. They'd become much more respectful. In this sea, power speaks louder than anything else. So, what's on the agenda for you two today? Darren exhaled a stream of smoke shaped like a dragon and asked with a smile. Giant and Tokacake exchanged a look. Giant stepped forward with a serious expression. Captain Darren, after some observation, we've found certain issues with the income and expenditure records of your branch. Oh? A flicker of interest flashed in Darren's deep-set eyes. And what exactly are you implying, Lieutenant Commander Giant? Without hesitation, Giant pulled out a document and placed it on the desk. Her expression turned cold. Captain Darren, based on materials provided by headquarters and my own observations. Let's set aside the other branches in the North Blue for now. Just within branch 321 alone, the Marines' income levels are far beyond the norm. Darren flicked some ash from his cigar and chuckled. Isn't that a good thing? As Marines bearing the weight of justice, we could die honorably at any moment during anti-pirate operations. Even putting justice aside, being a Marine is an extremely dangerous profession. And the pay set by headquarters? It's a joke. You expect people to risk their lives for that kind of money? Giant clenched her teeth. That's not what I meant. What I want to know is, where is all this extra funding coming from? As soon as she said it, Darren didn't respond right away, but Tokacake's expression shifted. He glanced at the premium cigars on the table, then suddenly turned to Darren, a realization dawning in his eyes as he stared at him hard. Facing their questioning gazes, Darren merely shrugged with a calm smile. Isn't the answer obvious already, Lieutenant Commander Giant? Giant gritted her teeth and spoke slowly and clearly. You took bribes. Bribes? Darren let out a laugh, as if he'd just heard a great joke, and shrugged again. No. How could anything done by the Marines be called bribery? This is what I call a reasonable service fee. Giant stared at Darren in disbelief, furious at how nonchalant he was. Do you have any idea? That money comes from civilians, money they earn through blood and sweat. It's this kind of rampant extortion that leaves families torn apart and ruined. Ruined families? Darren chuckled again. I'm sure you've read the intelligence on the North Blue. Under my watch, crime rates have dropped across the board, and the standard of living for civilians has improved noticeably. I take their money, so I get the job done. Giant was so furious at his response that her whole body trembled. It's the Marines' duty to protect civilians. Darren smiled. You have your beliefs. I have my way of doing things. I only care about results. And the result is, I've managed the North Blue better than at any point in history. Giant opened her mouth, as if she wanted to argue, but just then, Momonga hurried into the office. Captain Darren. His face was grim. He could clearly sense the tense atmosphere in the room and hesitated for a moment. Darren glanced at him and waved a hand. Speak. What's happened? Momonga nodded and said in a low voice, Germa 66 has launched its Slaughter the Four Kingdoms operation. That so-called army of evil has mobilized over 10,000 troops and is about to launch an assault on the Yada's kingdom. Based on the strength and combat capabilities of both sides, once the Germa kingdom initiates war, the Yada's kingdom will likely fall within an hour. Governor Tyrell of the Yada's kingdom has already sent a formal request for help, asking the North Blue Marines to intervene. As soon as he finished speaking, both Tokacake and Giant's expressions changed dramatically. Germa 66, a force known as the Army of Evil and Warmongers, was a powerful, nationless military group officially recognized as a member of the world government. At the top of Germa Kingdom's power structure stood the Vinsmoke family. As headquarters officers, the two were well aware of the military might this North Blue nation possessed. The king of the Germa Kingdom, and current head of the Vinsmoke family, was Vinsmoke Judge, nicknamed Garuda. He was a scientist who commanded advanced military technology. Under his leadership, Germa 66 was one of the most formidable armies in the world, with a fearsome reputation across the North Blue. If Vinsmoke Judge truly intended to dominate the North Blue as he had threatened, the entire sea would soon be consumed by war. Just imagining it made the two young officers shudder. Their eyes flickered with unease. Having grown up in Marine headquarters, Manafort, they were still young, too young to have witnessed real war. And in this moment, panic took hold. Unconsciously, they turned their eyes to Darren. So, that bird brain didn't get the letter we sent him? Darren narrowed his eyes, a faint, cold smile tugging at his lips. Seeing that look, Momonga, who had worked with Darren for years, instantly understood, Vinsmoke Judge was in trouble. It was confirmed. He received it. Momonga spoke firmly. Good. Darren chuckled, crushed his cigar in the ashtray, and his expression turned icy. Then let's move. Momonga nodded, pulled out a military dendenmushi, and began issuing orders to mobilize their forces. Darren casually draped a large justice cloak over his shoulders. Wait. Jian's voice rang out behind him, tinged with unease. Darren turned and looked back at her. She hesitated for a moment, then bit her lip and said, shouldn't we report to headquarters first? The Marines aren't authorized to interfere in conflicts between nations. If we recklessly intervene in another country's internal affairs, it could cause a serious political incident. What a naive girl. Darren thought to himself. With the kind of military strength Germa 66 has, if we wait around for a reply from headquarters, the kings of the four nations in the North Blue will have their heads hanging from judges' walls by the time we get an answer. He sneered. And I'm not about to let Germa 66 start a full-scale war in my territory and cause mass civilian casualties. Jian froze, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. So this guy does have a sense of duty after all. But Darren's next words nearly made her cough up blood. Otherwise, if all the civilians are dead, who am I going to collect money from? Jian's chest rose and fell sharply. She glared at the tall man in front of her and shouted in anger, Darren, you bastard. Are you protecting civilians just so you can charge them? In the distance, bugles began to sound across the military harbor. The Marines of the 321st Branch were mobilizing. Darren grinned. Of course not. Jian blinked, caught off guard, and felt a strange sense of relief. Darren added with a laugh, there's also the fact that Lady Marjorie is in the Yeda's kingdom. We just slept together the night before last. If I don't go, it wouldn't look good, would it? Jian. Took a cake. They stared in stunned silence. So you're deploying troops? Just to rescue your mistress? Chapter 12, In the Name of Justice Yeda's Kingdom. Border waters. The sky was overcast, and fierce winds howled across the sea, stirring up massive waves that crashed violently. Along the kingdom's maritime border, tens of thousands of Yeda's kingdom soldiers stood in a loosely organized battle formation. Gripping swords and spears, they stared wide-eyed at the distant horizon where massive warships steadily emerged. Their faces were pale, and their hands trembled uncontrollably around their weapons. One ship. Two ships. Three ships. Ship after ship, like floating fortresses, cut through the storm-tossed sea as if it were calm, advancing with unstoppable momentum toward Yeda's kingdom. Each warship flew a flag emblazoned with the number 66, waving ominously overhead. The battleships, built from rock and metal, were dragged forward by enormous snails. Leading the fleet was a colossal main battleship, vast enough to rival a small town. Atop its towering central fortress fluttered the imposing cross-falcon flag. The Saint Germain. The flagship of Germa 66, the infamous Army of Evil. Damn it. Have the Marines arrived yet? King Yedas III, a portly middle-aged man wearing a golden crown and a curled mustache, stood in richly adorned robes, his layers of fat causing the luxurious fabric to bunch and wrinkle. Staring at the approaching steel tide that was Germa 66's fleet, rolling in like dark storm clouds, his face was drenched in cold sweat. That lunatic Vinsmoke Judge had threatened to take his head and demanded that Yeda's kingdom hand over its king, or else he would lead the army of evil to raze the entire kingdom to the ground. Noticing the occasional sideways glances from his own soldiers, King Yedas III was like an ant on a hot pan, restless and panicked. Your Majesty, I've already notified Darren-sama. The 321st Branch has deployed and should arrive at any moment, replied Tyrell, the kingdom's governor-minister, respectfully. Tyrell was a handsome man in his early 30s, his features carrying a hint of androgyny. Even his ornate formalware gave off a faint fragrance. King Yades III, upon hearing his governor's reassurance, felt slightly more at ease, but anxiety still showed plainly on his face. Germa Kingdom had existed in the North Blue for over 300 years. Its military might was terrifying, and the nation held strength above all else. Nearly the entire population consisted of adult males trained as elite soldiers. Faced with such overwhelming force, even though Yades had the advantage in numbers, it was clear, if it came to battle, their lines would collapse within minutes. On the street Germain, a towering, broad-shouldered figure stood at the bow like an iron colossus. He wore a metallic helmet, his long golden hair cascading like a lion's mane. His expression was stern and cold. A sharply pointed black beard angled upward from his jaw, which also bore a smaller goatee. Draped in an orange cloak, he wore a light gray combat suit emblazoned with the 66 insignia of Germa, black combat boots, and gripped a silver-white metal spear in his hand. Vinsmoke Judge, the head of the Vinsmoke family, commander of Germa 66, and the reigning king of the Germa Kingdom. What a pathetic bunch of weaklings. For a kingdom this feeble to survive in the North Blue for so long, it's a disgrace to the region. Vinsmoke Judge narrowed his eyes at the distant shoreline, where enemy troops lined the coast. A cold, arrogant smile curled at the corner of his lips. My lord, are we really going through with this? What about the Marines? A man in a butler's tailcoat stood respectfully behind him, speaking cautiously. Vinsmoke Judge raised an eyebrow. The butler's pupils contracted. SHK. A jet of blood erupted, the tip of the spear pierced clean through his heart. Drip. Drip. Scarlet blood streamed down, the light faded rapidly from the butler's eyes. He looked up at his master, disbelief written across his face, before collapsing to his knees, powerless. Supreme Commander of the North Blue? Just a mere captain. Who the hell does he think he is, sending me a letter with threats? Vinsmoke Judge stared coldly at the dying man. No one can stop Germa's glory and conquest. With a flick, he yanked the spear free, sending a trail of blood streaking across the deck. He didn't spare even a glance for the subordinate now lying lifeless behind him. Germa had no use for cowards. As for that letter from Darren, he had already tossed it straight into the trash. That thought flashed through Vinsmoke Judge's mind as he looked out over the fleet. Across Germa 66's warships, dense ranks of soldiers stood still. Each one was tall and muscular, wearing sunglasses, their expressions blank and emotionless. Even with war looming, not a single flicker of emotion crossed their faces. Clone soldiers. Vinsmoke Judge gazed at these loyal troops with satisfaction. His collaboration with Vegapunk had granted him partial access to lineage factor technology. By modifying the lineage factors of infants, he had mastered cloning technology, and used it to mass-produce clone soldiers for Germa 66. These clones were physically formidable, absolutely obedient, and embedded with the programmed ideals of no fear of death, no betrayal. To Vinsmoke Judge, this was the most elite, most powerful army the world had ever seen. The Marines? Worthless in comparison. Before a force that knew neither pain nor death, they would be crushed. And the most important part, using current tech, it only took 5 years to produce a fully grown 20-year-old soldier. In other words, as long as he had enough funding, he could endlessly mass-produce troops, building the largest military force on the planet. Once he conquered Yades and the rest of the North Blue's 4 kingdoms, he could harness the region's resources and multiply his army infinitely. Global domination would no longer be just a dream. With that thought, Vinsmoke Judge raised his hand with a cold smile and gave a gesture. At once, the scattered formation of battleships began to shift. Driven by massive snails, dozens of warships swiftly and precisely aligned, locking together. Before the terrified and stunned eyes of the tens of thousands of Yades soldiers, the previously separate Germa 66 ships merged into a single, colossal structure floating atop the sea. A towering military fortress. Enormous black cannon barrels. Tens of thousands of clone soldiers tightly packed, armed with blades and guns. From a distance, the entire Germa 66 fleet had transformed into a monstrous war beast, fully armed, radiating ruthless, terrifying might. This was the Germa Kingdom. For the glory of Germa. To dominate the North Blue. Vinsmoke Judge raised his spear with a vicious grin and shouted loudly. At his command, tens of thousands of clone soldiers lifted their weapons in unison, their deafening battle cry shaking the sky. For the glory of Germa. To dominate the North Blue. Their thunderous roar crashed like a wave against the forces of the Yades Kingdom on the shore, carrying a suffocating killing intent. Many young soldiers fell back in terror, their weapons clattering to the ground. King Yades III trembled uncontrollably and could barely stand, supported by several of his ministers. It's over. It's all over. He muttered, pale as a ghost. Aboard the Saint Germain, Vinsmoke Judge burst into manic laughter at the sight of the crumbling Yades forces. Kneel and submit. Germa is the true overlord of the North Blue. He raised his metal spear high, blue lightning crackling around it. At his signal, the entire ironclad military fortress of Germa began advancing at full speed toward the coastline, a colossal force pushing forward. Its sheer mass churned up towering waves several meters high. Then Smoke Judge took a deep breath and grinned darkly. All units, prepare to attack. Before he could finish, a pitch-black cannonball suddenly came hurtling from the sky, slamming into the ground beside him. Then Smoke Judge's eyes narrowed in shock. Boom! A violent explosion erupted, flames and thick black smoke billowing into the air. The abrupt turn of events brought the clone soldiers to an instant halt, just as they were about to charge. On the shoreline, the nobles and troops of the Yeda's kingdom stood frozen, staring blankly at the scene before them. Damn it! Who the hell did that? As the wind blew the smoke away, Then Smoke Judge crawled out of a deep crater, covered in dirt and seething with rage. Sensing something, he turned his head sharply toward a distant point. At the same time, the ministers and soldiers of Yedas turned to look as well. Out on the surging sea, beneath howling winds and crashing waves, a massive warship slowly emerged. Its towering mast bore the bold, sweeping black characters for justice. At the bow stood a tall, imposing young man, his wide white cloak billowing fiercely in the wind. It's Darren. The Marines are here. We're saved. King Yedas III burst into tears of joy, his face flushed with emotion. By contrast, Then Smoke Judge's face turned an ominous shade of gray. Under the gaze of tens of thousands from both the Yedas and Germa kingdoms, the marine warship sailed swiftly into the contested waters, cutting between the two armies like an unbridgeable chasm. Instantly, the entire sea fell into a tense, deathly silence. Everyone's gaze shifted instinctively to the figure at the warship's bow. Short black hair, sword-like eyebrows, sharp and commanding features, his presence radiated calm authority. A smile tugged at the lips of the marine captain. He looked up, his eyes fierce, locking onto Then Smoke Judge's grim expression in the distance. In the name of justice. His voice echoed across the vast sea. I am here to end this war. Chapter 13, Magnet Fruit Model, Magnetism Human Devil Fruit, Iconic Moment. I'm here to end this war. The Navy captain's low voice echoed across the deathly silent sea, drawing wide-eyed stares from everyone around. On the deck of the warship, the Marines of the North Blue looked toward the fierce and commanding figure at the bow. Their eyes lit up with admiration, and several young female Marines even had heart-shaped pupils. Damn it! He pulled it off again. Why can't I come up with lines like that? Tokake glanced around at everyone's reactions, then cursed under his breath, his face flushing with embarrassment. Giant's eyes flickered slightly. At that moment, Then Smoke Judge's furious roar rang out from aboard the Germa Kingdom's vessel. Darren, what do you think you're doing? Are you planning to attack me? Germa is a member of the world government and has the right to attend the reverie as a powerful nation. Attacking me is a direct provocation against a fellow member of the world government. And your Marines have no authority to interfere in disputes between countries. Darren narrowed his eyes as the cloak of justice behind him whipped in the wind. He sneered. Then Smoke Judge. It's true that the Germa Kingdom is a member of the world government, but so is the Yedas Kingdom. And more importantly, I will not tolerate a full-scale war breaking out within my jurisdiction. Then Smoke Judge let out a cold, furious laugh. So you think a mere Navy captain, with just one warship and a few hundred men, can stop Germa 66's army? You naive marine brat. Don't make bold claims you can't back up. He raised his arm and gave the order with a sharp wave. No one can stand in the way of Germa's ambition to rule the North Blue. A flash of madness and violence flickered in his eyes. Fire. Sink that warship. With Germa standing as a world government member state, even killing this so-called North Blue admiral on the spot wouldn't bring the slightest reprimand from the government. In fact, it would send a message, no, a warning, to Marine headquarters. Not even the Marines can interfere with Germa's path to dominance. Tremble before Germa's firepower. And submit. As soon as the words fell. Boom. 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 Deafening cannon fire shattered the stillness over the sea. The people of the Yedas Kingdom watched in horror as, from the Germa warships, countless flashes of light erupted wildly, blazing and flaring. As trails of red light soared into the sky, the clouds above seemed to darken, as if a thick shroud had fallen over them. No. That wasn't cloud cover. It was an overwhelming swarm of cannon shells and bullets, slicing through the air like locusts. They whistled and cracked sharply as they traced dense arcs across the sky, descending en masse toward the marine warship's position. A massive black cloud of death was sweeping down, inescapable and suffocating. In an instant, a scorching wind rushed down from above. Hundreds upon hundreds of shells poured like a torrential storm, flooding the air with the acrid stench of gunpowder. Amid them, some shapes were clearly visible. These weren't just ordinary cannonballs. Some resembled rockets or missiles. This was the devastating military technology of Germa 66, powerful enough to dominate the entire North Blue. Aboard the warship, Tokakake and Giant's faces turned pale. Damn it. Germa 66 actually dared to attack the Marines. Has Vinsmoke Judge lost his mind? Tokakake was in a panic, sweat beading on his forehead. Giant abruptly drew them to at her waist, her expression turning grim. A bombardment of this scale could level a small mountain in seconds. There was no way to intercept it. Worse yet, they were in the middle of the ocean. If the warship beneath them sank, even if they survived the initial blast, they'd be defenseless in the water when the second wave hit. But just as the two were bracing for the worst, they suddenly noticed something strange. The other Marines on the warship weren't panicking. In fact, their faces showed something odd. Could it be? Giant and Tokakake suddenly realized something. They turned in unison to look toward the bow of the ship, toward Darren. At that moment, the Supreme Military Commander of the North Blue made his move. A cold smirk tugged at the corner of his lips as he looked up at the storm of shells raining down. He slowly raised a hand. Then, gently, almost casually, he pushed the air in front of him. It was like brushing away invisible dust. Suddenly, faint arcs of purple electricity flickered through the air. An unseen force field spread out in silence. Tokakake and Giant froze, eyes widening in disbelief as they watched the impossible unfold before them. On the shoreline, tens of thousands of Yeda's kingdom soldiers, including the king himself, stood dumbfounded. Their eyes looked like they might pop out of their sockets. The sky, once filled with a swarm of missiles and shells raining down like locusts, suddenly hit an invisible barrier. Their speed dropped drastically, and then, inexplicably, the barrage stopped midair. Countless cannonballs and bullets now hovered silently just 5 meters above the ship, completely motionless. At that distance, Tokakake and Giant could clearly see the engravings on the shells and even smell the sharp tang of gunpowder. Silence. The world had fallen into a deathly stillness. So profound was the quiet, it created the illusion that even the air itself was vibrating. Aboard Germa's main battleship, Vinsmoke Judge's eyes nearly split open in disbelief as he stared at the surreal sight. The shells, mid-fall, had stopped in the air. It was as if the world itself had frozen. In that breathless silence, a tiny sound broke through. Click. A lighter flicked open. At the bow of the warship, the black-haired Marine captain lit a cigar, shielding the flame from the cold sea breeze with one hand. A flicker of red flared in the dim light. "I'm giving you one last chance, Vinsmoke Judge." His voice was calm, flat, even. As he spoke, the countless suspended shells began to slowly turn, as though guided by an invisible force, adjusting their aim. One after another, the rocket launchers blazing with fire also shifted direction. Their new target was aimed straight at the Germa Kingdom. Vinsmoke Judge's face changed dramatically. Staring at the dense cluster of redirected missiles and rockets, a chill ran down his spine. The North Blue Admiral took a long drag from his cigar, and the smoke he exhaled curled into the shape of a pure white flag. "Leave now, and I'll pretend none of this ever happened." Chapter 14, One Man Destroys a Nation? This. What kind of ability is this? Tokakake stared blankly at the shell slowly shifting direction above his head, his voice trembling. Is it the ability to manipulate metal? Giant was just as stunned. Beside them, Momonga crossed his arms, chuckling as he lit a cigarette. That Darren guy. His magnetic field control is getting sharper and sharper. In the distance. Aboard the Saint Germain, Vinsmoke Judge's pupils trembled violently as he watched the overwhelming display unfold before him. He grit his teeth instinctively. But then came Darren's words, words that instantly reignited the fury burning in his chest. This marine brat. What arrogance! Does he really think that just the power of a single devil fruit is enough to go up against the army of evil of the Germa Kingdom? Don't be ridiculous. If an old man like me can't even crush a punk like you, what's the point of Germa 66 ruling the North Blue? With bloodshot eyes, Vinsmoke Judge roared, "All units, attack!" Rammed the ship head-on. "Bring that warship down." At his command, the Germa fleet surged once more. Pulled by giant snails, the ships kicked into full power, speeding madly toward Darren's warship. Darren didn't speak. Once again, he slowly raised his hand. His movement, sluggish and deliberate, stood in stark contrast to the thundering charge of Germa 66's dozens of warships tearing across the sea, kicking up towering waves. Even tens of thousands on the coastline of the Yeda's kingdom could clearly see his gesture. His long, powerful fingers extended gently into the air, then clenched into a fist. The next moment, buzz. 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 A piercing, thunderous sonic boom split the air. Everyone's eyes widened in shock. The dense barrage of shells suspended midair, enough to blot out the sky, suddenly began to shake violently. It was as if a storm had erupted from the void itself. The howling roar of air exploding followed. That train of suspended shells in the sky, a deadly net capable of leveling half a mountain, suddenly shot toward the Germa 66 fleet at a speed twice as fast as before, launched with terrifying force at the moment the Marine Admiral moved his hand. Vinsmoke Judge's eyes immediately flooded with blood. Boom. Like a torrential downpour, the shells slammed into the fortress formed by dozens of Germa warships. One after another, earth-shattering explosions erupted across the Germa Kingdom's fleet, sending crimson mushroom clouds rising into the sky. Under such a brutal bombardment, the clone soldier army didn't even have time to react. They could only watch as their cutting-edge weapons exploded around them, then were mercilessly consumed by fire and shock waves. Flames surged skyward. The Germa Kingdom, like an isolated island, trembled under the bombardment. The massive explosions sent shockwaves sweeping horizontally across the sea in rippling waves, triggering roaring tsunamis in all directions. Thick black smoke billowed into the sky. The vibrations and winds reaching the Yada's coastline drained the color from the faces of its soldiers. On the swaying warship, caught in the storm, everyone in the Marines, including Giant and Tokakake, clung tightly to the masts and railings to keep from being thrown off. Giant and the others couldn't help but look toward the figure standing at the bow, unshaken in the storm, like a stone outcrop amidst crashing waves. With the inferno of Germa's destruction lighting up the distant sky, the Admiral of the North Blue stood there, calmly puffing on his cigar, lips curled into his usual composed smile. Behind him, his wide snow-white cloak blazed like blood under the fire's reflection. In that moment of dazed awe, they finally understood. What allowed Darren to bring such ruthless order to the chaos of the North Blue isn't just his sharp political skill, but more importantly, a monstrous power capable of destroying a nation single-handedly. The relentless explosions lasted a full minute before gradually dying down. As the cold sea breeze finally blew away the thick smoke, everyone gasped in shock at the devastation before them, the wreckage of the Germa Kingdom's fleet, made up of dozens of warships. The land was scorched black, littered with embers and craters of varying depth. Towering turrets and fortresses lay in ruins, reduced to charred rubble. Scattered across the debris were the bodies of clone soldiers, some blown apart so thoroughly that only vague remains of limbs were left. On the flagship, the Saint Germain, the cross-falcon flag that had once flown proudly at its peak slowly turned to ash in the flames. More than half of the Germa Kingdom had been flattened. Cough, cough, cough. A harsh cough suddenly echoed from within the ruins. Damn you, Marine brat. How dare you? With scorched stone and rubble tumbling down, Vinsmoke Judge slowly rose from the wreckage. Gone was his former arrogance, his body was smeared with blood, and he looked utterly beaten. The cape on his back, marked with the 66 emblem, unfurled from his body like a living creature. So you've completed the first generation of raid suits. Darren raised an eyebrow and muttered with interest. Germa 66's raid suit was a high-tech invention crafted by Vinsmoke Judge. Built from custom-shaped memory armor, it was incredibly durable. The cape functioned as a shield, resistant even to fire. It was this cape that had absorbed the brunt of the explosion. In that case, let me see what this raid suit can do. Darren whispered, a glint flashing in his eyes. He turned and said to the Marines, hold on tight. Giant and Tokakake were both momentarily stunned. Before they could react, they saw the other Marines, Momonga included, gripping the railings of the ship tightly. They instinctively followed, grabbing onto the nearest fixed parts of the warship. Then, Darren took a deep breath. SSSHH. With that breath, the cigar in his mouth visibly burned down by a large chunk. The Marine captain locked his eyes on the Saint Germain, 100 meters away, gaze sharp and disdainful. His knees bent slightly. His body sank. The cape behind him flared out. His muscles tensed, compressing like a coiled spring. His stance was that of a leopard ready to strike. Wait. No way. Tokakake's eye twitched as if he'd realized what was coming. And just as he feared, Darren, tightly wound and crouched low, smirked. Then, like a spring released at full tension, he launched. Boom. A thunderous sound echoed from the hull. Tokakake and Giant felt their world flip as a powerful centrifugal force surged, nearly throwing them off their feet. The massive warship actually tilted under Darren's kick. The bow plunged into the sea, the stern lifted high, and the deck angled sharply, nearly 45 degrees. Bang. Darren's feet exploded with overwhelming force, shifting the huge tilted ship sideways by several meters. Using the recoil, Darren shot off from the bow like an arrow from a bowstring. In an instant, he broke the sound barrier, the air bursting with a sharp sonic boom. His figure tore across the sea's surface, parallel to the waves, so fast that the air pressure carved a long, white trench into the ocean. Chapter 15, Germa's technology. He's an absolute monster. Giant gripped the railing of the warship with both hands, eyes wide in disbelief as she watched Darren shoot across the sea like a white arrow toward the Saint Germain. Her expression looked as if she'd just seen a ghost. Boom. At that moment, the warship's stern, which had been tilted high in the air, came crashing back down under its own weight, splashing into the sea and sending a huge wave cascading over the deck, soaking the Marines completely. But Tokakake didn't even notice. His eyes were fixed on Darren's figure, jaw slack in stunned awe. That kind of raw power. That lunatic was actually trying to cross nearly 100 meters using nothing but brute strength and break straight into the Germa kingdom. Hey! Has that bastard always been this insane? He turned to look at Momonga nearby, his mouth twitching uncontrollably. Momonga gave a helpless, bitter smile. That's just how Darren fights. In the past year alone, he's wrecked over 5 warships in all sorts of ways. If it weren't for the North Blue Marines being loaded, the measly budget allocated by Marine headquarters wouldn't have kept the fleet afloat. Momonga couldn't help but grumble inwardly. While the warship stabilized once more, Darren was already crashing into Germa territory like a sideways fired cannonball. Boom. A deafening blast echoed out, dust billowed into the air, and the ground gave a faint tremor. The next moment, Darren, still chewing on his cigar, slowly rose from a 5-meter-wide crater, a wild grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. Smooth landing. He chuckled as the cloak behind him whipped through the swirling dust and wind. Kill him. Take him out. Vinsmoke Judge's pupils contracted at the sight of the savage Marine captain. His face twisted with fury as he gave the order. With that command, from the ruins of turrets and fortresses around them, countless clone soldiers surged out. They wore identical uniforms and sunglasses, moved in perfect unison, and radiated a cold, mechanical aura devoid of any human emotion. Swish. They raised their rifles in unison, hundreds of barrels locking on to the Marine captain. Fire. Bang 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 bang. Muzzles flared with fire as a torrent of bullets screamed through the air, leaving streaks in their wake. You still haven't learned? Darren grinned, a flicker of madness flashing in his eyes. Without even using his magnet fruit model, magnetism human devil fruit powers, he calmly walked forward through the dense hail of bullets. Vinsmoke Judge's eyes widened in shock, as if witnessing the impossible. Clang. 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 Bullets rained down on Darren, shredding his suit and uniform, but each one ricocheted off with the sharp sound of metal striking metal. Sparks flew as bullets bounced off his body like rain hitting steel, punching tiny craters into the surrounding ground, fortresses, and walls. From a distance, the Marine captain looked like a lone traveler pushing forward through a storm of bullets. Ferocious beyond belief. This can't be. How can a human body be this strong? Vinsmoke Judge roared, eyes bulging with disbelief. When the gunfire failed to make a dent, one of the clone soldiers pulled out a compact rocket launcher from the ruins of a military outpost. He hoisted it onto his shoulder, aimed carefully, and pulled the trigger. Bayou. The palm-sized rocket screeched through the air, trailing a long streak of red flame as it hurtled toward Darren, but he simply raised a hand and caught it midair. Cutting-edge tech. This is way more refined than Marine artillery. Darren studied the trembling rocket launcher in his hand with interest, then casually hurled it. Bayou. The launcher flew back along its original path and exploded right in front of the replicant soldier still holding the barrel. Flames instantly engulfed everything within a 5-meter radius. Power on par with a light howitzer, but far more portable. Darren narrowed his eyes, watching the blast with focus as he gave a quick assessment. He already had a solid idea forming in his mind. There was a clear reason why he'd gone to such lengths to siphon wealth from the Mafia and invest a military budget into the North Blue Navy that far surpassed what Marine headquarters received. He intended to turn the North Blue Navy into his personal domain. The entire North Blue Fleet, his own private military force. As a transmigrator, he knew full well the biggest constraint faced by the Marines, no matter how much they preached justice, that ideal would always be overshadowed by the world government's iron grip on power. It was a harsh reality that couldn't be ignored. The Marines, the largest law enforcement force in the world, operated under the world government. They were its enforcers, and its public face. And at the center of that control was money. The world government collected heavenly tributes from member nations across the world and used those funds, through military budget allocations, to directly or indirectly control the financial lifeline of the Marines. Without independent financial authority or alternate funding sources, the Marines were shackled, forced to compromise again and again under the weight of bureaucracy. That's why Darren had been hoarding wealth, to build and command an independent military force, answerable to no one but himself. At least for now, after years of careful planning and effort, the North Blue Navy had achieved full financial self-sufficiency, and its budget far exceeded the standards set by Marine headquarters at the same level. But even that wasn't enough. Darren understood all too well how weak the Four Seas Marines were. They didn't hold a candle to the elite units of headquarters, and compared to the hockey armed forces of the New World, the gap was massive. Sure, through rigorous training and the application of more scientific methods, he had already improved the overall strength of the North Blue Navy significantly. But it still wasn't enough. After all, military power doesn't grow overnight. Still, Germa 66 had just opened a brand new path. Germa 66 possessed some of the most advanced military tech in the world, from cutting-edge weaponry and cybernetic enhancements to those powerful raid suits. With this technology, he could rapidly bolster the North Blue Navy's combat power. If he could acquire Germa 66's tech and use it to arm his forces, Darren was certain he'd have an unstoppable North Blue fleet in no time. With that thought, a sharp grin crept across his face as he suddenly sped up. His target, the Supreme Commander of Germa 66, Vinsmoke Judge. Chapter 16, I am the genius of the headquarters, Tokakake. As Darren charged forward in powerful strides, the ground beneath him quaked violently. The earth cracked open as if struck by an invisible giant hammer, caving in with a burst of flying debris. With this surge of inhuman strength, Darren shot out like a cannonball, cloaked in a violent hurricane. In the blink of an eye, he lunged toward the enemy. In that instant, Vinsmoke Judge felt an overwhelming pressure crash into him. A chill ran down his spine, as though he had been locked onto by a colossal sea king. The killing intent radiating from the Marine captain was like that of a demon rising from a mountain of corpses, so intense it felt like even the sea breeze carried the stench of blood. Kill him. Take him down. Recalling the ruthless methods this Marine used to suppress pirates, Vinsmoke Judge's eyes were bloodshot as he roared the command. The moment the order left his lips, dozens of surrounding clone soldiers raised their weapons and charged at Darren. Twin gleaming long swords came slicing down at him. Darren's lips curled into a faint smirk as he tilted his body to the side. The blades narrowly missed him, skimming past. In that brief moment as they passed each other, the Marine captain's hands, like steel-forged lances, morphed from open palms into blades, and with terrifying speed, he drove them into the throats of the two clone soldiers. SHHK. Blood burst into the air as their pupils quickly dimmed. Wasting no time, Darren surged forward again like a tiger let loose from its cage. His body, as tough as iron, crashed into the formation of clone soldiers like a tiger charging into a flock of sheep, tearing through them with unstoppable force. From a distance, the tightly packed army of clone soldiers had completely surrounded the Marine captain. From the heart of the encirclement came the chilling sounds of flesh being shredded and bones snapping. Warm, blood-soaked bodies were flung out from the crowd, splattering blood as they fell. In less than 10 seconds, the battlefield was drenched in red, with mangled corpses strewn across the ground. From the warship, Giant and Tokakake stared at the scene in shock, their expressions pale, their hearts pounding. At that moment, Darren had become a killing machine, efficient and unrelenting. Everywhere he went, the clone soldiers, whose physical strength far exceeded that of ordinary humans, were slaughtered in an instant. None could survive even a moment under his monstrous body and brutal close-range combat. He tore through them like a storm sweeping fallen leaves. Every part of Darren's body had become a lethal weapon, reaping lives at a terrifying pace. Bullets, steel swords, battle axes, long swords. No matter the weapon, when they struck his body, it was like hitting solid steel. Sparks flew, and at most, they left shallow red marks. The blood-drenched Marine captain laughed wildly, his once white cloak of justice now soaked in crimson. That guy. He's enjoying the thrill of the kill. Giant stared blankly at the grinning Marine captain, and the image of yesterday's training ground flashed through her mind. Back then, Darren had chosen to tank her sword technique, iron cutting, head-on. Now, it was clear, he wasn't just relying on his body's defense. He was reveling in that razor's edge between life and death. Completely immersed in the chaos of battle. He's a total maniac. Giant gritted her teeth, unable to stop herself from cursing under her breath. Beside her, Tokakake glanced over and noticed her staring blankly at Darren's back. Suddenly, as if something clicked, he spun around and shouted urgently at Momonga. Hurry up. I'm going to beat the crap out of Vinsmoke Judge. Momonga blinked in surprise, confused by how this usually lazy, pig-headed guy had suddenly gotten so fired up. He blurted out instinctively, "You sure? Captain Darren doesn't like us interfering in his fights. He is having a blast right now. Besides, according to our intel, Germa 66's commander Vinsmoke Judge is no joke." The high-tech weapons he developed, before he could finish, Tokakake grabbed him by the collar. His face flushed bright red as he snapped, "Damn it, Momonga. Who do you think I am? I'm Tokakake, the genius of HQ. How could some second-rate Germa 66 clown be a match for me?" He let go, spun around dramatically, his beady eyes darting sideways to steal a glance at Giant, then looked solemnly toward Germa 66's fleet. With a low, theatrical laugh, he said, "It's been ages since I felt this kind of blood-pumping thrill. Didn't think anyone in the North Blue could put pressure on a genius like me." Watching Tokake's cool retreating figure, Momonga's mouth twitched. With a sigh, he waved his hand and gave a signal. The Marines sprang into action. The engines roared to life, and the warships surged forward at full speed, heading straight for Germa Kingdom's fleet. Clang! A sharp metallic clash rang out. Several steel blades struck Darren's chest with full force, sending sparks flying, then snapped in half. The clone soldiers in front of him stared at their broken swords in disbelief. Though Vinsmoke Judge had stripped them of pain, fear of death, and betrayal, they still retained some basic emotions. Yet they couldn't understand it. Why was this man's body harder than the weapons they'd forged with refined steel? And more than that, compared to earlier, the Marines' defense had clearly become even tougher. Almost there. Just as I thought, real combat is the best way to grow stronger. Darren grinned. Within the field of perception granted by his insight talent, he could feel it clearly. After the last bout, his physique and strength had risen sharply. His endurance, in particular, had just broken past the 60-point threshold. Time to get serious. Now that his body had reached 60 points, fighting the clone soldiers no longer brought significant gains. And since these guys lacked fear, never tired, and weren't afraid of dying, dragging the fight out would just be a waste of time. With that thought, Darren licked his dry lips. A sharp whistle sliced through the air behind him. Several clone soldiers leapt high into the sky, steel blades raised, aiming to slash down on his neck. But the next moment, they froze in shock. Their swords, still a hand's width from the back of Darren's head, suddenly stopped midair. A low hum reverberated through the stifling silence, spreading through the battlefield. The hovering blades trembled and buzzed. Then, without anyone seeing Darren make a single move, the ground beneath him suddenly came alive. Black steel bars erupted from below like giant serpents, weaving together as if sentient, forming a dense, writhing net that shot toward the clone soldiers. They had no time to react. In an instant, the bars wrapped around them, binding them tightly before violently ripping them apart. The steel bars pierced their bodies, both ends driving deep into the ruined earth, squeezing tighter and tighter. In Vinsmoke Judge's horrified, near-frozen gaze, hundreds of clone soldiers within a 100-meter radius of Darren were caught in the steel trap that had burst from the ground, bound and crushed. Blood gushed in streams. The rusted steel bars tore into their flesh, cutting through muscle and skin. In just seconds, blood flooded the ground. Their bodies were impaled, twisted, and torn apart by the writhing steel, their organs spilling everywhere. The battlefield fell silent. At the center of a wasteland soaked in crimson, the Supreme Commander of the North Blue Marines stood still, surrounded by black steel bars thrashing like serpents, like a demon risen from the depths of hell. Chapter 17, The Navy is the true overlord of these seas. Dust swirled in the air. Cold steel thrashed wildly. Vinsmoke Judge stared at the wreckage that was once the Germa Kingdom, his eyes bloodshot with rage. Damn it. I was supposed to lead Germa to dominate the North Blue. Darren narrowed his eyes with a faint smile. The Marines rule these seas. You're not the king of anything, certainly not the North Blue. He raised his hand and swung it forward. Dozens of twisted steel bars surged to life, stretching and elongating violently. Under the pull of a magnetic field, they pierced through the air and shot toward Vinsmoke Judge with a shriek. Hiss. White jets burst from the heels of Judge's combat boots. Boosted by the thrusters, he soared into the sky like a monstrous bird. Then let me show you the true power of Germa 66, you little brat. Spinning the metal spear in both hands, he knocked away the incoming steel bars one by one. Then he dove from the sky, golden hair streaming behind him. Crackling sparks lit the air. Brilliant blue electricity surged along the spear, flashing with blinding intensity. Denji shaft. In an instant, Judge had closed the distance, driving the electrified spear down toward Darren with full force. The intense current and piercing momentum cracked the air with a resounding blast. The power of technology, huh? Darren gave a quiet chuckle as the deadly spear bore down, sharp enough to pierce steel and shatter fortresses. The wind whipped at his black hair. The spear's tip closed in fast, its scorching heat prickling at his brow. Yet he didn't flinch. He kept smiling. A magnetic pulse suddenly rippled out from his body. The air shimmered. The speeding spear hit something, an invisible resistance. Its momentum slowed drastically, like it had stabbed into gelatin, until it came to a complete stop. Vinsmoke Judge's pupil shrank. No matter how much strength he poured in, the high-tech weapon in his hands, once unstoppable, refused to budge, as if clamped in an iron grip. Trying to beat me with tech? That's your biggest mistake, Darren said calmly. Damn it. I don't believe this. Judge roared, voice hoarse with fury. He let go of the spear and twisted in midair, his boots flaring with light as he lashed a fierce kick at Darren's head. Denji crack. But the same thing happened again. The boots, spewing bursts of white energy, froze in place, suspended midair, completely immobilized by that same airy force. A flicker of terror crossed Judge's face. His cutting-edge weapons, completely neutralized by this man's devil fruit power? Before he could react, everything blurred. The Marine captain in front of him vanished. So fast. The shockwave of his movement exploded beside him. Judge clenched his teeth, a chill running down his spine. Behind him, Darren's cloak crippled like a living thing and suddenly wrapped around him. Boom. A heavy boot smashed into his gut. With that crushing blow, the commander of Germa 66 was launched like a cannonball, slamming into a distant military fortress. Rumble. The fortress was pierced through instantly. Cracks spiderwebbed across its walls before the entire structure collapsed with a deafening crash. Chunks of rubble rained down. The earth groaned under the weight. Darren landed steadily. Damn it. This can't be happening. My technology is supposed to be invincible. Watching Vinsmoke Judge stumble out of the rubble, Darren let out a satisfied smile. He had been testing the limits of the raid suit. Unlike some of his future children, Vinsmoke Judge hadn't undergone any genetic modifications. He didn't have that monstrous, weapon-proof body. Nearly all of his strength came from his high-tech gear, the raid suit. Without it, he wouldn't be stronger than a typical Navy officer. Although this was only the first-generation raid suit, far less powerful than the ones seen during the Whole Cake Island arc, it was still more than adequate. Judging by the force of Judge's attacks and how well the cloak had held up, Darren was quite pleased with its performance. In his estimation, any professionally trained Marine equipped with a similar suit could reach a level of combat power comparable to a Navy Commodore. Just then. Ha 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 ha. Let me help you, Darren. The genius of Marine Headquarters, Tokakake, will defeat the evil army's commander in this battle, rescue the war-torn Yada's kingdom, and become a hero of the Marines. A boisterous laugh echoed from nearby. Darren blinked and turned to look. At some point, their warship had docked. Giant and Momonga were leading the Marines in fierce combat against the remaining clone soldiers. Tokakake charged out of the crowd with dramatic flair, kicking up clouds of dust as he charged at Vinsmoke Judge like a human battering ram. A few dark lines formed on Darren's forehead. This guy. Showing off again? He instinctively opened his mouth to say something, but Tokakake shouted proudly, Darren. Don't interfere. Darren paused, then decided to let him go. Tokakake's heart leapt with joy. Staring at the winded Vinsmoke Judge, a smug grin crept onto his face. From what he'd seen so far, this guy wasn't that strong. If he could take him down, Giant would definitely start seeing him in a new light. And even if she didn't, he'd still be hailed as the hero who saved the Yada's kingdom. How many noble ladies would be waiting for his attention then? Pumped up by the thought, he charged even faster. Vinsmoke Judge, commander of the evil army. I, Lieutenant Commander Tokakake of Marine Headquarters, in the name of justice. He didn't finish the sentence. Boom. A pair of combat boots crackling with blue electricity slammed squarely into his face. And then, he was sent flying back at double his original speed, crashing into a military fortress with a loud crash. Not far away, Momonga covered his face in pain. Judge's total defeat wasn't because he was weak, it was just that Darren was too damn strong. Giant shook her head in silence. After kicking away the clueless Marine who just jumped into the fray, Vinsmoke Judge, breathing heavily, turned and glared at Darren. Damn it. One after another. You Marines just keep getting in the way. Boom. The thrusters on his boots ignited once more, launching him back into the air as he dove toward Darren again. He refused to accept it, the technology he'd spent years developing with Vegapunk. Completely overpowered? But as he closed in, Darren simply raised his hand and made a light clenching motion. A magnetic field rippled out. Vinsmoke Judge froze midair. An instant later, a sharp pain tore through his limbs. Hiss. The sound of flesh being pierced rang out. The metal spear in his hand, the combat boots on his feet, the embedded metal components twisted and shot out like living things, stabbing through his hands and feet, blood pouring out. Ag. The pain was unbearable. He couldn't help but scream. But then, thick steel bars burst from the ground, coiling around him like snakes and locking him in place midair. Clang. A slab of metal sealed over his mouth, cutting his screams short. Blood vessels burst across the whites of his eyes, filling them with crimson. SHH. The Marine captain stepped in front of him, holding a finger to his lips with a gentle smile. Sorry. But your plan to dominate the North Blue ends here. Chapter 18, then. I'll leave. That evening. Yada's kingdom, capital city of Verna. Inside a lavish side chamber of the royal palace. Darren, you little bastard. That was Germa. A member of the world government, And you almost wiped it off the map? A furious roar erupted from the military Dendenmushi on the coffee table, its face vividly mimicking Admiral Sengoku of Marine Headquarters, veins bulging as he raged. Do you have any idea? The Germa Kingdom isn't just some regular member state, they're one of the few nations with a seat at the Reverie. Do you understand the political disaster you've nearly caused? Protecting member nations is the Marines' duty and responsibility. Darren sat casually on a plush leather sofa, one hand holding a glass of whiskey over ice, the other gripping a lit cigar. He puffed leisurely, one leg crossed over the other, listening to Sengoku's rant without the slightest care. Giant, Momonga, and Tokicake, whose face was still swollen like a pig's, stood nearby, holding their breath, eyes cast downward in respectful silence. Damn it. Darren, are you even listening to a word I'm saying? Sengoku had been shouting non-stop for nearly 2 minutes, and seeing Darren still refusing to respond only made him angrier. Are you trying to quit your post as North Blue's admiral? Darren let out a small laugh. Then should I resign? Sengoku. Back in the admiral's office on the other end of the call. Sengoku instantly fell silent, his old face flushing red. The North Blue was a mess, and he hadn't forgotten the disasters that came from letting Borsellino and Sakazuki handle the region in the past. Only this sly brat Darren had managed to bring order to the chaos. If he were to step down, without Darren's iron grip, the North Blue would probably fall right back into being a playground for pirates and mafia families. Just kidding. Darren's smile deepened. He raised his glass and took a slow sip of whiskey, feeling the rich, burning liquor roll down his throat. He said casually, no need to get so worked up, Admiral Sengoku. I'll handle everything. Hearing the North Blue Admiral's breezy tone, Sengoku nearly lost it again. His eye twitched uncontrollably. He took a deep breath, barely restraining the urge to storm into the North Blue and beat Darren senseless. Darren, what the hell are you thinking? A single misstep here could trigger a chain reaction. Sengoku's voice dropped, his tone grim. The Germa Kingdom has been a member of the world government since its founding, 300 years. If word gets out that the Marines attacked an allied nation, even I won't be able to cover for you. Darren exhaled a puff of smoke, smiling faintly. Of course I understand, Admiral. But there's a reason for what happened. Smoke Judge led Germa 66 in an assault on the Yeda's kingdom, which is also a government member state. If I hadn't intervened, that kingdom would have already fallen into chaos and bloodshed. Sengoku's mouth twitched. You call that intervening? You nearly wiped out Germa's entire army. Darren continued. As for the chaos in the North Blue, I'm sure someone as sharp as you already sees it clearly. Conflicts between nations keep flaring up. This incident sends a message, a warning, to the rest of them. As for the Germa casualties, their army is almost entirely made up of clone soldiers. Products of cloning technology, essentially weapons, not civilians. Given Smoke Judge's ambition and arrogance, this was the only way to make him remember. If we don't crush him with overwhelming force, he'll only grow more reckless and unrestrained. And when that happens, it won't just be the Yeda's kingdom that's dragged into war. Who knows how many innocent lives will be lost? How many families torn apart because of Germa's ambition? Hearing Darren's right of speech, Giant and Tokicake, standing silently to the side, both rolled their eyes. You don't care about civilian casualties. You're just worried war would ruin your money-making. On the other end of the Dendenmushi, Sengoku fell silent. He knew Smoke Judge well enough. That ambitious commander of Germa, everything Darren said was true. The attack on Yeda's was only the first step. Judge's real goal was to dominate all of North Blue. So, Darren, what's your plan? Sengoku's tone had calmed, much of the anger gone. He still disapproved of what Darren had done, but it was too late to change anything now. And with Darren's abilities, tactics, natural gifts, and military achievements, there was no denying he was one of the Marines' most vital future assets. Sengoku also knew this sly, sharp-minded brat never acted without a backup plan. No matter how politically sensitive the issue, Darren always found a way to clean it up perfectly. You don't need to worry about that, Admiral. Darren flicked the ash off his cigar and smiled with interest. I'll handle everything, and give Smoke Judge an offer he can't refuse. He won't lodge a protest with the world government. Germa will remain a member nation. The Marines won't take any political fallout. And peace and stability will continue in the North Blue. He leaned forward, grin sharpening. Under Marine control. The chamber fell into silence, with only Darren's commanding, deliberate voice echoing faintly. 3 seconds later. Then I'll leave it to you, Darren. No matter what, this needs to be handled properly. Sengoku's low voice came through the Dendenmushi. Darren smiled with satisfaction. Consider it done, Admiral. Bloop. The Dendenmushi went silent. Darren turned to Momonga. How's the situation with Germa? Momonga replied in a low voice, "We've redeployed 10 warships and over 5,000 troops from other North Blue branches. The Germa Kingdom is now fully under control. Their fleet has already left Yada's waters under our escort. As for Vinsmoke Judge, he is being held aboard one of our ships, just as you ordered." Darren nodded. After years of working together, he trusted Momonga's efficiency completely. "What do you plan to do with Vinsmoke Judge?" "He is, after all, a king." Jian, silent until now, finally spoke up. Darren looked at her and suddenly grinned. "No need to worry about that, Lieutenant Commander Jian. Right now, we've got something more important." "What is it?" Jian blinked. Darren clapped his hands and laughed. "Celebrating our victory." Chapter 19, Our Inescapable Duty. As the Navy. As Darren clapped his hands, the ornate doors of the side hall swung open. One by one, soldiers of the Yada's kingdom, clad in regulation military uniforms, began hauling in massive wooden crates. In less than a minute, dozens of crates were stacked atop the marble floor, forming a small mountain. "Darren. This isn't what I think it is it?" Jian eyed the weighty boxes with growing unease, a bad feeling creeping into her chest. Just then, a man dressed like a butler entered, his face plastered with a fawning smile as he bowed repeatedly. "Admiral Darren, I am the Minister of Finance of the Yada's Kingdom." He gestured toward the crates. "These are but a humble token of our gratitude. We hope the North Blue Marine Fleet, the defenders of justice, will kindly accept it." With a wave, he ordered the soldiers to open the crates. In an instant, Jian and Tokake's eyes widened, their mouths forming matching O's. Blinding light poured from the opened crates, casting a rainbow of reflections throughout the entire side hall. Clink, clatter. Mountains of glittering gold and silver, wads of colorful banknotes, a dazzling collection of rarer treasures, premium cigars, fine liquors. Everything spilled out like molten silver, flooding the hall with the overwhelming scent of wealth and indulgence. This. Tokakake stared slack-jawed at the towering pile of treasure, his swollen, pig-like face contorting into a stunned, almost comical expression. How much was this? He couldn't even begin to count it. Raised in Manafort, he'd never seen this kind of fortune in his entire life. Darren gave a satisfied smile. His Majesty is far too generous. As Marines, protecting allied nations from harm is our duty and responsibility. The finance minister continued, beaming. But of course. Who in all of the North Blue doesn't know that Admiral Darren is selfless, upright, and tirelessly dedicated to protecting the lives and property of our people, never seeking personal gain. Having Darren-sama's protection is a blessing for the entire North Blue. But we can't let the brave soldiers of the North Blue Marines leave empty-handed. Hospitality is a tradition here in the Yada's Kingdom, please don't refuse, Darren-sama. Smooth talker. No wonder he's the finance minister. Darren chuckled and was just about to nod. Unexpectedly, Giant suddenly stepped forward, her face flushed with anger as she gritted her teeth. "No. We can't accept this money." She turned and shot a fierce glare at Darren. "The Marines must never take money through unofficial means. Darren, this is bribery. If you dare accept it, I'll report you directly to headquarters." Tokakake quickly chimed in. "That's right. I'll report you too." The strain on his swollen face made him wince in pain, and resentment boiled in his chest. If it weren't for that bastard Darren, he wouldn't have been one-shotted by Vinsmoke Judge and embarrassed himself in front of Jian. Hearing their protests, the Minister of Finance froze mid-smile. He cautiously looked at Darren and asked respectfully, "Darren-sama. May I ask who these two are?" Darren puffed on his cigar, completely at ease, and chuckled. "Oh, they're Lieutenant Commander Jian and Lieutenant Commander Tokakake, from Marine Headquarters. My adjutants now." "Direct from Marine Headquarters?" The minister immediately picked up on the subtext in Darren's tone. To rise to the role of finance minister in a kingdom like Yada's, he was no fool, an old hand at navigating politics. He quickly turned, bowing politely toward Jian and Tokakake with a wide smile. "So your officers sent all the way from headquarters. I must apologize for my ignorance and any disrespect." Jian replied with a serious tone. "Sir, I must make something clear. As Marines, we uphold justice and safeguard peace. Protecting civilians is our duty, it requires no reward." She pointed at the piles of gold and treasure scattered across the floor, her voice firm. "We cannot accept any of this. It would be a disgrace to the very idea of justice." Of course. Lieutenant Commander Jian is absolutely right." The minister nodded along, looking deeply moved. "But since the two of you came such a long way, the Yada's Kingdom has prepared separate, modest tokens of appreciation. Lieutenant Commander Jian, you look like a formidable swordswoman. Coincidentally, our royal treasury holds a piece of refined steel, perfect for forging a fine scabbard for your blade. And for Lieutenant Commander Tokacake, we also happen to have some premium cigars. Giant. Tokacake, I said, we're not taking anything. Giant snapped. The minister hesitated, then smiled again. Of course. In addition to the gifts mentioned, we'd also like to compensate both of you for your contributions in the battle. Our treasury holds many fine weapons. Lieutenant Commander Giant is welcome to choose any sword she likes. And for Lieutenant Commander Tokacake, our royal performers have prepared a special show for your enjoyment. Tokacake, really? His eyes lit up as he blurted it out. Boom. Before he could finish, Giant kicked him clean across the room, his head embedding into the wall while his legs flailed in midair. Minister. When I said we can't accept it, I meant it. That wasn't a cue to up the offer. Giant's face was pale with fury as she clenched her jaw, trying to calm her anger. The Minister of Finance was left dumbfounded, looking conflicted. You keep refusing, aren't you just trying to raise the price? Wasn't it enough? At that point, Darren finally stepped in with a helpless sigh. You've worked hard, Minister. We appreciate these gifts. Please convey our deepest thanks to King Artis on behalf of the North Blue Marines. The Minister let out a breath of relief and smiled again. Of course, of course. These gifts were all voluntarily donated by the people, who were simply eager to show their appreciation to the North Blue Marines. In addition, the royal family has prepared a banquet for tonight. We hope you'll attend. With that, he gave a slight bow to Darren and the others, then quickly excused himself. As the doors closed, Giant finally snapped, glaring at Darren, who had already sat down and crossed his legs again. Darren. Before she could finish, Darren waved her off. Giant, you saw how desperate that minister was. If we don't accept the gift, he can't go back and report this properly. That's just how things work in the North Blue. To them, if you don't accept the money, they'll be on edge. Justice? That doesn't mean anything in these waters. It's just human nature. Seeing she still wanted to argue, Darren shook his head. Enough. Go get ready. We've got a banquet to attend. Chapter 20, Tokacake, the protector of the people. Damn you, Darren. You've betrayed the ideals of justice. You're a disgrace to the Marines, a stain on everything we stand for. Giant's furious voice echoed from behind, but Darren just laughed as he strolled out of the palace's side hall. He couldn't care less what others thought of him. Caring too much about your reputation only ties your hands and keeps you from acting freely. This world is ruled by the law of the jungle, only the strong thrive. Darren didn't deny that there were Marines who genuinely upheld their beliefs in justice. He respected those people. They were willing to give everything for their ideals, to protect what mattered most to them. Youth, effort, even their lives. Such people were admirable, even great. That's also why Darren didn't dislike Giant, despite how often she got in the way. Because people like her, fools who still believed in justice, were what kept hope alive in this world. But he knew he wasn't one of them. Because walking the righteous path was just too hard. He didn't have the monstrous talent of Sakazuki, nor the privileged background of someone like Giant. So he had to be cautious, always cautious. He had to seize every bit of power, wealth, strength, influence, and status he could. And now, it was time to collect the spoils of war. With that thought, Darren quickened his pace. Night fell. The capital city of Verna in the Yeda's kingdom was ablaze with lights and filled with celebration. Inside the palace's grand banquet hall, nobles, ministers, crown princes, celebrities, and wealthy merchants gathered in full formal wear. Glasses clinked, laughter rang, and conversation flowed freely. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above, casting shimmering light that danced across the red wine in their hands. In one corner of the hall, Tokacake stood in a brand new tuxedo, putting on his best show. Swirling a glass of wine, he bragged proudly to a group of elegantly dressed noblewomen and young ladies. I tell you, that battle was absolutely intense. Germa 66 really lives up to the title of Evil Army. Their commander, Vin Smoke Judge, guy's like a walking monster. You probably don't know this, but the weapon he used was cutting-edge high-tech. The electricity from his spear could knock out an elephant in a single strike. The noblewoman gasped, hands covering their mouths in shock. And then? One of them asked breathlessly. Tokacake lowered his voice for dramatic effect, adding a deep, charismatic tone, imitating Darren's usual cool demeanor. He gave a faint smile. Germa's tech might be impressive, but I'm a genius forged through countless battles at Marine headquarters. A mere Vinsmoke Judge? Please. He was no match for me. I kicked him, just once, and sent him flying 10 meters. He still tried to resist the power of justice, but in the end, I was sick of hearing him talk, so I shut him up. Their eyes widened, admiration shining in their gazes as they looked at Tokacake. Lieutenant Commander Tokacake, you're incredible. You really are the genius of Marine headquarters. To think you defeated Germa 66, That terrifying evil army, so effortlessly. Soaking in the praise, Tokakake felt like his entire body was glowing with satisfaction. The North Blue really was the best. So many beautiful noble women, the finest wines, premium cigars, and a royal performance from the court dance troupe. No wonder that bastard Darren never wanted to leave this place. As for whether anything he'd said was true, well, the battle had taken place far from shore, shrouded by sea mist. Even the Yada's kingdom's own soldiers couldn't clearly see what had happened, let alone these ladies here in the capital of Verna. After carefully setting the stage, Tokakake took a slow sip of red wine, puffed on his cigar with a melancholy air, and sighed dramatically. You know, I've spent my whole life searching for a worthy rival. I thought coming to the North Blue would finally bring this genius a little excitement, but in the end, I was just disappointed. The noblewoman around him gasped again, eyes sparkling as they hung on his every word. If Lieutenant Commander Tokakake is already this strong, then just how powerful must Darren-sama be? Right? Darren-sama isn't just powerful, he is handsome, charming. So dreamy. As soon as Darren's name came up, the young lady's cheeks turned rosy with shyness, while the noblewoman practically swooned, eyes sparkling with infatuation. Tokakake. Wait, were none of you listening to me? Weren't we talking about my brilliance just now? Why are we back to that bastard Darren? He didn't even show up to this banquet. Furious, Tokakake seethed internally, his facial muscles twitching as his expression darkened. He took a heavy drag on his cigar, his face full of frustration. Mr. Tokakake? A soft, timid voice came from behind him. He turned instinctively, and froze. A girl in a flowing white lace gown stood there, cheeks tinged pink, her delicate hands fidgeting nervously in front of her. She radiated a gentle, youthful charm. So pure. So beautiful. Tokakake felt something strike his heart. His heartbeat skipped a beat. His eyes lit up with cartoonish hearts. This is love. His heart screamed. Mr. Tokakake, I was wondering. The girl glanced up at him shyly, only to flinch and look away like a startled deer. Her voice was soft and sweet. Can I have the Den Mushi contact? She's shy. She wants my Den Mushi number. She must have heard about my heroic deeds. She likes me. Tokakake practically short-circuited with joy, nodding frantically. Of course. I'll give you my private Den Mushi number right now. He couldn't stop grinning. No. I meant. Do you have Darren-sama's contact information? The girl tilted her head with a soft smile, her cheeks glowing red. Crack. It was like something shattered in Tokakake's chest. His heartbeat froze. The red hearts in his eyes turned to stone, then crumbled. As the girl watched in confusion, he turned away like a deflated balloon, slumped toward the edge of the ballroom, and crouched in the corner without moving. 2 silent tears rolled down his face. Elsewhere, Jian, dressed in a pink high-slit evening gown, had just turned down a dance request, for the 15th time. She glanced over at Tokakake, still crouched in the corner, gloom radiating off him like a cloud of despair, and her lips twitched slightly. She took a sip of her wine, bit her silver-dusted lip, and clenched her fists as if recalling something. Meanwhile, Darren had arrived at the port and stepped aboard the warship. Chapter 21, What Do You Want, Base Commander Darren? On the deck of the warship, the North Blue Marines on duty immediately raised their hands in a crisp salute the moment they saw Darren appear. Thanks for your hard work. Darren smiled as he spoke. The Marines shook their heads, then quickly returned to their posts. The treatment the North Blue Marines received far surpassed that of their counterparts in other seas. Beyond the base salary, they had regular paid vacations, were equipped with the finest weapons and firearms, and received the highest level of military training in the North Blue. Everyone in the North Blue Marines understood deep down that everything they had was thanks to their admiral. Darren made his way into the ship's cabin, descending the narrow staircase to the very bottom. There, a makeshift prison had been set up. Vinsmoke Judge, the commander of Germa 66, was locked up inside. The moment he saw that damned Marine arrive, Vinsmoke Judge, his body bound in steel restraints and even his mouth sealed, began to thrash violently. Bloodshot eyes flared with rage as he let out muffled, unintelligible noises. If looks could kill, the venomous glare he shot at Darren would have sliced him to pieces 100 times over. Darren waved his hand casually. The block of steel sealing Vinsmoke Judge's mouth flew off as if pulled by an invisible force. Judge immediately erupted with fury. You bastard Marine brat! How dare you imprison me? The Germa Kingdom is a member of the world government. You're dead. His words cut off abruptly. His pupils shrank. A sharp steel rod twisted its way out from within the cell, slicing through the air and stopping dead in front of his brow. In Vinsmoke Judge's eyes, the rod's glint flickered with the cold light of the torch, reflecting like a venomous snake ready to strike. Finished? Darren smiled as he spoke. Vinsmoke Judge clenched his teeth. Sounds like you're done. Darren nodded, satisfied, and crooked his finger. The steel rod slowly recoiled like a snake returning to its den. Vinsmoke Judge, you're right. The Germa Kingdom is a member of the world government. By marine regulations, this operation will indeed bring me quite a bit of trouble. Darren took out a cigar, bit down on it, and lit it. But you forgot one thing. He looked at the disheveled overlord of the North Blue in front of him, who now resembled a beaten dog, and said with a faint smile, "You don't represent the Germa Kingdom." At those words, Judge's heart skipped a beat. He tried to stay defiant, voice strained, "What are you talking about? I'm the head of the Vinsmoke family. The king of Germa Kingdom. How could I not represent it?" No, Darren let out a short laugh. "You still don't get it." He slowly exhaled a stream of smoke. To the outside world, it might have looked like I wiped out a lot of Germa 66's troops. But both you and I know, they were just clone soldiers. Given enough time and resources, you could mass-produce them again in no time. In the end, clone soldiers aren't humans. They're just weapons. And more importantly, the world government doesn't give a damn about the lives of its member nations. The Five Elders don't care. The Celestial Dragons care even less. What they do care about is whether their allied nations can deliver the heavenly tribute on time. As long as the Germa Kingdom keeps paying the heavenly tribute, those bigwigs couldn't care less whether the one sitting on the throne is Vinsmoke Judge or someone else. Vinsmoke Judge's face went pale. "Ah, looks like you're starting to get it." Darren raised his hand. The steel cage restraining Judge unfolded like a blooming flower. Behind Darren, twisted metal coiled and formed into a steel chair. But even though he was free, Vinsmoke Judge didn't lunge at Darren in fury. Instead, he stood frozen, face grim. He knew very well, without his raid suit, he didn't stand a chance against this man. Darren sat leisurely in the steel chair, puffing on his cigar with a faint smile. "I'm sure the other nobles of the Germa Kingdom are quite interested in the throne. In fact, I imagine they'd be thrilled to see you die here and never return, wouldn't they?" Vinsmoke Judge fell silent, his face dark and grim. He knew Darren was right. The Germa Kingdom had a long history, and aside from the Vinsmoke family, there were plenty of other noble houses, large and small. Ever since he left the research team and returned to Germa, he had used advanced technology and overwhelming force to seize power. The bloodshed that came with it needed no elaboration. During that process, he had ruthlessly suppressed the other noble families, purging many of them. But wiping them all out was impossible. It wasn't hard to imagine how much those nobles would love to see him fall at the hands of this marine. "You don't have the guts to kill me," Judge rasped. Darren chuckled. "I'll give you that. After all, you're a king of a member nation, and I'm just a marine captain. But I can hand you over to the world government. A scientist with cutting-edge research knowledge, someone who once worked alongside Vegapunk in the Mads team. I'm sure the government would be very pleased with that." Vinsmoke Judge's expression shifted sharply. "What do you know?" He had gone through hell to escape the world government's agents, narrowly avoiding becoming just another lab rat for them to use. Yet somehow, this punk marine knew about it. Darren smiled calmly. "What I know isn't your concern. There's only one thing you need to know. Work with me, and you'll stay safe. You'll remain king, Commander, maybe, if I'm in the right mood. I might even help you realize that little dream of dominating the North Blue. Or resist me. I'll hand you over to the world government and back another noble family to take the throne in Germa. And if the new king agrees to raise the heavenly tribute by 20%, I doubt the government will blame me. In fact, they'll probably throw me a public commendation." As his words faded, Vinsmoke Judge sank into a long silence, his expression clouded and uncertain. Darren didn't rush him. He sat back, quietly enjoying his cigar. He knew this man's type well. Power-hungry. Arrogant. Vain. Would he throw everything away for the sake of pride? Or surrender and hold on to power? Darren had no doubt Vinsmoke Judge would make the smart choice. Half a minute later, Judge raised his head, bloodshot eyes staring forward as he rasped, "What do you want?" Chapter 22, Protect the Celestial Dragons. The next day, a news report was released from the Germa Kingdom, a member of the world government. Yesterday, Germa 66 and the North Blue Naval Fleet conducted a joint public military exercise near the waters of the Yeda's Kingdom in the North Blue. Both sides demonstrated their formidable combat capabilities. Vinsmoke Judge, King of the Germa Kingdom and Supreme Commander of Germa 66, expressed his appreciation for the cooperation of North Blue Marine Captain Darren, and pledged to sign a long-term friendship and cooperation agreement to jointly maintain peace, prosperity, and stability in the North Blue. In the office of the 321st Branch Base Commander, Jian and Tokacake stared at the fresh-off-the-press newspaper in shock. How is this even possible? Especially when, right next to the article, there was a photo of Darren and Vinsmoke Judge standing under the seagull flag, shaking hands. They couldn't believe their eyes. Just yesterday, the two had been locked in a deadly battle, nearly wiping out Germa 66, yet today they were suddenly friendly partners? Looking at the warm, familiar smiles on both of their faces in the photo, anyone who didn't know better might think they were long-lost brothers reunited. It felt like a dream. Why wouldn't it be possible? Mr. Vinsmoke Judge is a very reasonable man. After I patiently explained things to him, he quickly came to understand the position of our North Blue Marines, as well as our resolve to uphold justice and peace. Darren gave the two dumbfounded officers a cheerful glance as he leisurely lit a cigar. And he realized the mistake he made in launching a war, and decided to make amends. Isn't that perfectly reasonable? Tokacake nodded as if enlightened. Yeah, that's very reasonable. My ass. He gritted his teeth. With Vinsmoke Judge's violent, arrogant, and defiant personality, along with his ambitions, how could he possibly be moved by just a few of Darren's words? You're a devil fruit user who controls metal. You're not some hype fruit model, encouragement human devil fruit user with the power to hype people up. Darren, what did you really do? Did you threaten him? Jian asked, biting her words in disbelief. Caught me, huh? Darren raised both hands with a playful look, as if saying, you got me. He chuckled. Truth is, I didn't do anything. Like I told Admiral Sengoku, I just gave him an offer he couldn't refuse. Honestly, I didn't expect Vinsmoke Judge to be so reasonable. Jian and Tokacake. They exchanged a look, then glanced at Darren, who was smiling but saying nothing more, and knew there was no way they'd get the real answer out of him. Even if they didn't know exactly what Darren did to make Vinsmoke Judge back down, the result was ideal. They had stopped a war. Hundreds of thousands of civilians in the Yeda's kingdom were spared from bloodshed. The Germa kingdom dropped any intent to pursue blame against the North Blue Marines. Jian received several honorary banners from the Yeda's royal family. Tokacake's estate was suddenly stocked with crates of fine wine and premium cigars. Everything seemed to be heading toward a peaceful, happy resolution. Yeah, right. Jian looked at Darren's relaxed, self-satisfied smile, like a man in complete control, and felt a rising fury inside, a maddening itch that made her want to tear her hair out. Threats and bribes, deception and manipulation, violence and blood, lies to superiors and trickery with subordinates. All of it, utterly despicable. Completely at odds with the justice she believed in. Yet somehow, in Darren's hands, these things had become the most effective tools for governing the North Blue. It was the exact opposite of everything she had ever been taught. It turned her entire worldview upside down. Blub blub. Blub blub. Just then, the military den mushi began to ring. Darren picked it up and connected the line. This is Darren. Admiral Sengoku's hearty laughter echoed from the other end. Ha ha ha. Darren, you rascal, you really are my most trusted subordinate. You handled this beautifully. Jian and Tokacake rolled their eyes in perfect sync, expressions blank. They clearly remembered how Admiral Sengoku had been roaring in fury over the den mushi just yesterday. All glory to justice. I only succeeded thanks to your guidance, Admiral Sengoku. Darren replied modestly. Sengoku let out a pleased chuckle. Seems I was right about you. And it looks like sending those two brats, Jian and Tokacake, to the North Blue was the right call too. Those two are such headaches. That slacker Tokacake is always lazing around and trying to sneak my cigars. And Jian? She's way too much like her senior, too naive. As Sengoku rambled on, Darren glanced at Jian and Tokacake. Their faces were darkening by the second. A strange look crept across his face. Anyway, they're still pretty green. If you've got time, show them the ropes. Sengoku was getting more and more fired up, completely unaware of the rising storm. Ahem. Sensing Jian's glare growing sharper and the aura around her turning downright murderous, Tokacake gave a couple of subtle coughs. Sengoku. The den mushi fell silent. Admiral Sengoku, I heard. You're very disappointed in me? Jian said to the den mushi, expression flat. Sengoku. Hello? Huh? I can't hear you very well. Is the signal cutting out? Darren, you brat. Did you hear what I said? Make sure you take good care of Jian and Tokacake. They're the future of the Marines, the hope of justice. Hello? Signal. Why is it not connect, blub? The den mushi fell asleep. The line cut off. Jian. Tokacake. Darren. The three stared at each other. Off to the side, Momonga, who had been silent the whole time, clutched his forehead in visible pain. That acting was just way too terrible. Not even a full minute passed before the den mushi started ringing again. Darren answered. Admiral Sengoku. Ah, Darren, Almost forgot. There's an important mission, Sengoku said, his tone serious, as if nothing awkward had just happened. Yes, Admiral. I'm listening. Sengoku's voice dropped. Bandai World attacked a world government official ship a few days ago. A celestial dragon on board, St. Zilds, was caught in the disaster and ended up shipwrecked near Basha Island in the North Blue. Headquarters has already received orders. I'm currently en route to the North Blue. Darren's brows furrowed. He recalled reading the headline in the papers a few days ago, Great Pirate World Destroyer Bandai World sinks world government ship. The celestial dragons are furious. 200 million bounty offered. The world pirates may be the government's greatest threat yet. Admiral Sengoku, what are my orders? Am I to pursue Bandai World? He exhaled a slow, dragon-like stream of smoke, eyes narrowing. Sengoku shook his head. No. Your strength is good, but you're still far from being able to take that guy on. Dealing with Bandai World is my job. Your mission is to head to Basha Island immediately and ensure the safety of St. Zilds. The Cypher Paul Division has already dispatched agents to escort him, but until they arrive, the government needs nearby Marines to provide protection. Chapter 23, As expected of a genius, the sky was clear and blue, the sea stretching endlessly beneath drifting white clouds. A massive warship cruised steadily across the open ocean, leaving a long white wake behind it. Inside the dimly lit cabin, Darren sat cross-legged on the deck, eyes closed. The flickering oil lamp cast his blurred silhouette onto the wooden wall. 3 smooth metal orbs hovered midair, circling his body in perfect unison, drawn inward like satellites in orbit. Anyone witnessing the scene would be stunned. Even as they moved, the orbs maintained an absolutely fixed distance from one another, a feat requiring incredible control. Time ticked by. With each subtle motion of Darren's fingers, the orbs flowed and morphed like liquid, stretching into razor-sharp spikes, writhing like sinister iron chains, or spreading out like solid steel shields. At one point, Darren slowly opened his eyes. The orbs immediately drew together and merged, reforming into a sleek silver wrist guard that locked into place around his right wrist. He exhaled softly, a hint of satisfaction curling his lips into a smile. Body, 60.451 strength, 55.890 speed, 58.048 fruit, 71.871. It's true that actual combat and bloodshed push you to grow faster. Darren spoke to himself, using his insight talent to assess his condition. Over the past few months, his training had slowed significantly. In fact, both his speed and fruit ability had nearly plateaued. Though every stat was still improving with increased training intensity, the pace had become disappointing. But after that fight with Germa 66, both his physical strength and endurance had jumped by more than a point. With regular training, it would have taken a whole month to get the same result. Too bad Germa 66 was too weak. I never even got into the right rhythm. He chuckled and lit a cigar. Germa 66 and Vinsmoke Judge weren't exactly weak, his own abilities just happened to counter their tech-based weapons too well. No question about it, if not for his interference, the military might of Vinsmoke Judge and Germa 66 would have made slaying the 4 kings of the North Blue and even ruling the region entirely within reach. I really miss those brutal fights with that madman Sakazuki. Darren's expression softened with a touch of nostalgia. Before Sakazuki had left the North Blue to train at Marine headquarters, the two of them often sparred, without using their devil fruit abilities. Of course, their version of sparring was a deadly affair by any normal standard. Sakazuki never held back. One misstep, and you'd be dead, brushed off as just another training accident. Those days were brutal, sure, but also exhilarating. Every fight pushed him to the brink, forcing breakthroughs in the heat of battle. It was the fastest he'd ever grown in strength. But that was all in the past. After going through the Marine officer training camp and learning under former Admiral Blackfist Zephyr, Sakazuki had likely already mastered Haki. The gap between them had become immeasurable. After all, Kaido once said, Haki is the greatest power on these seas. With that thought, Darren rose to his feet. He wasn't in a rush. The 3rd round of officer training camp was about to begin, and unless something unexpected happened, he was already guaranteed a spot. Even if his talent wasn't on par with monsters like Sakazuki or Borsalino, Darren believed his abilities were more than enough to secure a place within the Marines. But first, he had to build up the North Blue Fleet. He would turn this powerful force, soon to be equipped with Germa tech, into a fleet entirely loyal to him alone. A determined gleam flashed in Darren's deep-set eyes as he stepped out of the cabin and pushed open the door. Sunlight streamed down. Outside, Marine soldiers patrolled the deck, inspecting firearms and cannons as part of their daily maintenance routines. On the broad deck, Tokakake and Giant were drenched in sweat, deep in training. Tokakake was doing inverted push-ups while holding a 1-ton barbell, face twisted in a grimace of strain. Giant practiced her swordsmanship nearby, her expression focused and stern. Her blade sliced the air with a sharp, piercing whistle. Are the two of them having a seizure? Darren looked on in confusion and turned to ask the approaching Momonga. Momonga rubbed his temples helplessly. The Germa 66 incident hit them pretty hard. Especially Tokacake. Ever since we got back, he's been training like a maniac. Darren chuckled as the image flashed through his mind, Tokacake getting stomped in the face by Vinsmoke Judge, then sent flying like a ragdoll. Boom. Just then, a massive column of water, dozens of meters high, suddenly exploded from the side of the warship. Waves surged wildly as the entire ship jolted with the impact. What's going on? Is it an enemy attack? No. It's a Sea King. The Marines on deck turned pale and sprang into action. Swords were drawn, rifles raised, and the ship's cannons adjusted into position. From the crashing waves, a colossal shadow slowly emerged, casting darkness over the entire vessel. The blazing sun overhead seemed to vanish, replaced by the towering figure of a behemoth, at least 60 or 70 meters tall. Its slick black scales and gill-like organs made it look like a monstrous eel. Its eyes, as large as a lantern's, stared down at the Marines from above, and its huge mouth, lined with rows of razor-sharp teeth, gradually opened wide. A small Sea King? Darren eyed the bizarre creature with interest. At this point in time, Vegapunk hadn't yet developed a way to install sea stone under warships, so Marines still had to deal with Sea Kings in the comm belt. In other words, Sea Kings could still sense the presence of ships. Momonga instinctively reached for the saber at his waist, ready to act, but Darren placed a hand on his shoulder and shook his head. Momonga hesitated, then a wild voice suddenly echoed across the deck. Ha 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 ha. Perfect timing. I'll use you, little fish, to test the fruits of my genius training. With that arrogant roar, Tokacake launched himself like a cannonball, one foot slamming down on the railing before he blasted into the air. Roar. A flash of fury flickered in the Sea King's blood-red eyes, almost human in its expression. Enraged by the audacity of the ant before it, the beast let out a thunderous roar. The sound wave struck the deck like a physical force, knocking several Marines off balance. Then the Sea King opened its gaping, fang-filled maw and lunged at the airborne Tokacake. Bang! Tokacake's fist connected. A visible shockwave rippled outward. The Sea King's pupils froze, its face blank with disbelief. Crack crack crack. With that single punch, fractures spread across its fangs, then shattered them completely. Sea King. Tears welled up in its eyes. At that moment, clang. A blade was drawn with a sharp metallic hum. A golden toe tore through the air. A brilliant slash of golden light streaked out and vanished in a flash. SSST. A thin red line appeared across the Sea King's neck. A clean cut, done in one strike. Then, boom. The Sea King's massive head separated from its body and crashed into the sea, sending waves surging again. Blood gushed out in torrents, dyeing the ocean surface a deep red. On the deck, Tokacake landed cleanly, striking what he clearly thought was a cool pose. Giant silently sheathed her blade, her cloak billowing in the wind. The surrounding Marines stared in stunned silence at how easily the two had taken down the Sea King. A beat later, they erupted in cheers of relief and excitement. A few even sprang into action, casting nets in hopes of turning the beast into tonight's feast. Truly worthy of being a genius from headquarters. A future admiral candidate. Darren muttered to himself, watching the scene with a trace of emotion. Just from that brief display, he could instantly tell, both of them had grown significantly since arriving in the North Blue. Tokacake's strength, speed, and close quarters combat ability had improved by at least 30%. As for Giant, she had grasped the art of Tobuzanji, flying slash attack, unleashing Sword Dora, officially stepping into the realm of sword masters. And all this in just a few days. Even if they weren't quite at the level of monsters like Sakazuki and Boruslino, they weren't far off. Ha 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 ha. Darren, did you see that? Tokacake swaggered over, beaming with pride. He raised an arm and flexed his bicep. That Sea King was massive, but this genius smashed all its teeth with a single punch. You can't, boom. Before he could finish, the sea erupted once more into towering waves, as if drawn by the scent of blood. 1, 2, 3. A total of 8 Sea Kings, each over 100 meters tall, burst from the rolling surface of the sea, heads raised high as they let out a unified, earth-shaking roar. As their enormous bodies twisted and surged, the ocean heaved violently, waves crashing toward the warship with deadly force. The tiny vessel, dwarfed by the colossal Sea Kings, rocked and trembled under the pressure. Darren raised a hand. The metal gauntlet on his arm suddenly detached, twisting and stretching like a living creature until it morphed into a long, sharp spear. With a thunderous crack, it shot through the air. Explosive pops rang out one after another. Pushed by a powerful magnetic field, the metal spear left white ripples in its wake, tearing through the sky. Its speed reached the limit in an instant, too fast for the naked eye to follow. Everyone on the deck only saw a flash, like something slicing back and forth through the air, a flickering silver phantom. The 8 charging Sea Kings froze mid-roar. SSST. Countless tiny blood holes burst open across their massive bodies, spraying high-pressure streams of blood like a sieve. Rumble. One after another, the enormous beasts collapsed into the sea, their impact sending waves soaring skyward. Behind Darren, the lifeless corpses of 8 Sea Kings sank into the ocean. Casually, he recalled the metal spear and reformed it into a gauntlet, slipping it back onto his arm without a second thought. Then he turned to Tokacake, who stood frozen in disbelief. Lieutenant Commander Tokacake, what were you trying to say just now? Tokacake's mouth twitched, then he forced a grin. I was saying there's no doubt you'd do it better than me. Darren gave him a look, patted his shoulder, then turned his gaze toward the horizon. An island's silhouette was beginning to take shape in the distance. Everyone, get ready. We're about to land. A faint, mocking smile curled at the corner of his lips. This time, our mission is to protect the great, sacred, and noble celestial dragon. Chapter 24, Arrival North Blue, Basha Island. The warship slowly pulled into the harbor. As the anchor dropped, Darren led the North Blue 321st Marine Division down the gangplank at a steady pace. The moment he stepped onto Basha Island, a look of surprise crossed his face. This doesn't look like the Basha Island I remember. Basha Island was a key hub along several major shipping routes in the North Blue. While its trade volume couldn't compare to some of the more prosperous islands on the Grand Line, it was still one of the top economic centers in the North Blue. Many merchant ships and trading caravans stopped here to resupply, which kept the island's economy thriving. But wherever there's wealth, corruption inevitably follows. That's just how the world works. Because of Basha Island's prosperity, convenient location, and bustling activity, it had also become a haven for skimming profits and harboring crime. The mafia, underground syndicates, black market trades, even pirate trades, had all become routine here. To maintain balance among the island's competing powers, Darren had invested significant effort and energy in the past. Even so, the Basha Island he remembered was still a chaotic mess beneath its lively surface. What he saw now, though, caught him off guard. The once grimy and congested port was now completely cleaned up and freshly decorated with vibrant flowers. The streets were unusually tidy, not a scrap of garbage in sight. The once scattered and messy street stalls were now arranged neatly and orderly. Old buildings had been given a fresh coat of paint, with white walls and blue roofs, giving them a rather grand appearance. A brand new archway had been erected at the entrance of the town, towering 10 meters high. Hanging from it were colorful letters that read, "Welcome Saint Zild's Sama." A celestial dragon was shipwrecked and drifted to Basha Island, Momonga said as he stepped up beside Darren, lowering his voice. So the island's mayor immediately issued an order to clean up the city and spent a fortune in tax money to renovate the old buildings. As for the house colors, supposedly, they were designed to mimic the style of Mary Joai's. The city officials wanted to make the world nobles feel right at home. Giant and Tokacake, standing nearby, were visibly stunned. Darren, on the other hand, couldn't help but chuckle. So even in this world, there's such a thing as image projects, huh? Well, it made sense. The celestial dragons called themselves gods on these seas and held absolute power. For a small place like the North Blue, the local authorities almost never got a chance to lay eyes on a world noble in person. Now that one had shown up in his territory, albeit by accident, of course the mayor had to make an impression. Even a single word from a pleased noble could send his career skyrocketing. Interesting. With a smile, Darren nodded, then turned to Giant and the others. Go ahead and lead the troops in. Set up a perimeter around the area where St. Zild's is active. Screen for any suspicious individuals and make sure nothing unexpected happens. He wasn't interested in protecting celestial dragons like livestock. If anything, he wouldn't mind taking a few out himself. But since this was an order from HQ, Darren would do it right. After all, this mission might determine his political future in the Marines. If anything happened to a celestial dragon under his watch, not even Sengoku could save him. Darren had no intention of leaving the Marines. There's no future in being a pirate, and he wasn't about to spend his life being chased across the seas. He didn't see himself as a good person, but he had his limits. He'd never stoop to raiding civilians. Especially for someone like him, a transmigrator without any cheat abilities, the structured training system of the Marines was clearly the best path. More importantly, he had already poured too much time and effort into the North Blue to walk away now. What about you? Giant frowned, looking at Darren. She'd heard plenty about the vile nature of the celestial dragons, and naturally wasn't too keen on protecting them. I need to meet with the mayor first for the task handover. Right now, security for the celestial dragons is being handled by the city's militia. Darren smiled as he spoke to Giant and the curious Tokakake peeking around the side. Since we're here, we should at least check in with the local government. No need to worry. The actual security operations will be led by Lieutenant Commander Momonga. You two just need to provide support. After all, you've just arrived in the North Blue and aren't fully familiar with how things work here yet. With that, Darren turned to Momonga. They're yours. Momonga gave a nod. Since Darren had already given a direct order, Giant had no choice but to hold back. She stood silently, watching as Darren climbed into a carriage and headed off towards City Hall. This way, then, Lieutenant Commanders Giant, Tokakake. With a smile, Momonga motioned for them to follow, then turned and led his team toward the designated location. He understood Darren was likely going to discuss sensitive matters with the mayor, and bringing Giant and Tokakake along would only complicate things. Giant and Tokakake exchanged a glance, wanting to say something, but in the end, they held back and quickly followed. Chapter 25, The Flower-Selling Girl Basha Island. City Hall. Led by a sultry secretary in a business suit, Darren stepped into the mayor's office. The decor was lavish and high-end. A fur rug lay stretched across the polished marble floor, while an expensive-looking oil painting hung proudly on the wall. Such an esteemed guest, please forgive me for not greeting you properly, Captain Darren. He didn't have to wait long before a sycophantic voice rang out. A middle-aged man in a suit came jogging in, drenched in sweat. His plump figure strained against the fine fabric, making him look like a walking balloon. Mayor Hunter, you've got a city to run. I'm the one interrupting, Darren said with a smile, accepting the cigar Hunter offered with both hands. Without hesitation, he settled into the soft leather sofa. Not at all, Captain Darren. You understand. With St. Zilde-sama visiting Basha Island, things here have been absolute chaos. Hunter pulled out a silk handkerchief and wiped his sweaty face, forcing a smile. Darren nodded and lit the cigar. I get it. A once-in-decades event like this would throw any city into overdrive. Still, I have to say, on the way here, I was surprised by the transformation. Basha Island's looking sharp. I imagine even St. Zilde-sama will be impressed with your preparations. Hunter's face lit up with joy. That's wonderful to hear, truly wonderful. He pulled out a document, clearly prepared in advance, and handed it to Darren with both hands. Captain Darren, this is an overview of Basha Island's situation over the past 6 months. As Darren casually flipped through the pages, Hunter carefully explained. Thanks to your strong presence, the island's 2 major mafia families have kept themselves in check. They've even been paying their taxes on time. Darren glanced at the final number on the report and gave a satisfied smile. Not bad. At least they're behaving. Hunter nodded repeatedly, almost bowing. Of course. In the North Blue, who would dare disrespect you? He lowered his head even further, speaking with nervous reverence. Others might not know, but as mayor, how could Hunter be unaware of what this man was capable of? Basha Island had once been overrun by mafia families, constantly clashing and shedding blood over turf wars. It was a mess, until a year ago, when Darren, newly appointed as the 321st Branch Base Commander, arrived and crushed the criminal underworld with overwhelming, ruthless force. Even now, Hunter vividly remembered that nightmarish scene, rivers of blood in the streets, corpses piled like mountains. Darren stood there, drenched in blood, while the 2 surviving mafia bosses trembled on their knees before him. From that day forward, Basha Island knew no more gang feuds or turf wars. The 2 remaining families split the territory evenly, kept to their zones, and submitted half their earnings regularly as taxes. With the violence gone, the people could finally breathe. Stability returned, and the economy began to flourish. Let me say it again. Pass this on to them. Darren slowly exhaled a puff of smoke. As long as they don't cross the line, I'll turn a blind eye. If they play it smart. There's always money to be made. But if I ever see civilians dying in the streets under my watch, he smiled. I am, after all, a righteous Marine. Wouldn't you agree, Mayor Hunter? Hunter nodded frantically, forcing a grin. Absolutely. In the North Blue, everyone knows, Captain Darren is the very symbol of justice. On the other side, Momonga, along with Giant and Tokakake, led over 100 Marine soldiers through the lively streets of the town, heading toward the residence of St. Zilde-sama. Giant looked pensive, her gaze fixed on Momonga's back as he walked ahead. Something felt off. She couldn't shake the suspicion that Darren had deliberately sent her and Tokakake away so he could act alone. You're so pretty, big sister. A child's voice broke through her thoughts. Startled, Giant turned around. Standing there was a little girl in a simple floral dress, a backpack on her shoulders filled with neatly wrapped red roses. She looked about 7 or 8 years old, with big, sparkling eyes. Bowing politely to Giant, she asked, "Would you like to buy a flower?" The girl's adorable expression made Giant's heart melt. A warm smile spread across her face as she crouched down and gently patted the girl's head. "Little one, how much for a flower?" The girl glanced at the sword hanging from Giant's waist and hesitated, speaking a bit timidly. "One flower is 200 Bailey. Is that all right, miss?" Giant chuckled softly. "You shouldn't be afraid." Noticing the girl's wary eyes, she smiled gently. "Don't worry. I'm a marine. I'm here to protect you. This sword is only for the bad guys." Chapter 26, The Navy's Biggest Problem Really? Giant nodded with a smile. "Of course, that's what we Marines are here for." She glanced at the flowers in the little girl's backpack. "Let me have one." As she spoke, Giant pulled out 200 Bailey and placed it in the girl's hand. The girl looked up in surprise, then clumsily set down her backpack and carefully sorted through the roses. This one bloomed the prettiest. She picked out the most vibrant red rose, held it up with both hands, and offered it to Giant. Giant accepted it with a smile. "Little one, why are you out here selling flowers at your age?" The girl beamed sweetly and replied, "Leah's not that little anymore. I can help my dad now." Pride lit up her face as she looked at the roses in her pack. "My dad grows these flowers. They're just as pretty as you, big sister." Giant chuckled softly. "So that's it, her dad's a flower grower. And your mom?" "Mom." The girl's expression dimmed. "She's sick. Daddy said she went really, really far away to get better." Giant froze, a flicker of sadness passing through her eyes. Then the girl turned to Tokacake standing nearby, bowed politely, and asked, "Uncle, would you like to buy a flower?" Tokacake's face instantly darkened. He twitched, crouched down, and forced a smile he thought was friendly. "Little girl, I'm not even 20 yet. You should be calling me Big Brother." The girl blinked in surprise, studying the man in front of her with the brown hat and cigarette in his mouth. After a long look, she shook her head firmly. "No, you don't look like a big brother. You look like a uncle." Tokacake. Grinding his teeth, he forced a stiff smile. "If you call me Big Brother, I'll buy all your flowers." The girl's eyes sparkled at first, but she quickly hesitated. Her small hands nervously fidgeted in front of her as she looked conflicted. "Leah really wants to sell all the flowers. But Daddy said I mustn't lie." Thud. Tokacake collapsed face first onto the ground. He scrambled back up, fuming. "Damn it. Look closely. I'm only 19. He shouted in frustration. All right. Giant, seeing the girl on the verge of tears, shot Tokacake a glare and kicked him flying with a sharp snap. She crouched down again and gently patted the girl's head. "That guy might look a little scary, but he's a good person. Don't be afraid." The girl blinked her big eyes and slowly nodded. Then she opened her hand and counted the 200 Bailey she'd just earned. After a moment of fumbling, she placed 40 Bailey into her left pocket and the remaining 160 into her right. Seeing this, Giant asked curiously, "Why do you separate your money?" The little girl answered seriously, "Daddy said we have to give up part of what we earn, or people with weapons will come and cause trouble." Giant's expression shifted slightly. Just then, a man came running over in a panic. He grabbed the girl's hand and gave Giant a quick, nervous poke. I'm terribly sorry, Marine-sama. Leah doesn't know any better, she was just talking nonsense." With that, he scooped his daughter into his arms and hurried away like he was fleeing. "Bye-bye, big sister." "Bye, uncle." From her father's arms, the girl waved cheerfully at Giant and Tokacake. "Damn it. I told you I'm a big brother, not a uncle." Tokacake snapped in frustration. Giant watched the father and daughter disappear down the street, a dawning realization flashing across her face. Handing over part of the income. Armed people. Taxes. She frowned deeply, picked up her pace, and moved to intercept Momonga, who was nearby directing troop deployments. "Lieutenant Commander Momonga, tell me, did that guy Darren go off to do something shady again?" Her expression was dead serious. Momonga let out a sigh, rubbing his temples as he looked at her. "Lieutenant Commander Giant, as the commanding officer of all Marine forces in the North Blue, Base Commander Darren naturally has matters he needs to handle. As his subordinates, our top priority is to carry out the orders he gives. And right now, our most important task is to secure the area for St. Zild's-sama." Giant shook her head stubbornly. "No, I want to know exactly what Darren is doing. If headquarters has already issued orders, then Manafred must have already coordinated with Basha Island's leadership. There's no reason for Darren to personally oversee the handover. And if protecting St. Zild's-sama is such a critical mission, then Darren, as the commanding officer, has even less reason to leave." She gritted her teeth. "Don't tell me. Darren went to collect taxes from the mafia with the mayor." Momonga froze, caught off guard. As naive as Giant could be sometimes, she was sharp, she had hit the mark. "I knew it." Giant clenched her fists tightly. Momonga's reaction had confirmed everything. How could you all go along with this? Chapter 27. I want her take the money, do the job. Momonga didn't bother to explain. He just kept walking steadily, speaking flatly. That's Darren's rule, and the rule of the North Blue. As they spoke, they arrived in front of a lavish mansion. It was clearly newly built, blue roof, white walls, and a carefully maintained flower garden decorating the grounds. Outside the estate, a few hundred poorly equipped militia had formed a basic security perimeter. You worthless trash. You can't even handle something this simple. A furious voice exploded from inside, followed by the sound of things being smashed. Moments later, the militia at the front began trembling and dropping to their knees one by one, their faces turning pale. From the grand entrance, a man in a white silk robe stepped out, his head encased in a glass dome. As he moved, the wave of kneeling spread outward like ripples in water. Saint Zildsama was livid. He never imagined that what was supposed to be a leisurely outing would end up with him running into that lunatic Burndai world. What shocked him even more was that some lowly commoner actually dared to attack a world government ship, his personal flagship, no less. Most of the Cypher Pol agents accompanying him had perished in that nightmare of a disaster, and then a sea storm had swept him onto this backwater island. It was the most humiliating moment of his life. Damn it all. Saint Zilds clenched his teeth, seething with rage. He glanced back at the two Cypher Pol agents in black suits behind him. They were all he had left. Move. Get out of my way. Irritated, he kicked a kneeling militiaman out of his path, then looked up to see a marine in a snow-white cloak approaching. Saint Zildsama. I am Momonga, Vice Base Commander of the 321st Branch in the North Blue. Under orders from Marine Headquarters, I've come to ensure your safety. Momonga stepped forward and offered a salute, his expression unreadable. Saint Zilds gave him a sidelong glance, his tone dripping with arrogance and contempt. Oh? So the little lapdog from the Marines finally shows up. And they only send a Vice Base Commander? Where's your boss? Momonga clenched his fist but quickly let it go, responding in a low voice, Base Commander Darren is currently coordinating security matters with the city government. From this point forward, your safety will be under the protection of the North Blue Marines until the Cypher Pol Department's ship arrives. TCH. I didn't expect much from you house-sitting fools anyway, Zild scoffed without even trying to hide his disdain. Whatever. The Cypher Pol ship'll be here in a couple hours. I'll tolerate you until then. He turned away, not even sparing a glance for Momonga's darkened expression. Then his eyes landed on Jian, and they lit up. The greed and lechery in his gaze made Jian instinctively tense. She took a step back, her brows furrowing in discomfort. Well. Didn't expect to find such a beauty among the Marines. Saint Zild ogled her openly, his gaze crawling across her like a predator sizing up its prey. Momonga's expression darkened. Tokake's pupils narrowed, and he instinctively stepped forward. They'd heard stories about the celestial dragon's depraved tastes. If he had really set his sights on Jian. It's just a pity you're too old. So close, you almost caught my eye and could have become my 18th wife. Ha ha ha. Saint Zild leered at Jian, wagging his brows in amusement. Come on, let's go out and find some fun. I've been bored to death holed up in this dump. With the Marines watching in grim silence, Saint Zild swaggered out of the mansion. That bastard. He actually dared to make a move on you, Tokakake muttered bitterly. Obviously, I'm the one who should be your husband. Jian rolled her eyes, loosening her grip on the sword hilt. Still, a quiet sense of relief settled in her chest. As a celestial dragon, a world noble, Zildsama wielded near absolute authority. If someone like him had truly taken a liking to her, it would have caused enormous trouble, for her, for Tsuru, for everyone. Let's move, Momonga said, his face darkening. Lieutenant Commander Jian, stay away from him. Jian nodded silently, praying nothing else would go wrong. The group picked up their pace, trailing behind the celestial dragon with their escort of Marines. Led by Saint Zildsama, the procession made its way through Basha Island's main commercial street. Wherever they passed, the once bustling road fell instantly into silence. Civilians dropped to their knees in waves, like a tide washing through the streets, their faces pale with fear. No one dared to get too close. The world government had ruled the world like a towering giant for over 800 years. Before these so-called gods, wielding the highest authority on the seas, ordinary people could only tremble in awe. But then, a child's voice suddenly rang out, sharp and clear, cutting through the dead silence like a blade. Jian's face turned pale. Tokakake and Momonga's pupil shrank. They looked up, and their bodies began to shake. A little girl with black hair and a floral dress stood there, a large bundle of roses strapped to her back. She beamed brightly, holding a single vibrant rose high in her tiny hand. Her eyes, wide and innocent, looked straight at the man wearing the glass dome. "Uncle, would you like to buy a flower?" Time seemed to freeze. Under the horrified stares of Jian and the others, they saw a twisted smile slowly spread across the pockmarked face of Saint Zilde-sama, flushed, trembling with delight. Greed and possessiveness flooded his eyes. That warped obsession radiated an uncontrollable, sickening excitement, like a spoiled child finding a shiny new toy. Jian and Tokakake tensed up, their jaws clenched. Because they saw that grotesque celestial dragon slowly raise his jeweled, sausage-like fingers and point at the sweet little girl before him with a chilling grin. "I want her." Chapter 28, Audience with Saint Zilde. I want her. Saint Zilde-sama's feverish laughter echoed through the dead silent street. Jian and Tokakake's faces drained of all color. At that moment, a man covered in dirt and grime stumbled through the kneeling crowd in a panic. He pushed forward desperately and dropped to his knees with a thud in front of Saint Zilde-sama. He yanked his daughter behind him, shielding her tightly with trembling arms. Pale-faced and shaking, he stammered, "My lord. I'm sorry. My daughter was in your way. I'll take her away immediately." Only now, seeing the fear on her father's face, did the little girl, Leah, realize she had done something wrong. Her own face turned pale, and her small hands clutched his clothes tightly. "In my way? No, no. She wasn't in my way at all." Saint Zilde-sama chuckled darkly, his sickening gaze fixed on the child without wavering. "She's your daughter, right? Very nice. Starting today, your daughter will experience the greatest fortune of her life, becoming the 18th wife of me, the magnificent Saint Zilde-sama." Ha 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 ha. At those words, the middle-aged man's legs gave out completely. His eyes went wide as he collapsed further. He bowed low, forehead to the ground, his eyes bloodshot. "Please, Saint Zilde-sama. I beg you, don't take my daughter. She's all I have left in this world." Bang. 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 His forehead slammed against the ground with such force that it left smears of blood behind. Behind him, Leah stood frozen in terror, unable to speak. Big tears welled up in her eyes and rolled down her cheeks. Saint Zilde-sama let out a displeased snort. He raised his foot and stomped hard on the back of the man's head. "What's wrong? You still won't comply? I've taken a liking to your daughter. That's the greatest honor you could ever receive. You should be thanking me. Do you have any idea how many people on these seas would kill to marry their daughters to a great, holy, noble celestial dragon like me? If your daughter becomes my wife, you'll never have to worry about food or shelter again. You'll live like a true upper-class citizen." Blood oozed as the man's face was ground into the pavement, contorted in pain. Still, he forced out a strained, broken laugh. "Saint Zilde-sama. I'm grateful for the offer. But Leah is still just a child. I only want to live a quiet life with her." Fury twisted Saint Zilde-sama's face. He lashed out with a vicious kick to the man's face. The man tumbled several meters, his face swelling grotesquely as blood streamed from his mouth. "Daddy." The little girl finally broke into sobs. Jian's face turned ashen. Her hand moved instinctively to the hilt at her waist. Tokakake's fists clenched, his teeth grinding together. All around them, the townsfolk stayed kneeling, trembling with fear. No one dared to speak. No one even dared to look up. Their hearts were heavy with helpless rage. The celestial dragons were descendants of 19 of the 20 kings who created the world government 8 centuries ago. They called themselves the descendants of the creator and wielded absolute privilege. They were untouchable. Any act of resistance or defiance against them would invite the full wrath of the world government. If even a single celestial dragon was offended, a marine admiral or Cypher Pol Zero agent would be deployed immediately for retribution. And now, this little girl had caught a celestial dragon's eye. It was nothing to celebrate. Everyone on the sea knew the celestial dragon's obsessive, perverse, and twisted natures. They didn't bother to hide it. They called them wives, but in truth, they were nothing more than toys. To celestial dragons, everyone else was beneath them, vermin to be discarded at will. The life or death of a toy meant nothing. Once someone became a celestial dragon's plaything, death became a luxury. Leah would become Saint Zilde-sama's 18th wife. So where were the previous 17? The answer needed no explanation. "Ha ha ha ha, come now. Follow me back to the Holy Land, Mary Joyce." Saint Zilde-sama didn't even glance at the bloodied man collapsed on the ground. Laughing wildly, he strode toward the little girl, hand outstretched. "No. You're a bad man. I don't want to go with you." Tears welled in the girl's eyes as she bit down hard on Saint Zilde-sama's hand and broke free from his grasp. He yelped in pain, but instead of anger, his eyes sparkled with twisted excitement. "Yes. That look. I like that look." He licked the corner of his mouth, staring at the trembling girl trying to muster her courage, and smiled with sick satisfaction. Terrified, pale, yet still defiant, such resistance thrilled him to the core. It was a delicious experience, one he knew he wouldn't tire of anytime soon. Grab her. Don't hurt her though, if you do, I'll have you butchered and fed to the dogs. He gave the order with a vicious grin. The two Cypher Pol agents behind him moved without hesitation, closing in step by step. Damn it. No. The fallen man finally caught his breath and, eyes bloodshot, pushed himself up. With a roar, he lunged towards Saint Zildsama. One of the Cypher Pol agents stepped forward and drove a brutal punch into the man's stomach. He doubled over instantly, eyes bulging, choking for air. Blood sprayed from his mouth as he collapsed again. Ungrateful trash. Impatience flashed across Saint Zildsama's violent eyes. Without warning, he pulled out a golden pistol. Damn it. Tokakake cursed, lowering into a stance. Giant's hand gripped her sword hilt. Just as they were about to move, a figure appeared between them like a phantom. One hand pressed Tokakake's shoulder, the other shoved Giant's blade back into its sheath. They froze in confusion, until their eyes widened in shock. Their pupils contracted, and blood-red veins spread across their vision. Die. You filthy vermin. Saint Zildsama cackled and pulled the trigger, in the father's desperate eyes. In the little girl's anguished scream. Bang. The gunshot rang out. And then, silence. Time seemed to stop. Everyone stood frozen in place. The Cypher Pol agents stiffened. Saint Zildsama froze mid-laugh. The man and the little girl stood motionless. A faint humming, like something straining under immense pressure, echoed softly in front of the man. He knelt there in a daze, not even breathing. A single bullet, spinning violently, hovered just inches from his forehead, trembling in place. Suspended. As if caught by some invisible force. 1 second. 2. 3. Who the hell is that? Saint Zildsama snarled, veins bulging across his forehead. From among the silent Marines, a figure slowly stepped forward, his presence cold, vast, and terrifying. Short black hair. Deep, chiseled features. A face as stern and immovable as a cliff face. He towered over the others, nearly 3 meters tall. A wide, snow-white marine cloak billowed behind him without wind. He walked calmly toward the bloodied man, expression unreadable, and lifted the suspended bullet from midair with a casual motion. Then he turned. His towering frame cast a shadow over Saint Zildsama, exuding an overwhelming pressure that made the celestial dragon instinctively recoil half a step. Only then did the man speak, smiling faintly. Rogers Darren, Admiral of the North Blue, Supreme Commander of the North Blue Marines, Captain of Marine Headquarters, at your service, Saint Zildsama. Chapter 29, I admire you Rogers Darren, Admiral of the North Blue, Supreme Commander of the North Blue Marines, Captain of Marine Headquarters, at your service, Saint Zildsama. Captain Darren's voice was laid back, calm, and magnetic as it echoed through the silent street. The blood-covered man stared blankly at the tall, imposing figure before him, completely still. Giant, Tokakake, and the others were equally stunned, exchanging glances in disbelief. Darren had stopped that bullet. He had stopped the celestial dragons from firing. Yet, for some reason, both Giant and Tokakake let out a quiet sigh of relief. North Blue. Admiral of the North Blue? Saint Zilds was momentarily stunned. The overwhelming presence of the Marine made his back break into a cold sweat. With a fierce but hollow tone, he growled, "You dare stop me?" He paused, then suddenly let out a crazed roar. "You dare defy a celestial dragon?" Darren suddenly laughed. His eyes narrowed, and a sly grin curled on his lips like that of a cunning fox. "No, Saint Zildsama. I had no intention of stopping you. I just happened to think." Without warning, Darren turned sharply and lashed out with a brutal kick. His gleaming black military boot slammed hard into the man's abdomen. The sheer force of the blow was so intense the man couldn't even cry out. He flew back like a severed kite, tracing a bloody arc through the air before crashing down over 10 meters away. Whether he lived or died was unclear. SSS. Everyone watching drew a sharp breath. Giant and Tokakake's eyes were bloodshot, and a surge of uncontrollable fury boiled up inside them. One gripped the hilt of their sword, the other tensed every muscle, both on the verge of action. But before they could move, Momonga stepped in front of them. With a cold expression, he spoke in a low voice, "Do you want everyone on this island to die because of your stupidity?" The chill in Momonga's voice and the severity of his words hit them like a bucket of ice water, sending shivers down their spines. Their trembling, bloodshot eyes flickered, and their breathing grew ragged. But despite the fury coursing through their veins, they forcibly relaxed their tense bodies. They understood. If they made a move here and provoked the wrath of the celestial dragons, Saint Zildsama would unleash his fury on the entire Basha island. And by then, it wouldn't be just one civilian's life on the line. Everyone on this island would be dragged to the grave with them, all because of their recklessness and rage. They clenched their teeth so hard it was a wonder they didn't shatter. Even Saint Zildsama himself looked on in stunned disbelief, unable to grasp what the Marine captain was thinking. At that moment, Darren withdrew his foot and said with a cheerful smile, "There's no need for Saint Zildsama to dirty his hands dealing with a pariah like that, is there?" Saint Zildsama was briefly stunned, then a smug grin spread across his face. "Ha ha ha ha. Very good. You truly live up to being a watchdog of the celestial dragons, so obedient." Darren replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Serving the great celestial dragons and the esteemed world government has always been our duty as Marines." Not far away, Jian and Tokakake were seething, their eyes bloodshot, chests heaving with barely suppressed rage. Darren stepped forward, leaned close to Saint Zildsama, and lowered his voice. "Saint Zildsama, with your status and stature, there's no need to waste your time on these low-born trash. You rarely grace the North Blue with your presence. The Marines here have prepared a modest gift for you. I hope you won't refuse it. This is a token of the North Blue people's admiration and hospitality toward the great and holy Saint Zildsama, and a small personal gesture from me as well." As he spoke, he clapped his hands. Within seconds, Mayor Hunter came trotting over, grinning ear to ear, followed by a dozen militiamen carrying heavy crates. "Greetings, Saint Zildsama." Mayor Hunter bowed repeatedly, his face smeared with a sycophantic smile. Saint Zildsama didn't spare him a glance. He simply narrowed his eyes at Aaron, then stepped forward and casually pried open one of the crates. A dazzling, multicolored gleam burst from the crack. It was packed with gold and silver treasure. At last, a look of satisfaction appeared on Saint Zildsama's face. He closed the lid and looked at Darren with newfound appreciation, bursting into laughter. "Darren, was it? Excellent. I like you. With your talents and capabilities, staying in the North Blue as just an admiral is a waste." Though celestial dragons were nobles of the world, wielding unimaginable power, even they often lacked money. The world government's provisions for each noble were fortunes that common folk could never imagine, yet for the indulgent, depraved, and extravagantly wasteful celestial dragons, it was never enough. Darren smiled and shook his head. "It's all for the sake of justice and the Marine cause. No matter the post, so long as you do your part, that's what matters. North Blue may not match the excitement of the Grand Line, but I grew up here. I'm deeply connected to these waters." Saint Zildsama, a world government official, arrived at the port 2 minutes ago. "For your safety, I suggest departing for the Holy Land as soon as possible." Saint Zildsama nodded at that. True enough. The air in the North Blue reeks of filth and vulgarity. It's repulsive. He cast a look of disdain at the surrounding buildings, their blue roofs and whitewashed walls, and scoffed. "And this architectural style? A pathetic imitation." Sweat streamed down Mayor Hunter's forehead as he forced a smile. Saint Zildsama is absolutely right. I'll order a full redesign immediately. Wiping nothing, he spun around and barked at the militiamen. "Hey! Move faster. Get Saint Zildsama's gifts to the port." Darren gestured politely. Then, "Right this way, Saint Zildsama." Saint Zildsama smiled and started walking, but suddenly halted as if remembering something. "Almost forgot." Jian and Tokakake's faces instantly went pale. He cast a greedy glance at little Leah, whose face was ghostly white, then turned to Darren with a smile full of sinister amusement. "Arrest my bride and bring her with me to the Holy Land. Once we arrive, we'll be wed." As the words left his mouth, the smile on Darren's face slowly vanished. Chapter 30, Stay Alive Caesar. Saint Zildsama burst into triumphant laughter as he gave the order to his 2 Cypher Pol agent as bodyguards. "No. Please don't." The little girl's eyes were swollen from crying. Watching the 2 suited men step toward her, she backed away in terror, struggling desperately. The 2 Cypher Pol agents approached without a word, their expressions blank. They roughly grabbed her by the arms and shoulders, ignoring her gasping sobs. Blood quickly welled up where their grip tore at her skin. The civilians kneeling nearby could no longer bear the sight. One by one, they turned their heads away, unable to watch the cruelty unfolding. Jian and the other Marines stood frozen, faces dark with fury. Their rage burned so intensely it felt like it might ignite them from the inside out, yet their limbs were like they'd been sunk in concrete, too heavy to move. Darren took a deep breath. "Saint Zildsama. What is it, Captain Darren? Do you have a problem with my decision?" Saint Zildsama cut him off mockingly, staring at him with a smirk. Darren's eyes narrowed slightly, but a bright, almost overly enthusiastic smile suddenly appeared on his face. "Of course not. For Saint Zildsama to take an interest in her, it's her blessing, and an honor to the people of the North Blue. I'm just worried your subordinates might be a little too rough with your bride. Allow me to assist you." As soon as the words left his mouth, Darren's figure vanished like a shadow. A moment later, He reappeared in front of the girl. Before anyone could see how he moved, the two Cypher Paul agents were pushed back by an unseen force. With a casual flick of his hand, the long blade at one Cypher Paul agent's waist was torn free. It spun through the air, twisting and melting into liquid metal. Most of it solidified into shackles, binding the girl's hands and feet. The rest of the metal formed into a gag, sealing her mouth and cutting off her cries in an instant. Only her wide, terrified eyes, brimming with tears, remained exposed. Darren stepped closer, crouching slightly to meet the girl's hateful gaze. His face remained cold and expressionless. To serve the great Saint Zild-sama is your privilege. He took her by the hand and led the dazed, despairing child to Saint Zild-sama. Saint Zild-sama, this way, at least your journey will be a little more peaceful. Saint Zild-sama glanced at Darren, then suddenly burst out laughing again. Ha 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 ha. Amusing. Truly amusing. You Marines are full of surprises. His gaze toward Darren was filled with both approval and twisted amusement. You're not bad at all, Darren. I'll put in a good word for you with those old geezers in the government. Under the countless hateful, grief-stricken stares of the civilians, Darren gave a slight bow and smiled. Thank you, my lord. Ha 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 ha. Saint Zild-sama laughed again. Then let's head back. As his voice faded, a Cypher Paul agent approached swiftly and dropped to all fours like a trained, obedient hound. Saint Zild-sama climbed onto his back without hesitation, arrogantly heading for the port. The other Cypher Paul agent followed behind, dragging the little girl, her face blank, as if fear had stripped her of all reason. No. Don't. A hoarse voice suddenly broke the silence. Everyone froze. The little girl's father was trembling as he slowly pushed himself up from the blood-soaked ground. His expression was hollow as he reached out in the direction where the celestial dragons had disappeared. As if trying to grab something. But in the end, there was nothing to grasp. Giant's face twisted with sorrow. She stepped forward, intending to help him up. I'm sorry. She spoke in a whisper, unable to meet the man's heartbroken gaze. She watched as the celestial dragon's escort reached the lavish government ship, set sail, and vanished into the distance. Then, on the man's blood-smeared face, a stiff smile slowly appeared. A smile that held sorrow, despair, and absurdity, so unbearable it was hard to look at. Maybe Leah will end up living a decent life. Giant murmured words of comfort even she couldn't believe. You should try to live on too. Suddenly, the man slammed his head into the wall of a nearby building. Thud. Blood splattered across Giant's face. Her vision blurred, overtaken by a blinding red. Everything twisted before her eyes, upside down, like a scene from hell. Through the haze, she saw his blood running down the freshly whitewashed wall of City Hall, painted pristine in honor of the celestial dragon's visit. Blood red and snow white. Bled together into a grotesque swirl of color. That dull impact echoed in her mind, again and again. A deafening hum. Panicked screams erupted, calls for a doctor, shouts of anger, frantic footsteps, shattering the deathly stillness of the street. Help him, quick. He's still alive. He can still be saved. Giant sat motionless, kneeling where she was, her body drained of strength. In her hand, she clutched a fully bloomed rose. The thorns pierced deep into her palm, drawing blood. But she didn't feel a thing. Live on. She suddenly realized how meaningless those words had been. The little girl's mother had already passed away. The man's only light in life had been his daughter. And now, she had been ripped away, taken by the celestial dragons. This man, whose hands were calloused with soil and hardship, was now completely alone. What reason, what strength, could he possibly have left to keep living? In a daze, her thoughts drifted back to what she had once said to that little girl. Don't worry. I'm a Marine. I'll protect you. Of course. That's what Marines are for. Giant suddenly began to tremble. She looked up, her eyes dazed and empty, staring at the sky. It was dark. Overcast. As if something had smothered the light. Boom. A sudden crack of thunder tore through the sky. Snowflakes began to fall, soft and slow, like drifting feathers. It's snowing. But it's still midsummer. She muttered blankly. In the year 1492 of the Sea Circle calendar, Basha Island, tropical heart of the North Blue, saw its first snowfall in decades. The snow, though not cold, settled quietly on Giant's shoulders. She turned her head, stunned, gazing at the silent figure of the North Blue Admiral standing nearby. Her thoughts felt frozen, numbed and hollow. And in that moment of stillness, she finally understood. She understood the words Admiral Sengoku had once said, "This sea is far too vast. The light of the just seagull flag can never reach every dark, filthy, and forsaken corner." Chapter 31, Reason Basha Island. Hospital. Although there was head trauma, strangely, the impact wasn't severe. With some rest, he should recover. Understood. Thank you, Doctor, Momonga replied flatly with a nod. The doctor cast him a complicated glance before leaving the room in silence, his expression dark. In the quiet hospital room, Momonga looked at the unconscious man lying on the bed, lips pressed tight. He exhaled slowly, the breath heavy with frustration. Damn it! Damn it! Damn it! Not far away, Tokakake was shouting, eyes bloodshot as he slammed his fists into the wall again and again. Dust rained down from the cracking plaster. One after another, fist-sized dents, some stained with blood, formed on the pale wall. She called me uncle. She called me uncle, Tokakake roared like a wounded beast. Blood dripped from his knuckles, but he didn't seem to feel a thing. Giant sat motionless beside the bed, eyes closed, hands clasped tightly against her forehead. Then, all at once, she stood up. Her delicate eyes were laced with red. She turned sharply toward the man standing by the window, puffing on a cigarette. Darren. How can you just stand there smoking? A surge of unexplainable rage shot up her throat, making her voice hoarse and cracked. Didn't you say you were the overlord of the North Blue? Didn't you think you were so powerful? Darren said nothing. He finished one cigarette and lit another without pause. That only made the fury in Giant's chest burn hotter. Her eyes glistened with tears. Say something. She bit down hard on her lip, so hard it left a deep, bleeding gash. Ah. Darren let out a slow exhale of smoke and flicked the ash from his cigarette like he hadn't heard a word. The ashtray on the windowsill was already overflowing, a small mountain of cigarette butts. The room felt like a tomb, silent and suffocating, like it had been built to bury hearts. Momonga glanced at Giant, who had erupted into a sudden outburst, opened his mouth as if to speak. But in the end, said nothing. His expression was tangled, hard to read. What else could I have done? The voice of the Marine captain finally broke the silence. Giant froze. She saw the faintest smirk tug at the corner of Darren's mouth, mocking, bitter. He turned slowly to face them, a cold sneer on his lips. He glanced at the clock on the wall. The color drained from Giant's face. She had nothing to say. Because what could he have done? He was just a captain, just the so-called overlord of the North Blue. Even if Admiral Sengoku himself had been standing there, the result wouldn't have changed. They were up against a celestial dragon. A world noble, one of the celestial dragons who held every privilege imaginable. If they had dared to resist, if anyone had, then not only the Marines present, but everyone on Basha Island would have paid the price for their recklessness. Am I still alive? A frail voice suddenly broke the silence. Giant and the others were caught off guard, turning quickly toward the sound. The man was slowly waking, struggling to lift his heavy eyelids. Leah. Leah. He muttered blankly, then caught sight of Darren standing by the window, cigarette in hand. His whole body trembled. Marine. Darren-sama. Clenching his teeth, he tried to sit up, but collapsed from the bed to the floor, utterly drained. You should rest first. Giant hurried over to help, but he waved her off. His eyes were bloodshot, filled with despair as he looked pleadingly at Darren's profile. Darren-sama. It was you who saved me. The moment he said it, both Giant and Tokakake froze. They suddenly recalled what the doctor had said. The impact wasn't severe. Could it be? They looked at the man's dirty clothes. The buckle on his belt was clearly made of metal, and they both realized it at once. If you're still alive, then live properly. Darren took a long drag from his cigarette, his gaze calm as he spoke. Under my watch, no civilian dies an unnatural death. No, Darren-sama. The man dropped to his knees, looking up at the Marine captain, his face contorted with grief. Please. Save my daughter. Her mother died of illness when she was still a baby. She's such a good kid, always so well behaved, never cried or fussed. She even helped me sell flowers on the street. Sell flowers. The words hit him like a thunderclap. Smack. He slapped himself hard and burst into tears. It's my fault. If only I were stronger. If I hadn't sent her out there to sell flowers, none of this would have happened. He sobbed uncontrollably, pressing his forehead to the cold floor with force. Please, Darren-sama. Save Leah. She's everything I have. I'll do anything, anything if you save her. I'll be your servant, I'll kill for you. My garden. My money. Take whatever you want. Please. I'm begging you. Frantically, he began rummaging through his dirt-stained clothes, pulling out a few crumpled, mud-smeared bills and a handful of coins from his pockets. His hands trembled from weakness, and the coins slipped from his grip, clattering and scattering across the floor. The coins spun briefly, surfaces streaked with grime and blood, before slowly coming to a stop. On their polished faces, the light and shadow of the world reflected faintly, and the cold, unflinching face of the Marine captain. No. You don't understand what I meant. Darren's voice was calm. He glanced at the wall clock again, then snuffed out his cigarette, reached for the white cloak hanging by the coat rack, and draped it over his shoulders. On his broad back, the bold and imposing word justice unfurled, majestic, cold, rising like waves. A tide of steel and blood waiting to surge. The man stared at him in a daze, confusion etched across his pale face. Seeing this, Darren let out a quiet sigh and fixed his gaze firmly on the man's eyes. Let me repeat myself. Under my command, no civilian dies an unnatural death. Darren glanced at the crumpled bills in the man's hands and the scattered coins on the floor. As for the money, he gave a faint smile. I already accepted it, long ago. With that, Darren turned and began walking toward the hospital room's exit. Where are you going? Giant couldn't help but ask. For some reason, a wave of unease washed over her. Tokakake stared hard at Darren's back, blood still dripping from his clenched fists. It's about time. Darren didn't look back. His voice was calm, almost indifferent. Time? Giant and Tokakake were stunned. They suddenly recalled something. From the moment they'd entered the room, Darren had been glancing at the wall clock again and again, like he was waiting for something. Before they could respond, Darren had already stepped out. His military boots echoed crisply through the long, cold hallway. His gaze had grown sharp, rebellious, and ice-cold. Darren. A voice called out from behind. Darren stopped and turned to see Momonga quickly catching up. After a moment's hesitation, Momonga said, before the incident, Lieutenant Commander Giant had interacted with that little girl. She bought flowers from her. She didn't mean for any of this to happen. I know, Darren cut him off. He looked at Momonga and smiled faintly. Seems you think pretty highly of Giant. Momonga gave a bitter smile, his eyes flickering with something unspoken. There are too few like her on these seas, those who truly uphold justice. Darren said nothing. Because it was true. That was also why he didn't resent Giant. Her anger had never been directed at him. She knew, just like he did, that in broad daylight and under so many eyes, there was no changing what happened. Her rage had been aimed at herself. At her own helplessness. At the impotence of justice. At the cruelty of the world. Anything else? Darren asked. Momonga paused. You're really going? No Marine's ever done something like this. You don't have to. He trailed off. Darren suddenly let out a low laugh. Momonga, you know what? You're right. I've got plenty of reasons not to go. Dozens, even, off the top of my head. This world's full of tragedy. The celestial dragons have caused more of it than anyone could count. I'm just a North Blue Admiral, I can't fix all of it. If I do this, I'll probably get burned. If anyone finds out, no one will be able to protect me. As a Marine, I should already know, we serve the world government. We get angry, sure, but we learn to live with it. There's no reason to risk everything for a stranger, for a little girl I've never met. One wrong move, and everything I've built in the North Blue goes up in smoke. Yeah. Too many reasons not to go. He smiled. But there are 2 reasons why I will. Just 2. And they're enough to crush every reason not to. He spoke each word with icy clarity, voice sharp and unyielding, like cold nails hammered into the air. 1. The North Blue is my territory. I won't allow something like this to happen here. Not even if the one behind it is a celestial dragon. 2. That bastard's face was so disgusting, I had the urge to kill him. Darren's smile turned vicious. The kind of urge I can't suppress, no matter what. Chapter 32, The only hope in the hospital corridor. The 2 stood facing each other from afar. Outside the window, snowflakes drifted through the air. Yet Momonga felt the chill inside was far worse, cold to the bone. Darren's smile deepened, growing more defiant, even bordering on madness. You said this kind of thing has never happened before. Yes, it's true. It never has. But just because it's never happened doesn't mean it's impossible, and it certainly doesn't mean it's wrong. His tone suddenly turned cryptic. The meanings of 1 and 0. They couldn't be more different. The moment those words left his mouth, Momonga felt as though struck by lightning. His hands trembled slightly. A fear unlike anything he had ever felt gripped him, choking the breath from his lungs, nearly suffocating him. But in the very next moment, he clenched his fists tightly, lifted his head with determined eyes, and said through gritted teeth, I'm going with you. Darren smiled in satisfaction, as if that was exactly the answer he had been waiting for. But he refused without hesitation. No need. It's easier for me to act alone. Even if something really does happen to me, I trust you with the North Blue Marine Fleet. You stay here and keep watch over those 2. I'll be back soon. With that, Darren turned and walked away without a second thought. Only when Darren's silhouette had vanished at the far end of the corridor did Momonga, who had been standing motionless like a statue, finally let out a slow breath. He realized his back was soaked in cold sweat. After a moment of silence, he raised his hand in a solemn salute toward the now empty corridor. Even though there was no one there, Momonga subconsciously turned to look out the window. Snow blanketed the world in a heavy gloom. Dark clouds loomed on the horizon, lightning flashing, thunder rumbling, as if a monstrous storm was about to erupt. "The weather's changing," he murmured. Then he turned around, eyes quickly regaining their usual resolve. "You really are something else, Captain Darren," he said under his breath. His voice trembled slightly, but a genuine smile crept onto his lips. "As your adjutant, it's truly an honor." He clenched his fists. Darren was right. Going with him would do no good. With his own strength, he couldn't be of any help to Darren. But staying behind, maybe there was something he could do. 1 minute later, Darren, having left the hospital, arrived alone in the northern region of Basha Island. The area was a vast stretch of rolling mountains. Normally covered in dense green forest, the heavy snow had turned the entire landscape into a world of white. Confirming that no one was tracking him, Darren pulled a crumpled piece of white paper from his coat. Only half the paper remained, clearly torn. A vivre card. His own vivre card. Laying it flat in his palm, he could see it slowly drifting in a certain direction, as if pulled by some invisible force. Once the direction was clear, Darren tucked the vivre card away. It was a risky move, but Darren wasn't reckless. He hadn't climbed from the lowest rank of private to his current position of power on strength alone. Caution, foresight, strategy, analytical skill, he believed he was second to none in these areas. Back when he was first assigned the escort mission, he had already verified that all Cypher Pol agents escorting St. Zild's this time belonged to Cypher Pol 1 agent. They were mere intelligence operatives, not even close to the level of Cypher Pol 9 agent, who guarded Anai's lobby. In other words, the guards protecting St. Zild's didn't possess hockey. That was all he needed. As these thoughts flickered through his mind, faint arcs of electricity sparked between Darren's fingers. An invisible magnetic field surged outward from his body. The metal brace on his right wrist instantly melted, flowing like liquid metal as it stretched into a thin sheet. Roughly a meter long and less than half a meter wide, the front tapered into a triangle, its sleek form radiating a sense of speed. It looked like a silver-white hoverboard, floating steadily in midair. Darren stepped onto the board, knees bent, upper body leaning forward. The next instant, propelled by a roaring, surging magnetic force, the metal board blasted forward, launching the Marine captain at blistering speed. In a flash, he shattered the sound barrier, leaving behind deep sonic booms in his wake. In no time, he vanished into the dark thunderclouds, swallowed by lightning and storm, disappearing into the distant sky. At the same time, far off the coast of Basha Island, a luxurious ship bearing the flag of the world government sailed slowly across the sea. Aku. What friggin' weather! It's clearly midsummer, and it's snowing. This isn't the new world. On the deck, the celestial dragon St. Zild sneezed, pulled his ornate robes tighter around himself, and cursed under his breath. Under the gray sky, thick snowflakes drifted down, landing on the deck and masts of the ship. The vessel, already painted entirely in white, was now blanketed in a layer of silver frost. The icy sea breeze blew sharply against them, and the low temperature fogged up the glass dome St. Zild's used to shield himself from the outside air. St. Zild's Sama. According to the established course, if all goes as planned, the official ship will arrive at the Holy Land in 2 days. A Cypher Pol agent in a black suit walked over respectfully, dropped to one knee, and offered a soft mink coat with both hands. 12 members from the world government's Cypher Pol 1 agent division have been assigned to serve you throughout this return voyage. St. Zild's took the lavish-looking coat and draped it over his shoulders with visible displeasure. Why is it just Cypher Pol 1 agent? Where are the Cypher Pol 0 agents? Though every celestial dragon had their own personal guards, St. Zild's escort had been nearly wiped out during an encounter with the world destroyer, Burndy World. Within the world government's intelligence structure, Cypher Pol 0 agent stood at the top of the Cypher Pol hierarchy, with authority to mobilize agents from Cypher Pol 1 agent through Cypher Pol 9 agent. Given the threat he'd faced, it would have been reasonable for the Holy Land to send at least one Cypher Pol 0 agent to ensure his safety. Instead, they sent Cypher Pol 1 agent, an agency primarily tasked with intelligence gathering. The Cypher Pol 1 agent leader answered nervously, reporting, St. Zild Sama, the Cypher Pol 0 agent personnel are currently working with the Marines in a joint operation to hunt down the pirate Burndy World. Many of our combatants have been reassigned. For this return voyage, the Cypher Pol department has already conducted a full safety assessment. There will be no issues, please rest assured. Hearing this, St. Zild Sama gave an impatient nod. Although the Celestial Dragons technically had the authority to call on Cypher Pol 0 agent, that privilege was usually reserved for major events or moments of crisis. In normal circumstances, the true power to deploy Cypher Pol Zero agent lay in the hands of the Five Elders, the world government's highest authority. My lord, it's cold out. Please return to your cabin to rest, the Cypher Pol 1 agent leader suggested respectfully. Saint Zild's-sama waved him off. No. Take me to see my wife first. The Cypher Pol 1 agent nodded, turned, and led the way to a separate cabin. The interior was dark, filled with a musty stench of rot and dampness, and faintly laced with the metallic tang of blood. At the center of the room stood a cage used for slaves. A small girl sat inside, shackled at the wrists and ankles, her mouth gagged. She trembled. When she saw the celestial dragon enter, her teary, reddened eyes flared with defiance. She glared at him. What a pair of eyes! Saint Zild's heart pounded with excitement. This was the feeling. Most people, upon learning his identity, would grovel and tremble like lapdogs. It was boring. But this kind of stubborn stare, that's what made Conquest fun. Watching her slowly break down under torture, watching the light in her eyes fade away bit by bit. That process was the most delightful, the most thrilling thing in the world. Just a little longer. My lovely wife, just a little longer. Once we return to the Holy Land, we'll live a happy, fulfilling life together. He couldn't help but laugh aloud, the irritation from the cold weather completely forgotten, and stepped out of the cabin. His blood was surging, and he could barely contain himself. But how could a noble celestial dragon possibly defile himself by indulging in such pleasures in this filthy, low-class space? Besides, she was still dirty, covered in mud. She needed to be cleaned properly at the Holy Land. Otherwise, even he might end up reeking of lowliness. The cabin door shut again. In the darkness, the dim light swayed with the ship's motion, casting fragmented shadows across the walls. The little girl sat motionless. Fresh scrapes marked her knees and arms, likely from being dragged into the cage. Her small body curled up tightly in a corner, hidden in the shadows. No one noticed. Her tiny hands were clenched into fists. She was holding a piece of paper, tucked secretly in her palm. It was something the handsome marine brother had slipped to her when he bound her. She didn't know what it was. But for some reason, she hadn't let go of it. As if it could offer her protection, shelter. And in this pitch-black world, her only hope. Chapter 33, The way he looked at me was off. Remember to deliver the food on time. I can't have my beloved wife going hungry. After stepping out of the cabin holding the slave cage, Saint Zild's gave a haughty order to the Cypher Pol 1 agent members. Yes, Saint Zild's-sama. The Cypher Pol 1 agent members nodded respectfully. Oh, right, one more thing. Saint Zild's paused, then turned back. The highest-ranking marine in the North Blue. That Darren fellow. Cypher Pol 1 agent was momentarily stunned. Recalling the gift previously sent by the North Blue Admiral, he bowed and said, Are you thinking of promoting him, my lord? Darren, the top commander of the North Blue Marines, currently holds the rank of captain under Marine Headquarters. According to reliable intelligence, he's already been placed on Marine Headquarters' priority training list and granted admission to the Maniford Officer Training Camp. He's quite capable, his skills and vision are impressive. Under his command, the North Blue has seen significant improvements in both order and economic development. He's definitely worthy of promotion. Promotion? Saint Zild's-sama suddenly burst into laughter, as if he'd just heard the most absurd joke. He sneered. No. I meant, find a chance to kick him out of the Marines. Then kill him. The Cypher Pol 1 agent leader froze, momentarily unable to follow the twisted logic of the celestial dragon. Did that man offend you, my lord? Though celestial dragons had immense power and could decide a person's fate on a whim, Darren wasn't just anybody. Anyone granted a place in the Maniford Officer Training Camp was considered a top prospect by Marine Headquarters. Even for the world government, to rashly eliminate a key officer with full command over the North Blue Marines, someone with real authority, was no easy task. At the very least, they'd need a reason that held up on paper. Offend me? No. Saint Zild's let out a strange, raspy laugh. The Cypher Pol 1 agent member immediately dropped to one knee, trembling with fear. Then, may I ask what the reason is? Saint Zild's shot him a sideways glance, then, without warning, stomped on his head, slamming him into the floor and splitting his scalp open. Do I need a reason to make a decision? No, you don't. Seeing Saint Zild's-sama fly into a rage, the Cypher Pol 1 agent leader trembled violently, face pale. He didn't even dare wipe the blood from his face. Saint Zild's let out a cold snort. If I had to give a reason. His eyes narrowed, gaze filled with cruelty. He looked at me the wrong way. I hate the way he looks at me. Is that good enough? With those words, he walked into his private cabin. Unlike the quarters used to hold slaves, Saint Zild's personal cabin was spacious, brightly lit, and extravagantly decorated. Soft carpets covered the dry floor, and warm light glowed from ornate oil lamps. St. Zild's cast a glance toward the so-called gift sent by the North Blue Admiral. Large crates filled with gold and silver treasures were stacked high, filling the entire room. Their multicolored shine reflected off every surface, drenching the space in a dazzling golden hue. A look of satisfaction spread across the celestial dragon's face. He took off his mink coat and tossed it carelessly to the floor. Walking past the mounds of treasure, he approached a secret door at the far end of the cabin and unlocked it. The hidden door creaked open slowly. "Come out, my dear." St. Zild's licked the corner of his mouth. His desire surged uncontrollably, and in the depths of his narrow eyes, a violent, feverish red light flickered. Soon, a woman slowly crawled out from behind the secret door. She had a delicate face, but her hands and feet were bound in heavy shackles. Her expression was vacant and numb. Her pupils were dull and lifeless, and from her bright red lips, saliva dripped continuously. A twisted, maniacal grin spread across St. Zild's face as he began to laugh in a sick, deranged way. He casually pressed a button on the nearby gramophone. Soon, the soft, seductive sound of a saxophone began to fill the cabin. Outside the cabin, on the deck of the official ship. "Boss, are you okay?" The Cypher Pol 1 agent members looked at the blood on their leader's face and couldn't help but ask. "It's nothing. To be disciplined by St. Zild-sama is an honor." The Cypher Pol 1 agent leader smiled proudly. He wiped the blood from his face, pulled out a pack of cigarettes, handed one to each of his men, and lit one for himself. Phew. The Cypher Pol 1 agent members leaned against the ship's railing, exhaling thick clouds of smoke, wearing relaxed expressions. They all enjoyed this feeling. The rich smoke of premium tobacco, mixed with the damp chill of the snow-laden air, filled their lungs, peaceful and satisfying. Standing atop this luxurious, exalted government vessel, gazing out over the boundless sea, it felt as if the whole world lay beneath their feet. Every time they arrived at an island, the stupid, low-born commoners would kneel before their masters, looking up at them with fear and trembling. That feeling gave them the illusion of nobility. This was the kind of life only men like them, worthy enough to serve the gods, deserved to enjoy. At that moment, the smooth, indulgent sound of a saxophone began to drift faintly from within the cabin. Mixed within it were the manic laughter of a celestial dragon, the crack of a whip, and the anguished cries of a woman. Hearing the familiar tune, a trace of envy flashed across the eyes of the Cypher Pol 1 agent members. St. Zild-sama has started again. I wonder if he'll be generous enough to gift us his toy after he's done this time? He. As if remembering something worth savoring, a knowing grin appeared on each of their faces. You bunch of degenerates. The Cypher Pol 1 agent leader shook his head with a wry smile, helpless as he looked at his men. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly froze. Because he realized his subordinates were all staring behind him, eyes wide with terror. A chill crept up his spine. The Cypher Pol 1 agent leader turned around, his eyes slowly widening. In front of the Grand Government vessel, a man stood suspended midair on a floating metal board. The sea breeze whipped through his wide, white cape as snow fell all around. He held a finger to his lips. Smiling. Radiating killing intent. SHH. Chapter 34, Farewell. The saxophone's melody gradually reached its peak. The wide-ranging notes surged like the furious waves of the sea, rising, falling, and crashing with power. Inside the cabin, St. Zild danced wildly, thrashing his iron whip without restraint. His face twisted into a crazed, ecstatic grin, eyes gleaming with madness. He stomped in rhythm with the music, the sound of each lash weaving perfectly with the passionate and swelling saxophone. Pa! Snap! Snap! The whip cracked mercilessly across tender flesh, and the woman clenched her teeth, her body already covered in dense, bloody welts. Searing pain radiated from her wounds, but she didn't dare scream. She just kept biting down, forcing a strained, submissive smile to remain on her lovely face. No. No. That look in your eyes, it's wrong. St. Zild suddenly roared in fury, swinging the gem-studded whip even harder. You're supposed to glare at me with defiance. You're supposed to hate me. Loathe me. Think. I killed your father. I killed your mother. Now remember it all. Crack. The whip sliced down, tearing a fresh gash across the woman's chest. She let out a muffled groan, her blood-soaked body collapsing to the floor, gasping raggedly for air. But her eyes grew even more submissive, even more yielding. She knew too well, showing hatred would only inflame the celestial dragon's twisted lust. Submission, on the other hand, would sometimes cause him to lose interest and move on. Damn it. Damn it all. St. Zild stormed forward and slapped her across the face with his pudgy, greasy hand. Her body flew 2 meters back. Her cheek visibly swelled, blood trickling from the corner of her lips, long black hair splayed in a tangled mess. What a bore. He cursed, panting with rage that only worsened the more he thought about it. Without hesitation, he drew the golden pistol at his waist, clicked off the safety, and pressed it against her bloodied forehead. He had planned to spare her, if she pleased him. But now, there was no need. The noble gods had no reason to show mercy to these filthy, low-born insects. He'd already found his next exquisite toy anyway, hadn't he? Thinking that, Saint Zild's let out another cruel, twisted laugh. "My apologies, my beloved wife," he said coldly, looking down at his 17th wife, finger tightening on the trigger. "Goodbye." But just then, Saint Zild suddenly noticed her pupil shrink. Her once vacant expression gained clarity. She was staring past him. Straight behind him. Saint Zild's frowned. He smelled something strange. A scent he knew all too well. Blood. Thick, suffocating blood. And then, from behind him, came the creaking sound of a door slowly opening. Saint Zild's turned his head toward the cabin door, puzzled. It was being pushed open. From the gap beneath it, a stream of crimson blood crept across the floor. As the door swung fully open, a blast of snow-laden wind howled into the cabin. There stood a tall figure, soaked in blood. Snowflakes clung to his short black hair. A broad white cloak billowed behind him, carrying with it a thick, metallic scent of death. Saint Zild's eyes widened in shock, and he couldn't help but cry out, "It's you." He stared hard at Darren, who stood at the cabin doorway. From the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of the horrifying scene on the deck outside. Corpses in black suits hung suspended in the air. The 12 Cypher Pol agents assigned to the escort were all dead, lifeless bodies pierced through by rusted steel, sprawled in twisted, chaotic positions. They hung in the wind and snow like shredded rags. Blood dripped steadily from them, dyeing the entire deck of vivid red. Saint Zild's pupil shrank to pinpoints. This guy. He actually killed my men? Could it be? In that instant, an overwhelming chill surged from the soles of his feet, rushing up his spine to his head, sending shivers through his scalp. Admiral of the North Blue, Supreme Commander of the North Blue Marines, Captain Darren of Marine Headquarters, reporting into Saint Zild's Sama. Standing in the doorway, Darren narrowed his eyes, bowed slightly, and smiled. Bang! The golden pistol spat fire. The bullet struck Darren squarely in the forehead, but instead of piercing through, it let out a metallic clang and bounced off, scattering sparks. "Seems like your excellency has a decent aim." Darren smiled and stepped forward. You. Saint Zild's Sama was shaken to the core. Seeing that the shot had no effect, he involuntarily stepped back twice. "Darren, what are you trying to do?" "What am I trying to do?" "Now that's a good question." Darren gave a short chuckle, paused as if in thought, then winked at him. "What do you think, Saint Zild's Sama?" Saint Zild's Sama froze, then flew into a rage. "Whatever it is you're planning, you've already offended me. You must die." As the Marine captain drew closer, he squeezed the trigger frantically. Bang 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 bang. Bullet after bullet struck Darren's body, only to ricochet off harmlessly, leaving pockmarks on the cabin walls and floor. After emptying several shots, Saint Zild stared in disbelief at the man now standing right in front of him. "You!" Darren smacked him hard across the face. The blow shattered the glass dome he wore, sending shards slicing into his face as blood streamed out. Under Darren's terrifying strength, Saint Zild's pig-like face twisted grotesquely. His body was sent flying, spinning several meters through the air before slamming into the cabin wall. Bang! The wooden plank split apart on impact. Saint Zild's let out a miserable howl. Bloodshot eyes full of venom glared at Darren as he pointed a trembling finger. "You filthy, shhkk." 2 iron bars suddenly shot out from the bottom of the cabin, twisting up like tree roots and wrapping around the celestial dragon's arms. They pierced clean through his pudgy hands and nailed him firmly to the wall. "Ah!" Saint Zild screamed like a pig being slaughtered. Chapter 35, The Rules of the North Blue. The celestial dragons' miserable screams resounded throughout the world government official ship at that moment. In the cabin, the woman, covered in whip marks and blood, lay in a pool of blood, staring blankly at the screaming god, her mind a blank. The Marines actually injured a celestial dragons. No. He tried to kill a celestial dragons. Is he crazy? Or is he just suicidal? Any action that offends the celestial dragons, no matter who the perpetrator, will invite the world government's furious retaliation, and even the Navy's admiral will be mobilized for the task. This is a restricted area that no one on the sea can surpass. "You're too noisy," said Darren, frowning and waving his hand impatiently. With this movement, 2 steel bars rose from the cabin floor and whistled out, piercing the feet of Saint Zild like sharp blades and nailing them to the wall. Dripping blood kept gushing from his pierced hands and feet, dripping onto the ground and pooling into a shocking pool of blood in less than a few seconds. "You're dead. Darren." The unbearable pain made Saint Zild scream again, and he almost fainted from the pain. He was a celestial dragon born on top of a mountain, a god in this world, and a descendant of the Creator. He had been pampered since childhood, and had never even bumped into anything, let alone suffered such a serious injury. I thought the blood of a god would be golden. I never imagined he was no different from ordinary people. In that case, the celestial dragons aren't gods either. Darren said with a smile,